Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Scion Fanfics. Back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What if Deku had Shadow Mind Quirk? Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Midoriya Izuku. There was nothing incredibly remarkable about him. Absolutely nothing stood out. He was wholly and completely forgettable to most and an annoyance to the ones who bothered to see him. He wasn't thought of or pondered like other peers and students would be. No one cared about him or his future or the life that he could lead. He was the plain and average living in a unique and interesting society. You see, Midoriya Izuku is a young 15-year-old boy with green hair, green eyes, a lean build, and had a developed tan from being out at the beach all summer. The most memorable thing about the kid wasn't his splatter of freckles taking over his nose and cheeks or his wild and curly hair. Not at all. To be completely honest, the only thing people tended to remember about this boy was the fact that he was nothing special and could never offer the world anything special, all because he was missing a quirk. Around 200 years ago or so, superpowers became a real thing, not just something shown in comics and TV shows. The first recorded superpower was the golden baby, and the baby was born, literally glowing a soft golden light. Of course, there were others before this baby, but no one had done any research into mental-based superpowers until about 20 years after these superpowers came in. And currently, 200 years after the first quirk had been recorded, Midoriya Izuku is left standing in a modernized Japan, surrounded by millions of people who all possessed some random powers that scientists still can't explain beyond the words, evolution, and he was found to be lacking. These superpowers, these quirks, took over any existing hierarchies in the world, and suddenly it was frowned upon to not have some innate ability to write at a faster rate than average or be able to change their eye colors based on their mood. The best part about all of this, these quirks usually came in around the age of 4. This means that Midoriya Izuku had been told, since he was 4, that he physically could not amount to anything compared to the other, better, quirked people out there. But this was all normal. Sure, it wasn't okay, but it was normal. And, because he had been told about his innate worthlessness since he could remember, he didn't expect people to notice when he allowed himself to be different. He expected no one to realize that he had learned how to meld into the background, even more so than he already does. He knew no one would actually care to watch him as his gaze became sharper and more calculating over the years, much more guarded than before. And he was certain that no one would allow themselves to get close enough to him to notice that he had begun gaining muscle a few years ago when he was painfully reminded of the fact that heroes needed to have physical strength on top of growing their minds. The others, peers and adults alike, remained blissfully unaware of how quick his reaction time had gotten. How developed his situational awareness was at this point. They had no idea he spent many of his days on a trash beach, looking through the metals and creating his own support items from scratch. They didn't know he had trained himself with knives and metal poles and anything else he could brandish himself with. No one knew he could take them out in less than a few minutes, no matter their quirk or person. And that was all Izuku could ever hope for. You see, for any quirkless person, there are many rules that they need to follow if they want to make it to adulthood, living through this world without an assigned special ability. Many rules are in place to ensure their survival. But 3 rules can sum most of them up or, at least, give any quirkless person a starting chance to learn the rest of them. Never stand out. This should be obvious. And it was an obvious concept for Izuku. He had heard horror stories of other quirkless kids standing in the way of bullies or abusers and dying by their hand while everyone around them chalked it up to them being weaker, both physically and mentally. Granted, Izuku never let himself fade too far out from his classmates' memories. The first time he tried to go completely under the radar, the bullying for the useless and weaker quirks ticked up, and Izuku, well, if anyone had looked past his quirklessness, they wouldn't have been able to deny his golden and heroic heart. So he slid under the radar as much as he could afford to. His grades stayed consistent and were never anything noteworthy. He didn't participate in any after-school clubs. He made absolutely sure that everyone thought that he had no after-school activities. He only ever stepped in front of bullies but never fought back. He couldn't let himself become involved in a fight that was noteworthy, after all. This rule is important. It could be the very thing that saves your life. So long as people have a skewed perception of your worth, you're as safe as you can get. Learn your surroundings. To be quirkless means you'll have to know more. Hear more. See more. This rule ensured a quirkless person's survival. To know your situation and surroundings meant you knew more than your opponent. To know which hits to dodge and which hits to take, you've ensured another tomorrow for yourself. And Izuku had mastered the art of learning early on. He had learned the best route to take to school, whether that was through the city's alleyways or along the same route as his main bully, Bakugo. He knew how to silence his footsteps. He knew when he couldn't afford to. He knew how to come across as an innocent and forgettable figure throughout someone's life. He figured out quickly which routes and alleyways he could use to escape after school let out and the darkest way to get away from certain enthusiastic bullies. He had learned about the skill of situational awareness almost as soon as he was diagnosed. Of course, it took many, many years of beatings and mockings and scorns thrown his way to find the sweet balance of knowing when or if he should make a move. But he had learned. He had learned the importance of this rule, if only to ensure another tomorrow. Just as you should. Do not let them know. This rule could seem a bit vague, but that's exactly the point of this rule. No one is meant to know. Of course, people can't just hide their quirklessness. So many shoes are customized and tailored for different quirk types, making them slimmer or longer or whatever. There was only one brand of shoe that had a consistent and stable line of shoes that would fit them. And, because of how harsh hate crimes were against the ones who could afford to wear mutant-marketed shoes or other quirk-marketed shoes, most of the quirkless population stuck with the one red high-top shoe they could wear. So, this rule isn't in reference to a person's lack of quirk. Not at all. This rule is for your mind. Despite what humanity has warped themselves into believing, your brain is your best and biggest asset that needs to be used to the fullest extent. To be able to follow along with the other rules given, people need to know what to do with that information and learn how to follow them quickly. Even people with quirks can't be expected to use their gifts without first learning what to do, how to activate it, its drawbacks, requirements and more. Humans, as a species, are reliant on their brains. And the quirkless? They're even more so. They turn their minds into weapons throughout their lifetime, no matter if they're aware of it or not. The ones that aren't aware of this keep their heads down and try harder to please the world around them, even as it spits at their feet. But the ones who know what they've created? What they've been able to do to their minds? They profit, to put it simply. They too keep their heads down and voices lowered, but never do they underestimate themselves or others. Because they know. And a quirkless person who knows is dangerous. Quirk people have never understood this because they've done so well with convincing themselves that because they're the ones with natural-born gifts, the ones without couldn't possibly be more dangerous than them. And it's okay if you felt the same once upon a time in your life. Because many seem to forget an important fact. One that will be the reason for so many of their downfalls. One that could be the reason for your salvation. Quirk people have obvious skill sets. No one could hope to know what a quirkless was capable of. Until it was too late. Now, you may be wondering to yourself why you even care to know this. These rules, these guidelines that make up a person's livelihood. You may not fully understand why this was laid out before you. And that's okay. That's exactly why this has been laid out before you. Because a small basis of understanding will be your saving grace as you continue on. You'll need to understand why things are happening, and sometimes you may never truly grasp just why the quirkless are avoided and hated so much. But at least you know the rules. And with that, I implore you to remember that your quirklessness makes you more than nothing, even when society believes differently. Human beings intrinsically cannot be worthless when all life has value. And because of that fact and that fact alone, you are dangerous. So remember the last rule as you read on and discover more and more about this society through the eyes of our walking catalyst, the one who started a revolution in our honor. The one who should be praised in history books but won't, all because of a genetic code and the shadows that followed him. For your own safety and the safety of many others. Do not let them know you're expelled. To say that Izuku was disappointed would be an understatement. Perhaps, he could even go as far as to say it was the understatement of the century. He had walked into UA High this morning with high hopes and big dreams. Only to get shut down as soon as they had finished a randomized and completely unnecessary quirk assessment test on the first day, hardly lasting in the hero course until noon. Izuku knew, of course he knew, that he should have expected something like this to happen. In fact, he did expect something like this to happen. He should have known UA would only allow the quirkless onto their campus so long as they stayed in their place. He should have been completely prepared for this to happen to him as soon as he had gotten his acceptance letter. Izuku knew all too well that he was not welcomed in the heroics industry, no matter how many robots he took down or rescue points he racked up. He had known this all his life. He had been explicitly told over and over again how he could never amount to anything in the heroics industry. His own mother had cried for him any time he mentioned heroes when he was young. His bullies at school enjoyed mocking him for daring to think that he could ever compare to the pro heroes out there. His teachers had, subtly, suggested only going into general education programs, since anything else would be far too much for a quirkless to handle. He supposed he hadn't realized that their heroes, his heroes, felt the same. And, of course it hurt. His mother had only started becoming outwardly supportive of his dream sometime after they discussed his hero analysis notebooks when he was a few years younger. She had finally started believing in the future that he wanted to create for himself and other kids like him. He had just started talking to her about the training he had been doing on the beach, ever since his first year of middle school. He spoke for hours about the blueprints and analysis he had written and drawn out. He showed her a few of his inventions made purely from trash and scrap and determination. He told her about the way he had learned parkour and how he had taken up yoga. He talked about the self-defense and boxing videos he learned from and even started going on morning runs with her. They would run past the clean beach and she would smile softly when she saw the ocean and white sand, ruffling his hair a bit before they turned around and made their way back to the house. He also knew that his mother's acceptance is what pushed his father to be more receptive to his dream. Hisashi may have taken a very long job in America, but Izuku knew he loved them very much. Hisashi stayed as involved in Izuku's life as much as he could, through phone calls and silly texts, or long FaceTimes and ridiculous articles sent back and forth. Which meant Izuku noticed when Hisashi started opening up about heroics and speaking about the industry like Izuku had already made it. They discussed the politics behind it all and Hisashi pushed Izuku to dig deeper and find more about Japan's heroes. Hisashi had done his best to prepare Izuku and be supportive in his own way for his heroic dream. So, knowing all of that, it just made this rash decision hurt even worse than it already did. Because his only supporters would feel defeated and overwhelmed with emotions and hurt and frustration, just as he was tempted to feel right now. And Izuku knew it was a rash decision. Aizawa-san had made that perfectly clear as soon as he uttered those two words towards Izuku after the little test class 1A had finished. So he asked, "Did this test only test our quirk abilities?" Aizawa-san seemed to smirk at him and Izuku fought the lump in his throat as understanding dawned upon him. It seemed to burn as he swallowed and he did his best to ignore the students around him who started to whisper. He kept his eyes on Aizawa-san, even as the rest of the students filed back into the locker rooms to change and grab their things once their teacher was finished with his meaningless game. It was the only way he could ignore the glare coming from Bakugo and the worried whispers from his friendly classmates. And, he may have been doing his best to ignore the stinging sensation building in his eyes as well. Once the last of Class 1A had gone into the building, Aizawa-san gestured lazily with his hand and spun on his heel. He walked briskly towards a different entrance and Izuku grinded his teeth before hurrying to follow the man. He felt like he was being paraded around the whole school as they walked through the hallways filled with other UA students, all staring at Aizawa-san, who was marching Izuku around like he was a dead man. Eventually, the pair turned around a corner and walked into the teacher's lounge. Izuku kept his eyes forward and did his absolute best to avoid looking anything but dejected at that moment. It wouldn't do him any good to express how he actually felt about this whole stunt. But the pity and worry in the other teacher's eyes did Izuku's rage no favors as they walked through the lounge area and towards the back hallway that was lined with offices. Dramatically, Aizawa-san opened the second-to-last door and waltzed in before sliding into the desk chair. Izuku took a look at the much smaller, much more uncomfortable chair in the office and refrained from rolling his eyes as he sat down across from his former teacher. Of course this man would be the one to attempt his hand at mind games. A few quiet moments passed where the pair just sat there in the awkward silence, staring at one another before Aizawa-san cleared his throat and went rifling through his desk drawer. Izuku idly wondered what the man was even thinking. He had marched Izuku to a space he was clearly comfortable in like he was a man on death row. And maybe some part of him is. This, after all, was the only school that would take Quirkless applicants, barring the online courses, and the only school that allowed him into their heroics department. Maybe it was because of this fact that Izuku couldn't bring himself to play the role of Deku at that moment. Maybe he was in shock over the whole thing. He couldn't bring himself to wonder for too long. Couldn't analyze the issue comfortably while he was watching every slight movement from Aizawa-san, half expecting something worse to happen to him now that they were behind closed doors. Aizawa-san cleared his throat and Izuku snapped his eyes from where they had drifted over to the bookshelves in the office, mentally berating himself for getting lost inside his own thoughts. This is the transfer paperwork you will need to complete for your removal from the heroics course and your entrance into general education. Aizawa-san said, sliding over the papers. Izuku just looked at the man. Aizawa seemed to feel no remorse or worry over this entire situation. He did not care in the slightest about what he had just done. To be completely honest, Aizawa-san looked like he expected Izuku to be rolling over and thanking him for the opportunity to continue studying at UA, even though he could never achieve his dream. The man looked as if he expected Izuku to start rambling on about how grateful he was that he was even welcome at such a prestigious school such as UA. But he wasn't. Aizawa-san had made it clear he wasn't welcome here. He wasn't welcome in any area of this school. Izuku shot Aizawa an incredulous look as he continued on. Before you leave, I go through this process every year, and you are permitted to get everything off your chest now. This is your one chance. Izuku almost muttered, every year, under his breath before refrained from doing such a thing, since he's not entirely sure how receptive the man would be with Izuku judging his teaching methods. Even though they don't seem to be effective teaching methods. But whatever. He just can't believe he was in this situation right now. The expulsion part he understands. No one in Japan seemed to believe that the Quirkless could help out in heroics. No, that wasn't it. He just cannot believe he was stuck in a stuffy office with this mildly annoying, slightly smelly hobo of a pro-hero and teacher, and was being promoted to air out his grievances or forever hold his peace. Apparently, Izuku was supposed to forget about the casual and callous dismissal of his heroic dreams and lifelong efforts being thrown out the door, stomped on, and lit on fire. So, because of this, Izuku pondered to himself, almost raising an eyebrow when Aizawa-san seemed thrown off by the deep consideration Izuku put into the offer. It was as if he hadn't expected Izuku to put some thought into the grievances he had about this entire situation. Eventually, a few seconds later, Izuku simply shrugged and asked, why? You will not get far in this profession, Midoriya. Aizawa-san said bluntly, leaning forward to rest his forearms on his desk. Even if you had the makings of a pro-hero, which is highly improbable, you would never officially be one by the Hero Commission standards. I refuse to teach a pipe dream. Yes. Izuku dismissed those words with a wave of his hand and almost rolled his eyes as he sighed. But why? A quirk is required to gain a pro-hero license and all necessary certifications that come along with that title. Aizawa sighed, seemingly more exasperated with this conversation than Izuku was. But Izuku was already well aware of the registration issue he would face. He knew a quirk was required for the title. So Izuku calmly said, I see you before taking the transfer papers and standing. He needed to leave before he screamed his entire 5-year plan to his former teacher that seemed to hold something against him for trying. Before Aizawa-san could ask what he was doing or where he was going, Izuku simply said, I suggest you look into Akane Hanako vs. Muzutafu Board of Education before you continue making these rash decisions, and walked out the door. He ignored the curious looks the other teachers had sent his way as he left. He made his way to the principal's office and informed the stoat of his official resignation from the school. The stoat was, interestingly enough, intrigued by the way Izuku seemed to be handling the expulsion. The principal proceeded to assure him there wouldn't officially be a black mark on his record and the in-school expulsion wouldn't affect his transfers. After he finally received the correct papers to officially leave UA, his dream school, he headed back home so he and his mother could fill these out and plan out some next steps. On the way home, he smiled to himself as he thought about the case that he had referred Eraserhead to look into. It wasn't an old one. It's only been 4 or 5 years since it happened. A quirkless girl wanted to get into the best business course in Japan, but she had been barred from entering, all because UA required a quirk control test to be submitted along with their applications, like all the other schools require. After a meeting with the principal, she had been able to enter, only for the Board of Education to shut her down. Which leads to the case. She had fought tooth and nail against them as she defended herself and her intelligence in the court of law. It was honestly laughable at how eye-opening the case had been for other people around Japan. No one thought of the Quirkless as intelligent or meaningful. And here this girl was, not any older than 15, shoving that fact down their throats, although they looked at her as if she was an exception to the Quirkless population. She fought to prove her own autonomy in a courtroom for several months before the board decided that they could deal with a Quirkless in one of their schools and finally got rid of the quirk control test. It was that easy. And Izuku wasn't really wanting his own court case or monumental change to happen all because of his dreams. But he wouldn't complain if it happened. Because he knew how easy it could be to change a hero's quirk registration to a hero's focus. Their licenses don't say which type of hero they are, just daylight or underground, their name, and their quirk, nor do they provide any context for where their actual skill set lies, intelligence, infiltration, etc. So many people would actually benefit from the change if Izuku had any say in it. He knew what he would be fighting against when he signed up to be a hero. He knew exactly what he would be fighting against and for. That's why his dream wasn't dead. Even after being barred from his best legal chance at being a pro-hero, he knew he could still help people. After all, no one said that a hero had to be pro. Izuku finally got home and placed his dismissal papers at the coffee table before walking into his room and grabbing his laptop, coming back out to sit on the couch and start some tea for himself. His mother wouldn't be home for at least 3 more hours and he needed to get everything in order. He also needed to tell her about his plans. The plans that he hadn't ever told anyone about until now. Now that they were necessary. Because, as a Quirkless, as a mere human being, you cannot go through life with only one plan and hope that it works out for yourself. Even if that plan had backup plans, those backups mean nothing when the original plan was inevitably thrown away by someone else. Plans could not account for every failure or dismissal, but an excess of plans never hurt anyone. And, well, here's the thing, Izuku had always been hyper-aware of the amount of people that hated him for something out of his control. He knew how hard his peers and teachers had tried to deter him from becoming a hero in any sense of the word. He had the scars to prove it, both mental and physical. He was well aware of how easily someone who held authority could throw his dream away if he never played the correct part or said the correct thing. Which is why half of his personality was part of the first plan he had ever created. Deku. That was why Deku was so important. Deku was a front. An airtight alibi. The perfect plan. Deku was something that he used to please the others as he hid himself away and planned out his future movements. Deku helped him look like there was nothing more to him other than his quirklessness and a wasted opportunity. Deku helped him hide and stand out. Deku took over Midoriya Izuku at school and was the only name that came to mind when his peers and teachers thought about him. Deku was his earliest masterpiece, his artwork that had taken him years to tweak and perfect as he learned more. Izuku had created the persona to help him fly under the radar, but he also did this in order to follow a rule. It was an important rule that he and other Quirkless alike follow for their own benefit. Never outshine the master. This rule seems self-explanatory, doesn't it? The rule instructed others like him to always make those above him feel comfortably superior. Anyone inherently worth less than them needed to remember their place within the shadows of society. But this rule also went a bit deeper than that. Sure, the people at the top, the ones with power, should feel comfortable in their position. But these rules ask you to ensure that no one below them could possibly be better. This rule asks you to manage from the shadows. Let's look at an example. A young girl works at an office as the assistant for the head manager. This manager isn't nice or particularly amazing at their job. But she is. She plays diplomat between employees and the manager. She works and edits the final products this manager sends out. She is everything that the company needs, but her worth is hidden. The employees follow her lead, the outside contacts are signed under her guidance, but the face of the company, this manager, remains ahead of her. The manager is ahead of her in title only. Never outshine the master is the rule, but the second half explains, and live comfortably in the darkness. This assistant, the girl, is living comfortably within the darkness and never outshines the manager in any capacity. And she has perfected this art of blending in, the art of working underground. Now, if you're not someone quirkless but live with similar rules, maybe you possess a weak or undesirable quirk, you'll understand the need to please and impress your superiors. But with that need, that desire to win some semblance of affection and attention, do not go too far in displaying your talents or you will accomplish the opposite reaction. You will inspire fear and insecurity within the minds of anyone who feels that they're superior to you. It is important, and usually life-saving, to make them appear more brilliant and powerful than they are. For instance, the girl from the previous example never went too far with her reach. Her manager always knew he was the superior, even when she would slip in a few of her final products from time to time and impress the manager by greeting and introducing high society friends to him. She always remained under him with her status and behavior. Of course, Midoriya Izuku didn't always follow that beautiful rule. He had made it into the heroics course and was prepared to drop the Deku persona as soon as he had gotten there, ready to completely rewrite how he followed that rule and give himself new boundaries to adhere to. But now he's back in the real world, far away from the heroes that walk the halls of UA, so he'll make do with what he can. He'll salvage what pieces of the Deku persona that he needs and work around the downfalls. Izuku, in his excitement to shed the persona that has dictated his whole life, meticulously planned out how he could get his previous schools to essentially forget about his existence and attendance, making it easier for him to rid himself of that Deku creation. He made it look like he had done nothing of importance, his entire schooling career as mundane and average as it could be. And when the teachers forgot about him, he was no longer pointed out in the middle of class for mumbling. They no longer slapped him with long and meaningless detentions when he came into class late because a few classmates had gotten a hold of him before school started. He had manipulated the background that they so desperately needed him to live in, if only so they could forget that there was a blemish in their otherwise perfect world. So he planned. And planned and planned and planned some more. And Izuku quickly found that he was relatively good at planning. Anything with a set schedule that he can manage to stick to gets planned out to the fullest. His workout plans and diets were thorough. His analysis for and against other people, civilians, heroes, and villains alike were borderline obsessive. And his plans for the future? For his future? They accounted for every and any possible scenario he could think of. He had planned every single minute once he learned just how crucial it would be for his survival in this world. This being said, his plans weren't all that complicated. Not at all. Plan A, B, and C went through bare minimum details because he did not want to become over-reliant on just one plan, nor did he want his movements to become too predictable. Thus, variants such as Plans A-12 or B-02 were created. That's where his analysis and planning hid themselves. Those were the real treasures. And so he spent the rest of his time before his mother came home, and he would need to call his father to tell him what had happened by looking through a few different online high school programs he had looked into a few months back, just in case something like this happened and UA only advertised their inclusivity and didn't actually follow through with it. There were two that seemed relatively normal enough, and they only required him to come in for midterms and finals. The last one, however, was catching his attention. This one allowed their students to work at their own pace and, although there were many systems students were required to use when testing out of a subject, they were a very free school. Izuku would even be able to take optional courses if his previous grades proved that he could handle the workload, nearly operating like an online university. He grinned to himself as he started writing in his notebook about all the things that would need to get around and ready for his late registration and subsequent transfer. He smiled to himself as he worked through their website and found everything that he would need, writing it down so he could account for it all with his newer plans while setting aside his outline for his mother to review later on, working towards his new future. Sometime around when Izuku had turned 8, his father overseas had to cut down on the amount of money he sent over to them. It wasn't his fault. The company was downsizing and Hisashi was locked into a contract that made it impossible to leave, even though they cut into his pay. And, for a woman who was a single mother to a quirkless child living in Japan, this was devastating news for the family. Inko was forced to work long, grueling hours for a variety of different jobs. The best source of income came from her nursing job, but even then, they still gave her unpredictable and long hours, forcing her to compensate for that with other odd jobs so she could keep earning enough money for them. This isn't to say that they were struggling too hard. Inko had gotten another job fairly quickly so they wouldn't feel too many effects from the decrease in income. Financially, everything was steady enough, and Izuku had agreed that it would be in their best interest to stop giving him an allowance for the time being. He only had to ask if he wanted something, and Inko would give the world to him if he so much as hinted about wanting it. The area that the two Midoriyas were forced to struggle with weren't financial at all. But as Inko stayed out of the house more and more while the bullying and burns and bruises started ticking up, they suffered emotionally. Izuku wasn't about to just steal hugs from his mother whenever he wanted to anymore. Physical touch was a luxury they couldn't afford with their opposing schedules half the time. Izuku was taught how to make simple meals in the kitchen when his mother had the time so he wouldn't be waiting on her, since both of her bosses enjoyed giving her overtime. Inko was forced to work for her baby without ever seeing him. She had to deal with demanding bosses and entitled customers all day and night. That weighed on her. The glances and derogatory curses under her boss's breath that she was subjected to. The way that they threw her on the schedule with no care for her personal life or prior promises she had made. But she would never blame Izuku for what she was dealing with. She wouldn't even dare to blame Hisashi either. It wasn't Izuku's fault that the society he was born into grew to hate him and scorn him and anyone associated with him. It would never be his fault for having to shyly ask how to use their washer and dryer because Inko hadn't been home enough to help him with their basic chores around the house. So, Inko grew to blame society. It was dangerous, she knew, that she held a small amount of distrust and wariness towards everyone she interacted with in the outside world. She knew that one wrong step would lead her down the hole of paranoia, which would only serve to be detrimental for her son as he grew older. And then, one day, she came home early from one of her odd shifts and found her son in the bathroom, crying as he cleaned and bandaged a burn on his bicep. As she took a hold of his arm and let him cry into her chest, her distrust and rage itched across her mind. Even as she cleaned the burn, and listened to the heartbreaking story of an upperclassman with a fire quirk who had heard about him and burned him, she held him tightly. She didn't make the mistake of apologizing to him over and over again like she had done that night after Izuku's diagnosis. She knew she should have sat him down the day after and explained that she was apologizing for his loss of opportunities and innocence, not for the loss of his dream. So she made it up to him by letting him cry out his pain and frustrations into her chest, waited until he was calmed down enough and started explaining a few things. Inko spent that night explaining to Izuku the rules for the Quirkless. Obviously she didn't know all of them. But she had a Quirkless grandmother growing up, so she knew enough to keep her son safe until he could learn more rules for his survival. Because she knew just how important it was for her son to learn the rules for the Quirkless now. She had thought, originally, that he would be semi-okay at school. Sure, kids could be mean, but she didn't expect to ever find her son in the bathroom, trying to figure out how to properly handle burn cream and bandages. And, while it broke her heart, she taught him the rules. And then Izuku showed her his notes. Of course, when he was younger he had always enjoyed figuring out heroes and the way that they won fights. He was always intrigued by their quirks and how they used them. So imagine her surprise when the notebook was full of notes about his peers and teachers. She read through it all, only pausing once to read carefully through young Katsuki's page. Her son had written too many ways to avoid and dodge the other boy to make her feel comfortable. But she continued reading. It was a goldmine of information. So they talked. And Izuku explained just how easy it was for him to think of things like this. He told her how much it scared him because aren't heroes supposed to save the day with a smile? Because doesn't information gathering for his own survival seem villainous? Inko doesn't have to tell you how quickly that train of thought was shut down. After that fateful day, Inko did her best to express her pride every time Izuku came home. Because that meant he had followed the rules for yet another day and ensured himself a new tomorrow. And, for a young child such as Izuku, he didn't fully understand why following the rules his mother gave him helped him at school. He thought the use of the word survival was too strong. He thought that it might have been paranoia that caused both her to explain them to him and for him to follow them. But he followed them. And little by little, his school life seemed to get easier. Which made him more worried and scared and angry than he had ever felt. Why did he have to follow rules that suppressed most of his personality in order to live semi-comfortably? Why was he the one who was stuck being worthless? Who decided that he was going to be worthless as soon as he turned 4? And so, he spent his time outside of school researching. Throwing his mind into working over some new concept so he wouldn't have to think about anything else. Turns out, Izuku loves dissecting things. He was always very detail-oriented, even as a kid, and his notes showed that. Izuku could go through anything and find out what happened. Reverse engineering lamps became a favorite hobby, and eventually, Izuku learned he could essentially reverse engineer quirks as he analyzed them. After Inko started learning how to decode her son's muttering and spent her time learning what he had to say about heroes and quirks, Inko decided to play around with her own quirk, letting Izuku use her as a test subject for his burning questions he would never dare to ask anyone outside of the house. Inko, for as long as she could remember, had always thought of her quirk as simple. Nothing was wrong with simple, nor did it worry her to possess a weaker telekinesis quirk. She knew her passions in life had nothing to do with her quirk, and her parents taught her to find her self-worth through herself, not her quirk. So letting Izuku worry himself over her quirk fascinated her. She had never thought of her quirk as something to worry and obsess over. It was nothing special when their neighbor down the street could create bricks out of dirt and the young girl who just moved in could heal small injuries with the food she cooked. But watching her son dedicated an entire notebook for her quirk and its capabilities made her think twice about what she could do. Her son had opened a million possibilities when they worked through a few light tests before they experimented with Inko's ability to lift the couch. When Inko had expressed that she wasn't surprised the couch only moved a few inches because her telekinesis was weak, Izuku had said, "Any form of telekinesis is far from weak, Mom. A quirk is a muscle, and if you want to see improvement, you need to work that muscle." After that, Inko started working her quirk, little by little, every day. She was curious to see what could happen. A few days afterwards, picking up a spoon took no forethought, and she could call for a spoon as she worked on dinner. And that was so unexpected and exciting that Inko offhandedly mentioned how wonderful it was for Izuku to show her unexplored things about her quirk, and completely forgot that he based his life around doing anything helpful or heroic. Which was how Izuku got his first job as an online quirk analyst. Of course, Inko didn't find this out until almost a full year later, when her son had presented her with a simple grilled cheese sandwich and chicken soup, in honor of him finally earning enough to help her pay for bills. In between tears, Inko pleaded for him to use the money on anything else, but Izuku was as stubborn as Hisashi when he wanted to be. So they worked out a system. Izuku could be an analyst and help pay for the utilities as long as his grades stayed where they were, and Inko would continue to take care of the rest. And a few months later, Inko realized why Izuku had done this. They were finally eating dinner together again since Inko had enough of a stable income now and she quit her side job. She finally had the time to sit down with Izuku and hang out with him or watch a movie during a weekend marathon. And Izuku had whispered to her one night, "I'm so happy you're here now," as he snuggled closer to her while the movie's credits rolled, almost asleep. Which is why Inko knows for a fact that Izuku should have never been considered for expulsion in the first place. It was the reason why she never expected to get a phone call from the principal of UA, detailing Izuku's in-school expulsion and the transfer papers he had gotten. That was reason number 1 out of 10 million as to why her son, her shining star, should have thrived today at his dream school, rather than come home early to an empty house and look through different high schools he could transfer to this late into the year. Inko wholeheartedly believed in her son. Not out of some naive thought that her son was the best, but because Izuku came at every task with the same determination and sincerity, which is exactly what Inko thinks Japan needed to see. And with that thought, Inko finally pushed open the apartment door and went to go find her son. They needed to find another way to become a hero. I see, she sniffed. Izuku almost let his tears out when he saw his mother wipe her eyes for the 10th time. He couldn't help but feel as though he disappointed her. I'm so disappointed right now. Izuku scked in a harsh breath and hung his head low in shame. I mean, UA says they're the best but they won't even, give you a chance? Izuku blinked away his tears as he looked up in shock to finally notice that Inko hadn't been crying because of overwhelming sadness and disappointment. She had been crying because of what they did to him. Oh, honey. Inko sniffled as she brought him in for a hug. Izuku let himself bask in the warmth and comfort of her arms for a few seconds before he let go to wipe his eyes. Would you like to call your father later? We'll need to do it soon. You know he'll want to be kept up to date with your new schooling curriculum once you get in. Izuku just smiled and nodded his head, burying himself back into her awaiting arms. He can't believe he almost doubted his mother's faith. How are you feeling so far, Aizu? She asked, rubbing his arm. Izuku let himself sigh and took in a shaky breath to keep himself from crying more. It really scs to be right and use this plan. Inko hummed her agreement and gently stroked at his hair. I know honey, she murmured softly, but you know your father and I won't let you do this alone, right? Izuku grinned and looked back up to his mother, almost in awe since it seemed like she was finally agreeing to the one thing he had been asking about since he found an old picture of his parents all those years ago, mid-fight. You really mean dash? Yes. Inko giggled a bit as she grinned back towards him. We'll get started with your training this weekend, alright? Let's just get you enrolled in a better school first. Izuku let himself chuckle as he pulled apart from his mother and they turned their attention back towards his laptop for the night. I am here. I am here. I am here. Izuku groaned as he cracked his eyes open and shifted around, feeling his hip pop a few times and his back crack in 10 different places. He really shouldn't have slept out on the couch last night. Izuku, darling, his mother called out, you know I love you but if you don't turn off that alarm in 10 seconds, I'm going to send All Might on a mission to the dumpster. Izuku's eyes shot wide open and he stumbled off the couch, almost crashing into the coffee table where his laptop hung precariously and raced down the hallway, half awake and semi-coherent. He ran into his door and ignored his mother's laughter coming from the kitchen as he finally opened the DMN thing and ran over towards his desk, slamming his hand down on the snooze button. Breathing a sigh of relief, Izuku was finally awake enough to enjoy the smell of coffee and eggs wafting through the house, no doubt due to his mother's impeccable foresight. He took his time getting ready for the morning since he had nothing to do and his mother had already told him she was going to work remotely for the rest of the week. Once he was finished changing and finally felt as awake as he could get before 11 a.m., Izuku wandered out from his bedroom and plopped himself at their dining table. His mother, an amazing person, had set out a wonderful buffet for breakfast this morning, filled with sausage, bacon, eggs, rice, miso soup, fish, and toast. Truly, a woman straight from the heavens. Thanks Mama. Izuku called out as his mouth watered at the sight in front of him. She popped her head around the corner and smiled softly at him. Set the table darling. I'm just doing the dishes and then we'll dig in. Hopping out of his chair, Izuku bounced over towards the dishes cabinet and pulled out their dishes and utensils before setting the table and wandering back over to his mother, although he steered clear from the sink. He learned the hard way growing up that Inko did not want anyone to take away from things she takes pride in. So instead, Izuku leaned over the countertop and simply watched his mother's rhythmic but quick movements as she dipped the scrub back into the water and focused on the last pot while using her quirk to move her last dish over towards the drying rack. He smiled softly to himself as he watched her comfortably use her quirk for such a simple task. It always seems to warm his heart whenever he gets the privilege to watch her multitask with ease, especially since it was only a few years ago that she was struggling with doing such things. All right honey, she smiled towards him as a towel was pulled towards her hands. Let's eat. With a grin, Izuku pushed himself off the countertop and moved to the dining table, making sure to pull out her chair before walking over to sit across from her. He always enjoyed this part of his day. The part where he got to sit down and just relax with his mother. When they finally got to begin or unwind from a long day together and update one another on random but exciting things happening in their respective lives. After eating and catching up with one another, Izuku went around the table and started placing all of the food in. Tupperware while Inko gathered the dishes and moved them towards the sink. Honestly, Izuku was a bit excited for the day they had planned together during breakfast and the things he would finally be able to learn. Long ago, Izuku had gone into his parents' room and found a picture that no one would comment on. It showed his mother grinning from ear to ear in a black jumpsuit, a mask in her hand. Standing next to her was his father, also sporting a feral grin, and a puff of smoke escaping his lips. Next to that photo was a smaller one. It was obviously Inko if anyone knew who she was, but she was mid-leap off of a rooftop with a long weapon unsheathed in her hand. Her mask had been pulled over her head, but even through the picture, you could feel the sheer amount of power coming from her. And to this day, Izuku has never gotten a clear answer about either of those. His mother had actually been the one to bring it up this morning. She promised him they would finally be giving him an answer tonight. Tonight. The only way Izuku could describe how he felt was giddy at this point. He bounced back towards his room and finally got ready for the day. They were going to go to a gym Inko had mentioned before. Apparently she used to go there all the time, though she stopped when she got PRGNNT. He was so ready to see part of the life Inko had before he was around. "Honey, are you ready to go?" his mother called out. Izuku scrambled to pull on his hoodie and shoes before bolting out of his bedroom. "More than ever," he said breathlessly as she chuckled. Together, the two of them made their way towards the train station and made their way into the red light district. Along the way, his mother taught him a few things. Interestingly enough, all she had to say was, "Ignore everything that I taught you beforehand. That will not help you survive here." Of course, he knew about the red light district. All of the kids were warned about the place that was rampant with crime. A few were told that no heroes dared to enter the area, but Izuku had his doubts about that rumor. Every year during middle school, they had an assembly. A detective came in and taught them about the statistics of the area. What crimes took place where, how much organized criminals actually held power over, where these villains were, and what to do when you're stuck in a situation. The detective always told them not to use their quirks, but his tone said differently. It was as if he almost wanted them to be in danger, but at the last second fought their way to freedom. He didn't explain in detail what they should do if they were being robbed or a villain used them as a hostage. The basic premise was, fight if no one is watching, otherwise, wait for a hero. When Izuku came home after that presentation, his mother had sat him down and explained to him there were only certain things Izuku was allowed to do. Since he was quirkless, he was supposed to keep the harmless and innocent facade up for as long as possible. Longer than the other kids needed to. He needed to lower their guard. Make the villain think they had the upper hand. They were dealing with a quirkless after all. Don't move too quickly. Don't scan your surroundings when they watch you. Always protect your vitals as inconspicuously as possible. But, the most important thing she taught him? To never fall too far into the facade. There was a small difference in seeming fragile and becoming fragile. It was a dangerous line to ride, even for the ones who knew their life depended on it. Some fell so far into their persona, they truly believed they were incapable of fighting back however they could. They bought into their own creation. And that was off limits. So she taught him a few things to do if he was ever in a situation he needed to get out of, whether that be bullies or villains. The first tactic was to talk. Izuku knew he could be creepy if he wanted to. That's why he learned Latin. He mumbled to himself in Latin wherever he took the alleyways home to avoid Bakugo and his cronies. He knew that freaked people out so much that they avoided him, even while his shoulders were hunched in and he acted more like a scared alley cat than human. But, he could also make people question themselves. There was an old saying, back in the pre-Quirk era. They had said, I discovered at a very early age that if I talked long enough, I could make anything right or wrong. So, either I'm God or truth is relative. Izuku believed in that quote more than most, because of the truth it held. If he spoke about a topic for long enough, he could create different paths to tunnel through and exploit, forcing their truth to seem relative to them and only them. Take a simple fork for example. A standard fork has 3 prongs, but they're usually made of metal. Metal that can bend or break. So, someone bends one prong, snapping it off, forcing the fork to only have 2 prongs left. Of course, this can go in the opposite direction as well. Someone could theoretically weld a small metal piece onto the existing fork, creating a 4th prong. That example could be applied in every single conversation Izuku has ever had. Which is why talking is his first tactic whenever he's in danger. Apologizing to his bullies while looking scared usually does the trick. Occasionally, he'll need to cry along with those apologies. With Bakugo, Izuku tends to show more of his determination towards being a hero to him, making sure that the other boy still knows being a hero is the only path Izuku has thought about taking. Because if they think you're one-minded, that's how they'll see you. No matter what change might show through. That's the beauty of talking. His second tactic relies on more manipulation than anything else. He supposes the term is also called gaslighting, although he really doesn't like dealing with such a thing. Gaslighting can be used in numerous ways. Talking, for example, is one. Another is body language. Changing your feet placement, or subtle tells in a facial expression can do wonders to another person's subconscious. Now, gaslighting doesn't always need to be a terrible thing. Not when a person is fighting against a terrible thing. It's standard knowledge that two terrible things cancel each other out anyways. So Izuku doesn't feel awful when he uses this to get people to leave him alone for the day. He'll fade into the background, only to jump right back into their world if he sees someone else being picked on. Thankfully, he's never needed to do this with a real villain, but he's almost positive he could make it work. And the last thing was to fight. In Izuku's world, fighting back meant letting the villain continue to have the upper hand no matter what. He needed to show the bare minimum. At all times. Dodging became a sport he excelled at, in this case. If he avoided certain punches by turning at just the right angle, then no one was the wiser. All he needed to do was make it out of the danger zone, alive. People didn't seem to register this important art of fighting. They didn't need to fight back so much as they needed to get out. Anyone with less power than the other person was supposed to allow them to continue to hold the upper hand, even when they were the ones that got away. The villains or bullies or whoever was after them won't register that fight as a loss. Ever. Running away gets a bad rap nowadays, with so many people having strong and unique quirks ready to use at their fingertips, but it was effective. It was the reason Izuku survived his entire schooling career. Because, when you're weak, it's important to promise victory to the villains in your life, no matter what the outcome looks like. Izuku was knocked out of his thoughts when his mother nudged him. He glanced at her with a smile and they both made their way off the train. He almost chuckled when he noticed she kept her hand in her pocket, as if she would stab someone to keep them away from him. He has no doubt in his mind that she'd do worse if they so much as looked at Izuku the wrong way out here. It was only a short walk to the gym. Many turns throughout a connected maze of alleyways and tight streets were made, as if the trail was created by people who needed to stay hidden. He watched as his mother walked up to a plain building. A simple brick decorating the outside, although it looked as if it hadn't been used for many years. She waltzed up to the front door and placed her hand on the side of the building, not touching the door. Running her fingers down, she squatted until her hand was hovering over the third brick from the bottom. Izuku almost called out to ask what she was doing until he saw her press the brick in. Name. A monotone voice called out. Inko didn't miss a beat. Emerald Viper and Guest. Izuku's jaw dropped as a short buzzer sounded and the front doors clicked open for them. He stared at her, completely awestruck while she chuckled and pushed the doors open further. Well Aizu, she smirked, holding the door open wider. Are you coming? Izuku rushed in right behind his mother, so excited to see the gym she called home before he came along. The inside was much cleaner than the outside, with concrete floors and high ceilings. He felt like he stepped into a warehouse more than a gym, but the sounds of gym rats working out broke that image for him. There was a half wall with a desk sitting in front. A receptionist glanced at them before returning to their book, obviously not seeing an issue with Izuku or his mother walking into the place. Inko beckoned Izuku to follow her and he jogged a few steps to fall in line with her. This is a haven. She explained with a small smile as they stepped around the corner. Izuku's eyes widened as he drank in the sight of people sparring on the mats. One wall was full of mirrors with workout equipment lined up next to that wall. He noticed a few people standing behind one man who seemed to be bench pressing. The wall straight across from them had windows, although he could tell that they were tinted. Most likely to avoid anyone for learning about what was truly hiding within this building. Sounds of stomping feet raced over Izuku's head and he whipped his attention upwards, finally taking in the sight of the indoor track they had. He could hear one man as he stomped around, but he noticed a few other men and women running along the track, their steps and breath silent. Come along, darling. His mother called out. Izuku grinned sheepishly and walked with her as she headed towards the locker rooms. I'm going to get changed, so don't wander too far. He nodded his understanding, opting to stand close to the women's locker room door as he glanced around. He focused his attention on the trainer who seemed to be breathing down the neck of the guy pounding away at the sandbags hanging from the ceiling. From his spot, he could see that there were rooms along the second floor as well. The one across from him held a few dancers, who seemed to be messing around as they stretched together along the beam along the wall. At this point, Izuku wouldn't be surprised to find out they had a lap pool in here as well. It was endless. The possibilities. The training plans. The sparring partners. All of his ideas about how to improve with guidance were sitting right in front of him. All of his plans to improve his teamwork and footwork were here. Hey Bunny. A familiar voice spoke up from his left. Izuku whipped around and stared at the newcomer in awe. Long time no see, huh? Izuku lurched forwards and wrapped his arms around the man, pulling him into a tight hug. Dad. Hisashi chuckled as he held tightly onto Izuku. They rocked back and forth as Izuku came to terms with his dad being back in Japan. It had been so long since he had been able to see Hisashi in person. He took off chasing a business deal when Izuku had turned 5, excited to offer his family nearly triple the amount of money he had been making previously. This, of course, came with a few consequences. Izuku only had 2 memories of being with his father in person, both coming from the week-long vacation they took to go visit the man in America. His first as Hisashi at his desk, poring over notes and notes of different analysis, piecing it all together and making the information concise. Hisashi had taught Izuku that night. He taught him how to process information in the most efficient way possible. He taught him how to reach conclusions with minimal evidence. Hisashi taught Izuku how to analyze. The second memory was something Izuku held close to his heart. It was the day they arrived in America. They had gotten all the way to baggage claim before they saw him. A tall, broad man with curly white hair and red eyes that seemed to be picking apart everyone he saw. Reading glasses resting in his hair, freckles splashed over his cheeks, and a grin that seemed like it never left his face. Once Hisashi had seen them, locked eyes with Izuku, his whole body lit up. His eyes brightened, his grin grew. Izuku had never had someone look at him like that before. It felt nice. Hisashi barreled into him, blubbering on and on about how much he missed Izuku, crying when he realized Izuku had grown since he was 5. That seemed to be a devastating fact Hisashi had not thought about when he took a job abroad. Aside from those 2 memories, nothing really stuck in Izuku's mind, which felt like a tragedy. Maybe he'd be able to make up for lost time while the man was here. How long are you here? Izuku asked, trying not to look too down with the prospect of his father leaving again. Hisashi grinned. How would you feel if I stuck around for a while? Izuku brightened up, squeezing his father as he hugged him tighter. I wouldn't mind that at all. Hisashi chuckled. Good, because I heard that we're doing a bit of training today. Izuku grinned, breaking free from the hug as he looked around the gym. Oh ho ho, yeah. I'm ready. What are we doing first, huh? Something cool, right? He heard someone clear their throat behind him and whirled around, facing his mother. We're doing stretches first. Izuku and Hisashi pouted at the same time. They followed Inko to the mats and Izuku walked around, bumping into his dad more times than he could count because he was so mesmerized by the people in here, working away and doing amazing things with their bodies. He truly felt like he had been thrown into a fairy tale, one that didn't exactly come with traditional happy ending, but he certainly wasn't complaining about the life he was leading. He was the content side character in the story, happy to watch things play out like they were. Izuku. His father knocked him lightly on the head, chuckling when he finally blinked himself back into the real world. Your mother is going to have your head if you don't start stretching soon. Izuku chuckled, moving a few steps away from his dad and spreading out, dropping down to touch his toes. He looked over, grinning when he saw his dad resting his hands on his knees. Are you too old to go all the way, Dad? Hisashi chuckled. You're talking a lot of smack for someone who just walked in here. Izuku shrugged the best he could. Yeah. It's what I'm good at. Boys, save it. His mom admonished them. Together, they went through basic stretches, making sure Izuku wouldn't die the first time he was actually taught during their sparring lessons. He thought it was smart and they were obviously looking out for him, but on the other hand, Izuku was far from patient and wanted to start learning how to knock someone out, pronto. Alright, you ready, bud? Hisashi finally asked. Izuku perked up from his spot on the floor and raced over to stand in front of his father, grinning. Sir, yes, sir. Good job. Hisashi rolled his eyes at him. Your mom is gonna show you what we're going over, okay? Izuku nodded, turning his attention back towards Inko. Let's work on your stance first. What do you prefer? Izuku maneuvered his feet into the position he usually went for when he was standing in his room, absolutely not pretending to fight invisible villains. Inko hummed. A boxer's stance? Looks like it. Hisashi confirmed, keeping his eyes on Izuku's feet. He avoided shifting as they both looked at him intently. All right then. His mom shrugged, moving closer to stand in front of him as Hisashi moved to the side. I want you to defend yourself from me without moving. You can change your stance as much as you want, but do not move. Izuku nodded and his mom went to stand behind him. Izuku kept his face forward, clenching and unclenching his fists in anticipation. Suddenly, she pushed on the back of his knee, hard, and Izuku went tumbling forward, knocking his nose harshly against the mat. He groaned, ignoring the stifled laughs he could hear coming from his dad. He was so going to get revenge on the man someday. Izuku, honey, you need to not let that happen. his mom said with a small smile. Izuku huffed, climbing back up to his feet and resuming his stance. He rolled his shoulders, trying to get back into it. Okay. Let's go again. His mom shoved at him again, but Izuku twisted his leg, making sure his knees couldn't buckle under her weight anymore. He lowered himself down further, finding a better center of gravity as he did so. They kept going for quite some time, long enough for Izuku to be sweating a bit for the constant changing of stances and defending himself from his mom. Inko finally got up, coming around in front of him and holding out her palms. Alright, that's good. Do you feel good like that? Izuku looked down, flexing his toes a bit as he thought about it before nodding. It feels natural. She nodded, smiling at him. Good, then I need you to memorize that stance. Remember it, use it, love it, anything to teach yourself that is how you want to fight, alright? Izuku nodded. Wonderful. Now, make a fist. Izuku straightened himself out, holding his fists out and clenching them. She looked over his fingers, nodding at him approvingly. At least he knew exactly how to do that. Good, now, punch my palms. Left then right. Don't put too much power behind it, alright? You just need to get your muscles used to throwing a punch in the first place. Inko advised him. Izuku nodded, rolling his shoulders again as dropped back into his stance, shifting his ankles around before bringing his fists up to the sides of his face. He hit her left palm, then right. Good, now faster. Izuku went again, hitting her as quickly as he could make himself. Keep that pace. I'll tell you when to stop. Izuku nodded, taking a deep breath before going again. It took a long time, and by the end Izuku was sweating and panting, feeling like an absolute mess as he kept pushing through. Good. His mom finally said, grabbing his fists with her hands and forcing him to stop. Izuku sighed in relief as his muscles finally got a break. Go get some water. Inko shoved him towards the benches and Izuku stumbled a bit, tiredly making his way towards his water. He grabbed it, forcing himself to drink in small sips as he caught his breath. Are you up for some sparring today, bud? Hisashi asked. Izuku perked up, nodding at him and dropping his water bottle on his bag to run over to him. I'm ready. Determined. I like it. Hisashi grinned. Now, let's see how well you hold up. Izuku backed up, standing on the other side of the mat and settled into his stance, bringing his fists up. Hisashi nodded at him, shifting his feet around as he stood, raising an eyebrow after a few seconds. Are you going to move? Izuku debated it as he stood in front of him. Rocking from side to side, keeping his attention wholly on his dad. Should he be the one to move? Tighten up your form, loosen up your stance. Hisashi pointed out, shifting his footing again. Don't be afraid to dance around a bit to figure out your next move. How would I stay in my stance if I loosen it up? Izuku asked, backing up a bit. The same way heroes do. Hisashi replied, stepping forwards. Izuku nodded, understanding what he meant. Heroes always landed in fights in a way that favored them, usually giving them free access to use whatever combo super move they wanted while they were fighting. Heroes like Edgeshot favored their ability to start a fight faster than the opposition, usually setting the pace and thus, winning the fights. Izuku couldn't set the pace since it had already begun, so he needed a different option. Heroes like All Might brawled it out, which Izuku absolutely could not do against his father. Hisashi was tall and broad. Two things Izuku was most certainly not. Heroes like Hawks used their agility to their advantage, but Izuku couldn't exactly fly and he had no weapons on hand, which Hawks liked to use to guarantee distance from his opponents. Maybe he could take after Mirko though. She landed on her feet, almost always keeping her arms tight against her body and keeping her toes pointing at her opponents at all times. She brawled, but usually mixed her stance up since she usually used her legs when she fought. Maybe he could do the same. Izuku walked, 1 foot in front, 1 foot behind and kept his body turned towards his father, not letting him out of his eyesight. Hisashi grinned. Good. Hisashi rushed him and Izuku tried scurrying around, cursing when his dad grabbed his wrists and tossed him over his shoulder, slamming his back into the man. Izuku groaned, squeezing his eyes shut. Oh, that one did not feel too good. Izuku huffed to himself. He made a mental note to look that move up once he got home to practice. Are you gonna lay on that mat all day or what? His dad called out, taunting him. Izuku shoved himself to his feet and got back into his stance, grinning toothily as his dad smirked at him. Ready for another beating? Izuku lowered himself, centering his weight. In your dreams, old man. Izuku woke up the next morning, sore and achy and annoyed, but feeling amazing. He loved the feeling of his muscles developing and being worked to the bone, even though he moved like jelly the morning after. To him, it was a sign of personal progress. It was something only he could feel, only he could lay claim to, and only he could experience. He loved having something to feel proud about, often going as far as to train longer and harder just to feel the effects again the next day. Of course, he made sure to stay safe about it. If his mother worried about his condition, all previous pride about himself flew out the window and landed in a ditch. He never wanted to worry her, especially not about something as crazy as something that brought him pride, so he made a schedule and forced himself to find a few other things to focus on. He wrote in depth in his analysis notebooks, going as far as to set up that website for others should they want his expertise when he was younger. Once he began getting money from that particular adventure, Izuku was ecstatic and only felt prouder as he watched the number in his bank account rise higher and higher. To be completely honest, that was still a point of pride for Izuku, especially on the weekends when he had more than enough time to finish all of the invoices that built up throughout the weekdays. He also did a few other things he enjoyed knowing that he had had a hand in. One of his favorites included the state of Dahoga Beach. The trash had been cleared by him and he's almost positive that someone else had helped him, or at the very least, took things out of his piles of metal and batteries. Izuku sniffed the air then, smiling as he smelled the beautiful smells of coffee and breakfast being made wafting into his bedroom. He quickly pulled a hoodie and shorts on before he waltzed out, brightening up when he realized Hisashi was sitting at the dining table, a coffee mug in a death grip. Izuku stifled a laugh as he walked past the man, ignoring him for now. He wasn't sure how long his dad had even been in the country, but it's safe to say he hadn't exactly gotten used to the time change quite yet. "Morning, Mama." Izuku cheered, walking around to kiss her cheek before beelining for the coffee machine. He might be more of a morning person than Hisashi will ever be, but that didn't mean he loved the idea of being up before it was socially acceptable to eat lunch. "Morning, darling." She smiled at him, shaking her head as she watched him pour himself coffee. "Make sure to drink water with that." Izuku nodded, well aware of the rules. He was only allowed coffee as long as he had 2 cups of water every time. It was a fair rule, one Izuku saw the benefit in, so he never protested. He put his mug down near Hisashi before getting up and grabbing 2 glasses, filling them both with water before placing one down in front of his dad and one at his spot. "Ah, thank you, buddy, but I'm not Dash." Izuku shook his head. "It's the rules." Hisashi looked baffled. "I'm just going to drink coffee. Can't have coffee without water." Izuku said, matter of fact. "Yes, you can. Not if you don't want to die." "What?" Izuku crossed his arms and recited his mother's rule from years ago, word for word. "Water is good for you, coffee isn't great. If you're going to insist on having it, you need to drink your fill of water as well." Inko nodded when Hisashi frowned again. "He's right, honey." "Oh." Hisashi turned, plastering on a smile for her, and Izuku looked at him, mirth radiating off of him as he sipped his water and stared at his dad. "Of course. Honey." "Aizu, darling, when does school start for you?" Inko asked. Izuku hummed to himself, pretending to think about it as he panicked. He really didn't know, and to be fair, he really couldn't care. Not since he was promised that he'd get to go out with his dad later today, walk around the park and talk about a few things. Sometime soon?" He tried. Hisashi snorted into his coffee mug and Izuku glared at him for it. "Izuku Midoriya." Izuku dashed out of his seat, racing to his room. He ripped open his laptop, looking through the dozen open tabs he still had up, trying to figure out which one belonged to the school's homepage. He clicked on it, letting out a deep breath as he realized he didn't even need to attend online classes until 11. Of course, the recorded classes technically began at 9, but attendance wasn't taken for them and he had no homework from those teachers, so really, did he need to watch the recordings at 9 in the morning? Izuku would say the answer was no. Inko would rather tie him up in his desk chair and force him to watch the videos as soon as the clock turned 8. Decisions. "Izuku, food's ready." He scrambled back out of his room, ready to eat and forget about needing to deal with such terrible things in life, like school. 9 a.m. Izuku said as soon as he sat down. Inko hummed, eyeing him for a few seconds before nodding. "All right. Make sure you're in that chair by 8:50 though. I don't want you missing school." Izuku agreed easily as he shoveled food onto his plate. "Of course, Mama. You got it." They ate quickly and Inko kissed them both goodbye before she raced out the door to go to work. Izuku wondered if Hisashi had already found a job and took today off or if he was still job searching. He quickly started doing the dishes, knowing he wouldn't be able to go out and play vigilante if he didn't stay on top of chores today. Or the next few weeks. Or months. Oh crap, he just gave his parents a new thing to ground him from if he messed up, didn't he? "Hey, you wanna grab a bite to eat for lunch today?" Hisashi asked from the dining table. Izuku shrugged. "Sure. Where to?" "Anywhere's fine. I desperately need some chicken kebabs though." Hisashi frowned. It's been too long since I've eaten real food. Izuku nodded, pretending to be sympathetic. Sounds awful. It was truly devastating. I don't doubt a word you say. Hisashi rolled his eyes. It's rude to lie to your elders. Who said I was lying? Izuku winked. When did you get so DMN quick with it? Hisashi muttered. It would usually take you a couple minutes to plan that wit out. Izuku shrugged, drying the last dish. I blame it on Mama. Ah, makes sense. He glanced at the time, cursing himself when he realized it was already 9. Sure, he didn't really care too much, but he knew his mom would knock him into next week if he didn't haul his butt in front of the computer and actually participate in school. Even worse, she might actually refuse to train him for a while. Oh, that would be terrible. Izuku ran to his room, getting settled in and made his way into his classes, opening up a notebook as he started a video. It wasn't exciting and, sure, Izuku had to fight off sleep a few times, but at least this was his reality now. It was much better than his alternatives. School, as an institution, was not Izuku's favorite thing in the world. The idea of school was a synonym for a living hell in Izuku's book. He was stuck on the bottom, in every single class he had been in every friend group he tried to weasel his way into, in every single aspect of his schooling life, he was on the bottom. Yes, Izuku had deliberately helped his image by walking around, pretending to be clueless, bumbling Deku during those hours, but he wasn't even given a chance. That's the whole reason why Izuku even needed Deku anyways. He was going to be at the bottom of the food chain, no matter what. The only thing Izuku could do about it was change people's perceptions on who exactly they shoved down there. Sure, they didn't know he was smart and innovative and knew how to fight and defend himself and talk his way out of a parking ticket in front of an expired meter, but that didn't mean Izuku loved being underestimated all the time. He didn't want to be underestimated, he didn't want to be overestimated. Izuku just wanted to be Izuku. But that wasn't enough for the world, so he needed to play the long game. He felt like school had actually prepared him to be able to do that. For those at the top, they weren't forced to develop the same networking and social relations skills Izuku had to master at a young age. Izuku needed to know, as soon as he turned 5, who belonged to what friend group, the outliers, the cliques, and the gossips. He needed to figure out how to talk to each of these groups and find different ways to appeal to them. Because not everyone was like Bakugo when they bullied him. The girls liked to whisper about him, so much until he couldn't think straight and Izuku woke up hearing their mocking voices, unable to know exactly what they were saying but knowing he wouldn't really want to know either. They were the ones who were capable of making Izuku feel like he wouldn't ever be enough with a simple glance in his direction. Izuku needed to figure out a way to combat this and, simply enough, he started copying them. Once he gave them looks back and clicked his tongue when they did something as simple as trip over air, the heat lessened. It became a mutual dislike, though their dislike for other people tended to overshadow their dislike towards him because he was never competition to begin with. School prepared him for life, but most certainly not in the way they were aiming for. He learned how to trust someone and learned when he couldn't afford to worry about trust. He learned how to be weak without ever thinking that about himself. He learned a variety of unskilled labors because of the shops he raced into to escape enthusiastic bullies, often going as far as to offer his past experience as help should they ever want it from him, since they so graciously let him hide inside their shop for hours on end. Izuku was forced to learn about real life. He was never coddled there and no one bothered to protect him from the deep horrors of the internet, but he couldn't say he minded all too much. School prepared him for the worst. Izuku could work with that. He could see the benefit of it, especially when he realized that the top students in middle school had probably been beaten with their own reality checks. At least he was never given false praise or hope by any stretch of the imagination. Honestly. If he had to do it all over again, the only thing he would change would be his persona. Deku was good. It was his first true masterpiece, but Izuku knew he could do better now. He could show more emotions than just determination and sadness. He could give Deku the depth that he was sorely lacking, if only he had a chance to go to the past and redo it. Zuku, it's lunchtime. Are you ready to go? His dad called out, snapping him out of his thoughts. Izuku looked around, confused as to how time passed by so quickly. Maybe Father Time was playing a prank on him. Or losing it. Father Time had to be, well, old. Really old. Wait, did time affect Father Time? Izuku shook his head. He was not going to think about that today. Coming. Izuku remembered to shout back, jumping into a pair of sweats. He didn't know what the temperature was outside and he could always take off his hoodie and carry it if it got too hot. He walked out, smiling at his dad who was standing at the counter with reading glasses on, squinting comically at his phone as he read through something. Izuku cleared his throat and watched Hisashi jump a bit, glancing back to see Izuku. Hey, bud. You ready? Izuku nodded as Hisashi took off his glasses, putting them up on the breakfast bar. All right. Let's do this then. They walked out and Izuku ended up leading them to a convenience store close by. He picked some sides for them to eat while his father picked out the kebabs. They made their way out of the store and Hisashi led them over to a park, settling down on the bench and putting the food in the middle. They shuffled the food around, trying to get it all sorted. Can you pass the thank you? Oh. Can I thanks? Izuku grinned, chomping down on his kebab while he ripped open the packaging on his steamed bun, letting the cool air chill it before he tried to eat it. He wasn't really wanting to walk away from lunch with a burnt tongue today. So, Izuku glanced at his dad, trying to figure out the best way to say what he wanted to. His dad looked at him with a soft smile and Izuku powered through. Do you still want to tell me that story I was promised? Hisashi huffed out a laugh, glancing over at Izuku. I did promise that, didn't I? Izuku nodded enthusiastically. All right. Hisashi brushed some crumbs off of his hands as he shifted around. Well, I suppose I can start with my name. Your name? Yep. I was given the name White Dragon. The White Dragon. Izuku repeated. His dad nodded, looking proud. Izuku, for the life of him, couldn't figure out why. Wouldn't White Dragon be an insult? Or at the very least, insinuating something else about his father? Oh my god, was Izuku's dad too old to know the innuendo? Right. Izuku said, trying to act like he wasn't shocked or overly worried for the mental health of his father. Well, that's certainly a name. Hisashi nodded. It really was. He grinned. You know, on my first patrol I actually ended up breaking my hand. Izuku gasped, looking him up and down as Hisashi chuckled. I know. Surprising, right? Not at all. Cheeky brat. Hisashi rolled his eyes. I guess you don't want to hear the story then. Wait. Izuku called out, regretting his teasing from earlier. No. I'd like to hear it. Well, only if you're sure. I wouldn't want you to fall asleep on me or anything. Hisashi said as dramatically as he could possibly get right then. I'm sure. Izuku swore. Hisashi smirked. It's a tale as old as time dash. Oh, Jesus Christ. Izuku rolled his eyes, stuffing a piece of chicken in his mouth when his dad glared at him. Anyways. Hisashi shifted around again, getting comfortable on the bench and opening up his own spicy fried chicken and letting it cool down. When I was your age, I went to Nada High for management and data analysis. And, one thing I learned while I was there was that if my career was based on how well I networked, I would excel. Izuku grabbed his bun, chomping down on it before chewing with an open mouth, forgetting the inside needed time to cool down as well. That paired with the fact that the inside was filled with spicy pork did not help matters. Thankfully Hisashi didn't seem to notice as he continued. I networked with everyone I could. So much so that it was an issue. Hisashi chuckled a bit. In my second year, I learned that one of my close friends wasn't safe at home. And he was stuck. Stuck? Izuku questioned. He watched his dad sigh. Yes. He was stuck. His mother was in a high government position and his father was a social worker. He couldn't leave without them knowing where he was, wherever he decided to go. So, what happened? Long story short, we set up a network, fought a few villains completely unplanned, and he made his way to Moscow. Izuku narrowed his eyes. Moscow, Russia? Hisashi nodded, smiling fondly. Moscow, Russia. He always wanted to see the architecture there. I think he ended up becoming an architect if I'm not mistaken. Wait, so what happened? How did you even get him out of the country? It took a few years. Hisashi poked around at his food. It took until the end of high school to be exact. We set up an information network, 1, to help us figure out how to get him to Russia and, 2, to help us learn who to avoid. While we were doing our own thing, villains learned about what we were doing and tried to use us as information brokers, which is how I broke my hand. It's also the reason why they gave me the name White Dragon. Izuku made a face. You didn't burn any of them alive, did you? Jesus, kid, you have a morbid imagination sometimes. Hisashi grumbled, shuddering to himself. Izuku shrugged. No. I did not. I used my quirk for intimidation purposes only. Is that why your knuckles look like that? Yeah. Hisashi nodded, flexing a hand. When we fought villains we used it as a stress relief of sorts. We weren't going into vigilantism to act like heroes. Hisashi turned to him then, looking more serious than Izuku wanted him to. We were in a much darker area of gray than you will be when you start out. Your mother and I both. We had very selfish reasons for starting out, which eventually led us to help others, but we won't completely understand a few things when it comes to how you do your patrols and set up a schedule. We want to be there for you, buddy, but we're also learning. Izuku blinked, tilting his head and smiling at him. Thanks for telling me. Hisashi smiled back. Thanks for listening, bud. Of course. They sat together in silence, finishing their respective meals as they looked out across the park. Someone was walking their dog, another college-aged looking girl was jogging along the back trail. Izuku watched as a stranger tripped over the curb and looked around, doing their best to brush it off like nothing had happened. He simply watched as life happened. It was all around him, dancing in front of him and showing him the exciting things of the world. He absolutely loved it. How did you actually get him out of the country though? Izuku suddenly asked, still staring at the endless greenery in front of him. He heard his dad huff out a laugh. Networking, buddy. I had an old acquaintance who didn't mind flying him to Moscow. Flying? Yeah, he's a pilot. Actually, he might have retired by now. Izuku smiled. That's pretty impressive. Why thank you, son. It was the biggest heist I've ever pulled. Maybe I should see if I can do you one better. Izuku teased. Hisashi shook his head as he stood up, wordlessly gathering their trash in his hands. Unless you want me to sit you down in front of Mitsuki and let you explain to her exactly what you did, I'd suggest you take it slow. Izuku gulped as he stood, following his father over to the trash. All right. No need to get hostile. This is as calm as it gets. Hisashi smirked as they walked away, finally heading back towards the house. Ah crud. Hisashi said to himself, looking at his phone. Izuku looked at him curiously. What? Your mother's already home. Ah crud. I'll race you there? Izuku took off, laughing as his dad protested. I'll see you there. Izuku spent the next few weeks religiously going to the gym, fighting and training every second that he could spare, and falling asleep to beginner martial arts videos. Of course, he was forced to sit down and actually do his homework as well. School wasn't awful. It certainly beat being stuck in a classroom for 8 hours, doing nothing but twiddling his thumbs as the time passed, but it still wasn't a favorite activity of his. Zuku, come here. Izuku rolled his eyes, leaving his room to walk out towards his parents' room. What's up, Dad? He pushed open the door, startling when Hisashi wrapped a hand around his mouth, pulled him in the room and shushed him. Hisashi slammed the door closed and Izuku slipped underneath the man, crawling a few paces away before he jumped up, ready for a spar. Hey, mercy. Hisashi called out, putting his hands up. Izuku frowned at him. Then why act like you were kidnapping me? Hisashi shrugged and Izuku flicked his eyes to the t-shirt his dad was wearing, a black one with the words #OneDad written across. Gotta keep you on your toes somehow. Anyway, he walked towards the closet, looking way too giddy. Look what I found. He presented Izuku with a cardboard box, looking like a kid on Christmas, and Izuku tried to activate his non-existent X-ray quirk. It's, very brown? Hisashi huffed. You don't know about these boxes, do you? Well, cardboard is made up of dash. Nope. No. Hisashi frowned before walking over to the bed and setting it down. Here, let me show you. Hisashi gently pulled out a shirt, setting it down before grabbing everything in one go, knocking the box to the floor. He laid out what he could before Izuku gasped. No way. Hisashi grinned. Yes way. I won't have you go out there without being protected by something, but it might be a strange fit. I made that specifically for myself, so try it on and let me know if we need to loosen anything before you go out tonight. Izuku smiled, feeling a few tears stream down his cheeks. This is too much, Dad. I can't dash. Hisashi shoved the costume in his hands. You can and you will. Go on, buddy. We want to see you save the world. Izuku sniffed, smiling as he looked down at the costume. All right. He jumped into his dad's arms, hugging him tightly before wrenching himself free and racing towards the bathroom. He locked the door, turning around and stared at the costume in his hands. It was all black, for one. The biggest part seemed to make a one-piece jumpsuit, though the cinch for the waist sat higher than normal and the neckline traveled high. Izuku shed his clothes quickly and jumped into the costume, wriggling his way into it. It was baggy around his thighs but not overly so. Nothing he would worry about creating a chafing problem or anything. He looked in the mirror, admiring the orange stitch lines throughout the entire costume, obviously made as a homage to Hisashi's fire-breathing quirk. He played around with the neckline a bit, discovering that it was actually formed to fit the bottom half of his face, almost perfectly. He pulled it up and grinned, pleasantly surprised when the mask moved, showing exactly what he was doing. That must be convenient. He played around, looking for pockets that were sewn in and discovering Velcro straps to things he wasn't privy to having just yet. Izuku left the bathroom and went to stand in front of his father, dramatically doing a spin as soon as he entered his parents' room. Tada! Hisashi gasped so hard he ended up choking. Izuku wondered if that was a good reaction before watching his dad cough out some black smoke and decided he'd rather save the house than get a dramatic reaction from his father ever again. Dad. Izuku walked over, holding out his hands, not exactly sure what he should do. Hisashi waved him off, eventually calming down and taking smoke-free breaths again. My bad. Anyway. Look at you. You look great, buddy. Izuku blushed, staring down at his feet to pretend to avoid the praises. He knew for a fact that Hisashi knew he didn't deal well with praise. He also knew his father was a sadistic bstrd when he wanted to be. Stop it. Izuku groaned, planting his head into his hands. He heard Hisashi chuckle. Alright. How does it feel? Izuku sighed, pulling his hands down and picking at the costume. It feels nice. I'll tell you how nice it is after tonight. Good. Now, remember, you're only going out to give yourself a mental map of the city. Hisashi told him, staring him down. Do not come back with blood on that costume if you can help it. Izuku nodded quickly, not wanting his dad to look at him so seriously ever again. Yep. Great. Hisashi smiled. Make sure to say goodbye to your mother before you leave. I will. Izuku stood there, debating on whether or not he should hug Hisashi again before turning around, clearing his throat. Thanks, again, for this. Anytime, bud. Izuku nodded and all but fled the room, forcing himself to slow down so he didn't burst into the living room and scare the daylights out of his mother. He might get another book thrown at his head for pulling a stunt like that again. Hey Mom. Izuku called out as he walked in, seeing her sitting comfortably on the couch. She hummed, turning around as she placed her book down. Yes, Izu-, she gasped, tears gathering in the corners of her eyes as she covered her mouth and stood. Is that really Dash? Izuku nodded, holding out his arms, as if that was a proper way to show off his costume. Yeah. Dad gave it to me for tonight. Oh honey. She sniffled, stepping closer and holding his shoulders as she looked him up and down. You look just like him. Izuku perked up, a soft smile playing on his lips. Really? She smiled back, patting his shoulder fondly. You better not run around acting like he used to though. I still think this costume gave him too much of an ego. Hey! Hisashi protested, walking into the kitchen. I can still hear you. We know. Inko snickered, refusing to look away from Izuku. Her eyes softened and she got closer to whisper to him. Be careful out there and make sure to have some fun, alright? Izuku wiped away his tears, determined to be strong and powerful in this costume. He nodded back to her and he was quickly wrapped up in a hug. I will, Mama. She kissed his forehead. Good. You're taking the train, aren't you? Yeah. Then go change out of that. I'm positive there'll be a bathroom you can sneak into once you get there. She advised. Izuku nodded, wiggling out of her arms to head to his room. He quickly changed, stuffing his things and the costume into his book bag before taking off with a loud, good night, over his shoulder. This was finally it. The beginning of his breakthrough into the world of vigilantism. Izuku got to the train station and looked around, making sure the coast was clear before hopping over the turnstile. He grinned to himself as he made his way onto the train and took off, towards Aichi. The prefecture right below his own. It actually had more crime and fewer heroes stationed in the area, making it a perfect spot for an up-and-coming vigilante such as himself. He knew it was excessive to travel so far away, going as far as to take a train into a completely different prefecture, but he had no choice. Musufatu was littered with heroes, mostly due to the fact that UA was in the city. Even worse, Tokyo wasn't too far away and the inner city had so many daylight heroes running around. In Izuku's mind, it was simple. His city didn't need his help. Toyota, on the other hand, could use some help. It was worth the almost hour-long train ride when he thought about it carefully. Toyota was a big city, responsible for housing nearly 500,000 people. The inner city prided itself on being walkable, so Izuku didn't need to worry about running down highways and through forests just to catch a potential villain. But, the most important part was that the city didn't have many heroes protecting them. What he could find on underground heroes was even worse. So of course Izuku was going to take the opportunity to become a vigilante in a city that was struggling rather than running around Musufatu, basically asking for Eraserhead to capture him, turn him in, and give him a real reason to think of Izuku as incapable. That is not something he's confident he could gracefully handle. He knows himself well enough to know that if he was stuck in a situation where he was forced to confront Eraserhead, he'd be too stubborn to run from the man. That would backfire almost immediately. Izuku would get his butt handed to him, and nothing would go in his favor. So he made a decision out of self-preservation. He decided to keep out of reach completely and stay far, far away from Eraserhead or any other well-known heroes by patrolling in an entirely different prefecture. Of course, he still ran the risk of running into heroes in Toyota. He certainly wasn't safe from all heroes just because he wasn't patrolling in the city full of them, but they were lesser-known heroes. Hopefully they would even be willing to let Izuku off with a warning if they caught him in the act. That would be a best-case scenario though, so he'll keep those dreams in his back pocket until they actually came true. The train came to a stop and Izuku filed out, dipping into the station's bathroom, pulling on the vigilante outfit and waltzing right back out. He looked around the city for a moment before dipping into an alleyway, not exactly happy to be out in an open street before he had time to get his bearings. Izuku looked up, finally noticing how tall the buildings surrounding him were. Izuku poked his head out of the alley, looking down the street and groaning. He clicked his tongue as he dipped back into the alleyway, finally realizing his predicament. The buildings here were tall and there were quite a few skyscrapers as well. Perhaps he should ask his parents for advice about parkour. Maybe gymnastics. Either way, he'll need some help being able to navigate the city without running through every single alleyway. Izuku looked around, smiling as he looked up the side of the building to his left and saw the service ladder was still unlocked. Quickly, he climbed his way up, excited to see the city he'll be worrying about soon enough from up high. He pulled himself up, doing his best to avoid hitting any of the metal and snagging his costume on anything. Izuku walked around the rooftop, pacing it really, and looked around, completely in awe of seeing the city from this height. The stars were out tonight and he could actually make out certain constellations that he couldn't back at home, with the skyscrapers and their lights blending in with the night sky, showing off its beauty. He loved looking around, especially since he was in a different city than usual. It felt more exciting. What in the hell could you possibly be doing all the way up here? Izuku jumped at the question, not expecting anyone else to join him during his little escapade tonight. A strange person walked along the edge of the roof and looked down at him. Izuku chuckled awkwardly, eyeing the mask that covered their neck, sitting comfortably atop of their nose and swept under their eyes. It was dark red, the same color as their eyes, and it seemed to be a theme all throughout their outfit as well. They wore a dark long sleeve, something that looked durable and skin-tight and expensive. They also wore high-waisted pants that were cinched at the bottoms and seemed to have wraps covering their ankles, disappearing beneath their dark red shoes. 2 batons were strapped to their back, making Izuku wonder exactly what area of martial arts they had been trained in. Maybe they were simply weapons the person used against the opposition. Either way, Izuku knew he did not want to get into a fight with someone like this. "I'm not doing much." Izuku chuckled awkwardly, trying his best to sound casual. Judging by their smirk, he was not doing well. Perhaps he should look into official acting classes? Oh? Nothing much? Just happened to be standing on a roof with a mask and a costume? They goaded. Izuku rolled his eyes. "Well, I could say the same for you." "Oh ho. Big talk for a baby hero." They laughed. Izuku frowned. "You think I'm a hero?" They sighed, looking him up and down. "I've certainly seen worse." "Why? Not a hero? A villain, maybe?" Izuku shook his head and they lit up. "Or, a vigilante?" Izuku held his head a bit higher, but didn't refuse the guess. It seemed like the right option when they put their hands on their hips and stopped pacing in front of him. "Well, my goodness. I didn't realize we had a new one on the streets already. I suppose it is that time of year, isn't it? No matter." They hopped down, walked a few paces towards Izuku and looked him up and down. "Is this your first time out?" Izuku nodded, trying and failing to keep up with them and their mood changes. "Aha. Yep." They hummed. "Your costume looks fine but definitely not new. Do you need a supplier by chance? You'd be willing to give me one? Put you in contact, but schematics." They waved the thought away like it didn't matter. Izuku hummed. "What's the catch?" They grinned. "Come back to the roof tomorrow night." "Is that all?" "That's all." "And you swear this isn't just a weirdly elaborate scheme to kidnap me and steal me away?" No promises just yet." Izuku chuckled. "Then you have a tentative deal." "I'll hold you to that, kid." Izuku smirked. "I'd expect nothing less." Izuku left his house an hour earlier than he had last time, too excited about his night to wait around. He knew the risks he was taking. Well aware of them due to Hisashi's presentation that had lasted a full 2 hours before Inko broke it up. Izuku may not trust the person he had met on that rooftop, but he knew for a fact that it took an inherent sense of trust to believe he'd be meeting them there again. Trust in the situation or trust in the actions of the person, but he knew better than to trust someone he had just met. Regardless, he could use his own contact to get started in the underground. He didn't know much about support, never really spent his time delving into the world of mechanics, so it could do him some good to learn from someone else. Especially someone willing to help him out with his potential gear. And he knew that his parents were probably still in contact with people from their vigilante days, but he didn't want to bother them. He wasn't going to just walk around and rely on his parents to be able to make his dream come true. For as long as Izuku has been alive, he's only wanted to be in heroics. Yes, he makes money analyzing things, but that wasn't necessarily his career. That was a passion that fueled his dreams and led him to wanting to be in heroics more and more. He had always known he would need to make plans upon backup plans just in case he couldn't jump right into becoming a pro hero, but he still didn't want to wait around. He needed to help. That was a need for him. In his day-to-day life, Izuku actively sought out ways to help other people, whether it be an old lady crossing the street or sharing his homework answers with his peers sitting behind him. Izuku always wanted to help. So it only made sense that he'd chase after the one dream people told him he could never have. He wanted to be able to take away people's pain and worry the same way All Might was able to be able to simply smile and the public would know they were in capable hands. He loved the idea of caring for people, and for Izuku, heroics was the best way to achieve that. Of course, now he'd need to wait longer, possibly finish school and then worry about becoming a legal hero, but that was still something he wanted to do. No matter what. It was a need for him. Something Izuku could literally feel himself craving every second he spent cooped up inside, unable to walk around and help the public. It was something written and scarred into his bones. Something that determined every single path he'd walked in his life. Izuku needed to be a hero. He knew his parents worried over that fact. The fact that they knew Izuku breathed for it all, every bit and piece of the job, both the glory and the gore. He's certain that was one of the reasons they held back from training him themselves for so long. Their little dips into heroics could hardly be considered as such, at least, not by the public. Both were fueled by revenge and ran closer to villains than they did heroes while they were acting as vigilantes. Both had personal and selfish motives for defending Japan the way that they did, and he knew that alone had affected them when he mentioned becoming one himself. But they knew that refusing to train Izuku would just make the process that much worse, and Izuku didn't want to hurt his parents or feel any terrible way about him running around and breaking the law to fight the bad guys, but, well, like he said before, heroics was not a mere passion for Izuku. It was a need. The train screeched to a stop and Izuku walked off, shaking his head as he went towards the bathrooms. He needed to get out of his head and stop thinking about whether or not his parents were acting supportive about this backup plan he was going through with. They were nice enough to help train him and show him the gym they frequented. They've been nothing but supportive and encouraging since he introduced the plan to them, so he didn't have any room to doubt. Izuku pulled on his vigilante costume, pulling up the mask before slinging his bag over his shoulder and walking out, towards the building he had met the strange person upon. He took his time since he was so early, looking around and admiring a few things he hadn't really looked at before. The town square being one of them. It seemed as though downtown life was bright and lively, even at this time of night, but he didn't blame them. The square was more of a circle, with shops lining the outside ring and a magnificent fountain in the middle. He smiled to himself as he watched a mother try to grab her two kids out of the fountain, both of them soaking wet. Izuku turned down an alleyway, silently impressed with how clean the city managed to keep the dark routes. That was a struggle he noticed throughout Musufatu and wondered how Toyota had been able to do it. Maybe that was something he could research later on and see if he could do anything about it. That would be an interesting side project, especially if he gets his dad involved. He knew the man loved to help the environment and was the biggest reason Mom had caved and gotten them a composter for the house. Izuku weaved through the alleyways, getting further east of downtown, towards the more densely populated areas of the city. True, Toyota housed some of the richest families in their entire prefecture, but right next door to them were some of the poorest people in the prefecture, which was the cause for most of their crime rates. The staggering difference Izuku has seen in infrastructure alone had him feeling dizzy. He looked towards the 5-story building he had met the other person on, staring at it for a second. It was a nice brick, with strong-looking windows on each floor. Above the front door, the building read VCR Repair Shop, though he had no idea what that even meant. He crossed the street, getting closer towards the side he had used to climb up the ladder, and stopped when he saw the person standing there, waiting for him. Izuku blinked to himself before hurrying up his pace, DMN near freaking out. He hadn't gotten lost or anything while he was wandering, right? He thought he still had a few minutes before it was time to show up. They were still in the same outfit Izuku had met them in, but their dark red hair was pulled back into an intricate braid that fell in between their two batons. In the new light, he could see that they were a few shades darker than he first thought and seemed to have a necklace of some sort resting on their neck. He walked in front of them and they turned towards him, raising an eyebrow as Izuku DMN near apologized without introducing himself first. "Call me Zelda." They spoke up, nodding at him. It's nice to officially meet you. Likewise. And please, call me Hiro. Izuku spoke, still panting a bit from freaking out. Maybe he didn't need to apologize. Zelda seemed comfortable. Zelda snickered. Hiro? Did you just come up with that? Izuku flushed, glancing down at his shoes. Maybe. I'm sure you'll come up with something better later on. Zelda waved his embarrassment off, turning towards the other side of the roof. Introduce yourself however you'd like when the rest show up. Izuku blinked. Wait. The rest? Come on. Follow me. Zelda ignored his question and instead, took her 2 batons out, twirling them around herself and using the air to launch up the building, landing gracefully on the edge of the roof. Huh. So that must be her quirk then. A sort of air manipulation. That was really cool. Hiro, Zelda called out, crouching down as she looked down at him. Are you coming or what? Izuku shook himself out of his stupor and got to climbing the ladder, only mildly embarrassed that he had just stood there while she made her way up. He winced when the ladder groaned under his weight and moved faster, trying to avoid breaking the thing and ending up falling from this high up. He pulled himself up, looked around at the empty roof, and frowned at Zelda. Am I not understanding something? Zelda huffed. You're fine, they're just dash. Hey! Someone screamed, jumping over to their roof from the neighboring one, rolling as they landed before popping up and stabilizing themselves with a large staff. He had a massive grin that Izuku could see, but the top half of his face was covered in a visor with a hoodie pulled over and pinned to it. Izuku looked the pale-looking guy up and down, wondering if he had designed his own costume or not. He had a hoodie on, though Izuku was fairly certain it was custom-made for the man's nighttime activities. He had leggings on, and basketball shorts, with tennis shoes to match the blue colorings throughout the entire thing. Izuku blinked, watching with interest as the guy twirled around his staff, cracking a smile when he realized a sliver of the staff was glowing blue, from top to bottom. Perhaps blue was his favorite color or something. So how's it going? The guy leaned forward on his staff, looking overly excited to see Zelda. Zelda made a face as she crossed her arms. You're late. Calm down, alright. Geez. The guy pointed his thumb at her, rolling his eyes as he leaned towards Izuku. She can be so bossy, I swear. Still doesn't change the fact that you were late. Zelda pointed out. The guy huffed. How fast do you think I can get here? Msusfatu isn't exactly a jump away. Wait, Izuku cut in. You live in Musufada too? He bounced on his heels, leaning forwards as he stared at the man in front of him. The guy blinked at him before dramatically bowing. The name's Agner. Consider me your personal taxi to and from Toyota every night you're scheduled. Zelda whacked his head as she rolled her eyes at him. Ignore him, he's terrible at socializing normally. Izuku waved it away, trying to dissipate the awkwardness by chuckling. Ah, that's fine. I don't really mind at all. Agner lit up. See? I told you my tactics would get me friends. Kid, come here. We gotta take a photo or some sheet to commemorate this. Zelda sighed. I can't believe this is happening. Also, scheduled? Izuku questioned, looking towards Zelda. Wait, you don't know? Agner blinked, looking Izuku up and down. How new are you? It's his second time. Zelda answered for him. No way. But dash. School just started. Oh. Yeah, that would make sense. Agner nodded. Izuku looked back and forth between them, trying to keep up with their conversation. He didn't understand most of what they were talking about, but he knew he'd love to figure it out. They bicker like such a married couple, honestly. Someone snickered behind him. Izuku nodded along for a few seconds before pausing. Behind him? He turned slowly, taking in the girl standing behind him with her hands on her hips. She had a fox mask covering the top half of her face and the orange tank top that tucked into her black combat pants stood out against her dark skin. As she turned, Izuku saw her orange box braids fall around her face and shoulders that were long enough to reach the middle of her back. What? He whispered. She blinked a few times before focusing on him and grinning. Ah, right. I'm Midoriya. It's nice to meet you. Izuku stumbled back a few steps, finally getting some distance between them. Who dash? Oh, Midoriya. I didn't know you were coming by tonight. Agner greeted, looking excited to see her. Zelda sighed, glancing at Izuku. Sorry, Hiro. I've told her not to sneak up on people like that anymore. And I've told her that it's my #1 source of entertainment. Midoriya rolled her eyes, walking over to the other two. I don't know why she keeps forgetting that. Are you all vigilantes? Izuku cut in, needing to know the answer. He didn't know why, but he had always had it in his head that he'd be running around at night and not running into anyone but criminals. Maybe some underground heroes if he was so unlucky to run into them, but he certainly didn't expect to meet so many vigilantes on his second night of running around a foreign city at night. He thought he'd go through this process alone. Only being able to rely on his parents and being scared shitless about running into trouble that was too big for him to handle because backup wasn't going to be readily available. Agner grinned. You know it, kid. Izuku cleared his throat and looked around at the vigilantes once again, finally finishing his sentence when Zelda nodded, encouraging him. Why are there so many of you? Same reason you're out here, I'd guess. Debriya shrugged. We couldn't become heroes. Agner nodded. Yeah. They're lost though. Izuku blinked. All of you couldn't become heroes? Zelda crossed her arms over her chest. More like we were told we couldn't, but same difference. And let me tell ya, kid. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that anyone can become a hero. It's only the law that gives people an official title for it. And, that doesn't bother you? Izuku hesitantly asked. What? The law failing to recognize us? Agner laughed. We're working in the dead of night. We weren't ever expecting to be praised by the masses for this kind of thing. Oh. But, I mean, don't you need to run from villains and heroes while you're running your patrols? Izuku asked. Yeah, but we're not too concerned with that anymore. Agner shrugged. The legality issue doesn't really cross our minds anymore either. Debriya said with a smirk. So, Izuku drawled out, looking at them a bit apprehensively. You guys just don't care? Well, we don't really need to care about that anymore. Agner waved his hand, grinning. But, hey. If you're interested, I'm sure we could show you how we do it all, illegally. Izuku grinned back. I thought you'd never ask. Then come on, kid. Let's show you the world. Debriya said. Zelda sighed. Don't quote Aladdin when you talk about vigilantes. You're gonna scare the new ones away. Izuku smirked as they started bickering once again. He thinks he'll be able to get used to this just fine. Woohoo! Izuku screamed with a smile large enough to split his lips. He fell through the air, right alongside the skyscraper he had just jumped off of. The wind felt amazing and the view was spectacular from here. He could see the city, the lights, his reflection against the black night. He could see it all and feel the rest. She's coming in hot. Spread kid. Agner yelled from the neighboring roof. Izuku grinned, flipping around to face the sky and spreading his limbs out in the starfish position he had been instructed to. He watched with glee as Zelda dived towards him, arms reaching out. Quickly, she wrapped her legs around his torso and he wrapped his arms around her while straightening out his legs. She twirled her batons around, slapping them together and they snapped open to reveal a glider of some sort. She commanded the air, lifted the glider and then they were flying, cruising in the open air. It felt incredible. This is so cool. Izuku shouted over the wind, watching as they flew around the stars. Zelda didn't respond, but she seemed to agree as they looped around to fly for another few meters before turning towards the roof they started the night on. Can you somersault backwards? She asked. Izuku shrugged. I can try. Okay. On my count, drop and start rolling. She warned him. They flew around and surprisingly, Izuku could feel the difference between flying over the buildings and flying over open air. That made him nod to himself, letting his confidence grow as they dove down, flying closer towards the rooftop. He closed his eyes, and breathed. Drop. Izuku let go, quickly tucking into himself and protecting his neck as he flipped in the air before landing roughly, rolling awkwardly twice before he felt two hands grab him and stop him from continuing on. Oh dear Jesus, he needs to work on that a lot more before he decides to drop on a roof again. How awesome was that? Agner cheered, pulling Izuku up and patting the small rocks off of him. Izuku brightened up, sending a beaming smile towards him. Super awesome. Flying feels amazing. I know, right? Oh, that poor thing, stuck in the trap of a geek. Debriya sighed with faux sadness. Agner frowned. Hey, she's not wrong. Zelda pointed out as she put her now solid batons back into the straps across her back, smirking at Agner. Besides, we need to get serious. We only have so many hours. Yeah. Come on, hero. Agner beckoned him as he walked, standing around with the girls for a few seconds before plopping down. The girls followed suit, sitting down on the roof and Izuku rushed to join them. So, do you have any other plans for tonight? Agner asked with a bright grin. Izuku shrugged. I was planning on patrolling tonight. Let's not. Zelda spoke up. We should probably get you on the schedule before you start wandering around the city. So, you guys have a schedule? Izuku prodded. He wanted to know so much more about what was even happening with these three. Yep. There's a lot of us, so we decided to divide the city into sections and patrol around. Zelda explained. The heroes around here really don't care about us, especially since we've cooperated with them the entire time. We've got a long-standing contract with them, we keep helping them, none of us turn villain, and none of us get in their way. Setting up patrols was just an easy way to make sure we could all work together. Midoriya spoke up. Izuku waved his hands around as he squeezed his eyes shut, trying to comprehend what he was hearing. Wait. You mean to tell me you have a negotiation contract with the heroes in the city? And the police? Agner added. And the police? Izuku cried out. Zelda rolled her eyes at him. Of course we do. We don't want to go through the hassle of drawing a bunch of attention from the rest of the country. No one else really needs to know there's a group of vigilantes running around. Besides, Midoriya shrugged. If anyone were going to help us break the law, the police and heroes shouldn't be that big of a surprise. They make deals with most of the criminals around here to keep the peace, especially since that new mayor was elected in. Toshihiko Oda? Zelda clarified. Yeah, he's not awful, but people really liked the last mayor we had, so a few of the contracts the heroes had with us had to be changed around. Why would they need to be changed around? Izuku asked, not quite understanding. Do they hide this stuff from the mayor? They don't exactly hide the contracts from the mayor. Agner clarified. Zelda cleared her throat. He's right. Usually what happens is the police rewrite the wording to make it seem like something legitimate belongs there. They open a case file and hold the contracts and agreements there, and anyone who has access to their system can see them. It's pretty much the same process for the heroes too, except they have the case files available to share with the Hero Commission. Midoriya added on. Izuku blinked. That seemed like a mess. Agner snorted. It is a mess, bud. Oh God, he was thinking out loud again. Well, might as well get some answers. Wait. So then, why do they do it? Because it's good to have something on hand that proves we agreed to this. Zelda explained. On one hand, we have something that says we're allowed to be doing this, and on the other hand, they have something to fall back on if anyone finds out. Basically, we're doing illegal things, but legally, we're fine if some stupid hero ever tries to turn us in. Midoriya summed up. Izuku's jaw dropped. That's kinda cool. Agner snickered. It really is, isn't it? Oh, also, before I forget. We have a dinner every month, together, just to be able to meet up with everyone. Midoriya grinned. Just knock on the VCR door around midnight and we'll let you in. Wait, the VCR store? Izuku questioned. The roof that we met up on. The one we're currently on. Right. But, inside? Zelda smirked. Oh, yeah. I forgot to tell you, there's a lot more of us. We were just the only ones scheduled for tonight. Izuku blinked. A lot more, who, vigilantes? You got that right? Agner grinned. Just make sure to knock 3 times or Sloth is gonna beat your butt. I think I'm dreaming. Izuku murmured to himself. Not dreaming. It's just overwhelming. Zelda smiled. Go home, get some rest, and we'll be seeing you tomorrow, hero. Midnight, hero. Don't forget. Agner teased, waving a stern finger. Izuku nodded, gathering himself up and brushing off the small rocks that clung onto him. I'll see you guys tomorrow then. Izuku waved them goodbye and climbed down the ladder, letting out a satisfied sigh when he hit the ground. He barely remembered to take off his costume in the bathroom, roughly changing into his shorts and hoodie before finally hopping on the night train and letting his head fall back. He hadn't expected his night to go as well as it did, nor did he expect to meet more vigilantes. Even better, vigilantes that could operate in tandem with the police and surrounding heroes. He wondered if his parents knew about this. Izuku snickered to himself, recalling the level of detail Hisashi went through during his presentation about what to do when he sees law enforcement and how to get out of any sticky situation. No. They probably don't. But, at least Izuku will have an interesting story for them when he gets home. If he remembers to tell them the story before crashing. He wondered what might have changed between his time as a vigilante versus when his parents were out, running around. Maybe it was solely due to the fact that Izuku was hanging around people who seemed to want to help rather than do something for their own gain. Maybe it was because Izuku was too young and hadn't run into a problem yet. He didn't really know. To be completely honest, Izuku couldn't really care. With everything that he did and learned with those 3, he finally felt like he was on his way to becoming a hero, legal or not. He loved the idea of working in tandem with everyone, just to ensure the safety of the civilians. He enjoyed thinking about what that might look like for him. What that might mean for his patrols. He might even get to see a hero and patrol with them. Izuku looked out the window, almost screaming when he realized he was home already. He ran off, almost missing his stop, and huffed. He should start setting an alarm or something on his phone so he could sleep on the train and get off at his stop in time. Izuku walked back home and stumbled through the front door, trying his hardest to be quiet as he closed it and toed off his shoes. He was tired and felt filthy, but most of all, he felt great. He dropped down on the couch, unsure if he was currently able to even make it to his bedroom and unwilling to tempt fate any longer. He closed his eyes, smiling into the couch as he felt someone take his backpack off of him and set it on the ground next to him. "Good night," Izuku murmured sleepily. "Good night," Inko whispered, kissing his forehead before shutting the lights off with a fond smile. Izuku snapped his head up, groaning as he opened his eyes. He looked up towards the couch and huffed to himself. Of course he ended up falling off. What a surprise. "Oh, you're awake." Hisashi grinned as he walked through the living room. Izuku smiled back, awkwardly pulling himself off the floor. "Yeah. Yep. That I am." "Great. Make sure to grab some food before you get working on homework." Hisashi smiled before leaning closer, pretending to smell Izuku before pulling back and making a face. "You might want to take a shower first." "Why are you so awake this morning?" he asked, a bit huffy at his dad's comment. Hisashi blinked at him before pointing behind him, where the kitchen was. "It's almost noon, bud. That's how." "What?" Izuku straightened up, nearly jumping out of his skin and groaning as a headache settled in. "I'm missing school right now." Hisashi chuckled. "It's Friday, bud. Your live classes don't start till 2. "Oh. Yep, so go take a shower, eat, finish up whatever homework you need to, and then I want to hear all about your night." "Okay?" Hisashi smiled. Izuku nodded as he got off the couch. "Okay." He ran off, doing exactly as his father had suggested doing. He took a quick shower, finally changed out of the smelly clothes he had on and debated for a concerningly long time about throwing the costume in the laundry before forcing himself to do it. Then he raced into the kitchen, grabbed some food and ran back into his room to deal with some mind-numbing classes. He was thankful he had decided to push his classes back on Friday, since the school allowed students to select class times that worked for them along with days they could go. For example, his Mondays and Tuesdays were a bit full, with classes starting at 9 o'clock and ending around 16. Wednesdays and Fridays were nearly the same, except everything was expected to be turned in by Wednesday, which meant he often had to deal with discussion groups during the day, which meant class could essentially go on until 2100 hours because he didn't know when to stop debating with another person. And then on Thursdays his class time was usually dedicated towards study groups and presentations that are coming up, which, for now, let him out of school early. So really, school wasn't awful. He just didn't have a drive to actually do the work and care about it. Izuku was doing it, but he wasn't striving for valedictorian or anything. Not by a long shot. Once he finished, Izuku walked back into the kitchen, grabbed himself some water and walked out to the living room, settling in the chair across from his father. Hisashi set down his laptop, flipped his phone over, and stared at Izuku for a few seconds before he started smiling. "You're finished?" Izuku nodded and he watched his dad lean forward, looking incredibly invested in a story Izuku hadn't even begun yet. "Well? You gotta tell me what happened. I'm dying here." "Not too much." Izuku downplayed it, not wanting to give his dad too much information before he knew all the details. He also didn't want to get his hopes too far high about this whole situation quite yet. "A few of their friends came by and we talked for a while before I walked around the city again, just getting a feel. I didn't run into any villains." Hisashi hummed, narrowing his eyes at him but didn't say anything about his answers. "Well, that sounds like a nice time. Do they seem like friends?" Izuku shrugged, picking at his nails. "They seem friendly. Good enough for me." Izuku nodded. "That's what I was thinking." Hisashi clapped his hands and rubbed them together then, making his way towards the kitchen. "Well, I'm gonna get started on dinner, since your mother'll be here soon. What do you want?" Izuku dropped his head, resting it on the back of the chair. "I've already got plans for dinner, so you just cook whatever you'd like." "Plans?" Hisashi poked his head through the walkway. "With who?" Izuku hesitated. "People. Plans with some people." "Right," Hisashi said, sounding the furthest thing from convinced. Izuku was going to have to explain all of this later on, wasn't he? "Well, don't let me keep you then." Izuku rolled his eyes, groaning as he stood up and stretched. "I'll help with dinner if you'd like me to." Hisashi gave him a teasing grin. "I'll be fine. I promise not to blow up the kitchen. Besides, don't you have some homework you could be working on before you go out again? Or, maybe take a nap? I'll be fine." Izuku promised, looking towards his room. "I might just look at the homework, future homework, for the benefit." Hisashi raised his eyebrows and Izuku nodded, sticking with his story as he waltzed his way into his room and sat down at his desk, glancing at his laptop. He ignored it in favor of hopping on his phone, letting himself get absorbed with the hero fights he had missed out on over the past few days before he heard a soft knock on his door. "Zuku," his mom called out. He glanced towards his clock, nearly falling out of his chair when he noticed how late it had gotten. "You goin' out tonight?" Izuku swung his door open, smiling at his mother. "Yep. That's the plan." "All right, honey." She pulled him in for a hug and Izuku squeezed her back, smiling when she chuckled. "Your costume's in the dryer, by the way." "Thanks, Mama." She kissed his hair and pulled back. "Of course. Now, get going already. The sun is going to set soon." Izuku nodded, running around to grab all of the things he needed for tonight. He kissed both of his parents goodbye, taking care to shove his shoelaces under the tongue of his shoes this time to avoid tripping over himself before racing out the door and hopping on the late train. It was finally time for some excitement. Izuku raced around, dropping to his knees and sliding in between the villain's legs, grinning as he did so. F-. Grab him. He jumped back up, spinning around to avoid the spikes thrown his way. Izuku flipped over, nearly crashing into the alleyway wall when he avoided the kick aimed for his head. Refusing to allow himself to be too disorientated for long, Izuku spun around, kicking out and trying to settle into a stance. He knew it was a cheap shot going in, but he never expected the villain to grab his leg and flip him over. Izuku groaned, forcing himself to roll away as soon as he hit the ground. He blinked away the black spots, feeling his anger flare up again. He hated not being able to predict their moves. This is what they consider heroes nowadays? The villain to the left chuckled, flexing his fists. Izuku flared his nose, settling himself into a defensive stance, fists raised in front of his face. The villain jumped up, spinning around once before turning and kicking out. Izuku crossed his arms, gritting his teeth as he pushed against the kick, trying to knock them off balance. "I sure hope not." The other one finally answered his buddy as he knocked into Izuku, punching his ribs. Izuku wheezed, forcing himself to drop and roll back to gain some more ground. DMN. He might be an idiot, too. Izuku raced forward, leaping into the air before locking his legs around the villain's shoulder and pulling hard as he pushed him towards the ground. The villain yelped, digging his nails into Izuku's thighs. He narrowed his eyes, hunching closer to the villain and punching him as hard as he could manage, accidentally landing the hit right on his teeth. When the villain choked, finally letting his grip on him loosen, Izuku rolled off and got to his feet quickly. Izuku turned his attention towards the last villain, eyes widening when he didn't see him anywhere. Sheet. The air moved and Izuku felt someone behind him, only having enough time to register who it might be before getting kicked in the back, shoving to the ground harshly and straddling him. They grabbed his hair, audibly snarling before slamming his head down into the ground. Idiot of a hero. Izuku bucked up, pushing his upper body off the ground and blindly hitting his elbow towards the villain, putting as much power as he possibly could. He heard a grunt and felt the hold on his hair loosen. Izuku grit his teeth, hitting again before scrambling out from underneath him, climbing up from his hands and knees to turn himself around. He liked his teeth, sking on his lips, wincing when he felt his bottom one split open further, and spat the blood out. Izuku forced himself to ignore the blood running down from his nose, annoyed at the prospect of having to walk around the city with a busted lip and nose. Idiot of a villain. Izuku snarled back. The villain seemed to smirk at him as he gathered himself up off the ground, taking his time with it. Seems hypocritical for you to be critiquing, I'm not the one bleeding all over the alley. Izuku felt that irritation rise again and refused to give any warning before he ran towards him again, going low and tackling the villain down, struggling to pin his legs. The villain rolled them over and grinned before lighting his fist in a bright orange light and striking him in the chest. Izuku wheezed as he brought his legs up and kicked at the villain, launching him off of his body. He forced himself to get up, pretending to ignore the way his body protested the action. He needed to end this. That's all you've got, isn't it? The villain taunted. Izuku heard someone drop and glared at the villain, taking a few steps backwards. Someone landed right behind the villain, silently. Deadly. They pulled out a knife and dropped low, cutting at their inner thigh before bashing him against the alleyway wall, gently setting him down when the villain went limp. Izuku nearly gaped. He needed to figure out how to do that. You all good, bud? They called out, stepping closer. Izuku squinted, finally seeing the tall guy who had finished off the last villain. He had brown eyes and dark hair. He couldn't really see the man's outfit, but surprisingly enough, he was not wearing a mask of any kind. His clothes looked casual, like he had been working on something before he swung by. Yeah. I'm fine. Izuku sniffed, immediately regretting it and spitting out the blood that made its way into his mouth. He grimaced. How wonderful. The guy just chuckled. Right, well here. Take this. He held out a handkerchief and Izuku sighed, but allowed himself to take it. He was in no position to fight the gesture. Thanks. The guy waved him off, going back towards the villains and crouching near them. Don't mention it. I saw he hit you with a flame-covered fist. You burn anywhere? Izuku used his free hand to run down his chest, wincing when he went over the spots that were sure to bruise, but didn't feel anything noteworthy. The costume itself was a bit hot to the touch, but Izuku hadn't actually felt the heat during the fight. It would make sense, especially if Hisashi fireproofed the thing considering the man's quirk. Nah. I'm fine. The guy eyed him, obviously judging Izuku's answer as he hummed. Right. I've always considered the picture of perfect health to be covered in blood and bruises as well. Izuku flushed, feeling a spike of annoyance flood through him and went to protest before the man held up a hand, chuckling a bit. Whoa, just poking fun. We've all been there. He laughed off as he picked all of the weapons out of the villain's pockets, flipping one over a couple times before taking it and moving on to the other passed-out villain. Besides, I can't judge. I have no reason to get caught off guard and I have gotten plenty of injuries for being forgetful during a fight. Izuku breathed out, trying to calm himself as the adrenaline left him and he focused on actually having a discussion. Right. Not to be, well, nosy, but what are you doing? Izuku asked. He wasn't extremely interested in the answer, but he really needed to stop talking about what he could have done better during that fight right now. He was in no mood to get critiqued. Again. Outsourcing. Was the simple answer that came. Izuku blinked, watching as the man lit up when he found a pair of knuckle dusters on the villain and quickly slipped those into his pocket. Right. Oh, I forgot. Call me Sloth. The guy spoke up, looking a bit apologetic. Izuku startled, realizing neither one of them had introduced themselves. Just fantastic. He was bloodied, on edge, and he had completely forgotten his manners. Oh. Call me Hero. From vigilante to vigilante, make sure to watch what they're doing at all times. Sloth warned as he patted down the last villain, the one Izuku knocked out at the start of the fight before he dealt with the other two. In groups like these, you can't afford to not know what one of them are doing. You don't think I have enough situational awareness? Izuku asked, trying to figure out what exactly the man was warning him about and shoving his temper back down. No need to get prickly about advice. Oh, you certainly have situational awareness, but you need to learn how to use it to your advantage. Sloth lectured as he walked closer, pulling out his phone and texting someone. Your ability to see his next moves makes no difference if you can't react to them fast enough. Right. Izuku nodded. Sloth clasped him on the back, finally putting his phone back in his pocket and spinning his newly obtained knives around with his other hand. Don't worry too much about it, bud. You did great for your first patrol and hey, if you ever want to train with us, just text me. It'd be fun to work something out. Thanks. I'll think about it. Izuku smiled back, making sure not to show teeth. He had no idea how bloody his face still was. Izuku let out an inaudible sigh and folded the handkerchief over once, finding a clean spot to use so he could look semi-presentable again. Oh, yeah, I texted the police for ya. Somebody should be swinging by any minute or so. They're pretty chill about first-timers, so don't worry yourself about running away when they show up. Sloth explained. Izuku nodded his agreement and he watched Sloth salute him before running off, going back to his original route. He only had to wait around for a few minutes before a police car pulled up and a tall guy stepped out of the cruiser. Izuku looked him up and down, taking him in. He was probably in his late 20s with a thick, but small beard growing, black hair that was outgrowing its toss-top hairstyle it was clearly cut as. The officer sighed and set a cup of coffee on the top of his cruiser before reaching back in and grabbing a few HNDCFFS. The man walked around, handcuffing the first villain before yawning loudly. Right. Can you toss these guys in the cruiser for me once they're handcuffed? Izuku nodded. Yeah. Of course. They got to work, with Izuku settling them in the car and the very tired man making sure the quirk canceling. HNDCFFS were activated, connected with his cruiser, and tight around their wrists. He grabbed the last one, roughly shoving the villain next to his buddies before slamming the door closed. The officer yawned again, grabbed his coffee cup and leaned against the car, obviously fighting off sleep. Izuku wondered if the man would make it back to the station without falling asleep and being knocked out more than the villains in his car. Thanks for this. The officer said to him before taking a sip of his coffee and sighing softly. Are you new by any chance? Izuku nodded. Yeah. First patrol? Yep. Ah. Well, I'm sure you're doing good. The officer grinned at him tiredly as he took another sip of his coffee. My name's Paul. You'll get to know the night shift pretty well over the next couple months, so feel free to ask any of us for our numbers if you want to get our attention faster than a 110 dispatch call like your friend did. Wow. Thank you. Izuku tripped over his words, not expecting that. Paul waved him off. Of course. It's my job. Do you have a name for us yet? Izuku winced, rubbing the back of his neck. Not really. Paul chuckled. Don't worry about it, kid. I'm sure you'll come up with something interesting soon enough. Anywosies, I gotta get going before they wake up and start trying to cause trouble. But, be careful, stay safe, and don't be afraid to call us in for backup if you need to. Izuku nodded and stood at the edge of the alleyway, watching as Paul drove off, back towards the police station with his haul of villains. He pinched himself on the arm then, just to make sure he wasn't stuck in some elaborate fever dream. Izuku blinked, trying to comprehend what had just happened. He still felt like he was in a dream by the time he got around to leaving the alleyway. Izuku felt like he was in a daze as he spent the rest of his patrol wandering around the city, simply getting a feel for everything and making sure he didn't run into anyone else's routes. He frowned when his phone buzzed, taking it out and humming to himself when he realized it had hit midnight already. He glanced around, grinning to himself when he realized he was close. Izuku jogged the rest of the way to the repair shop, finding the back door and breathing in. This was it. He brought up his fist and knocked 3 times, as he had been instructed. He waited for a few seconds, wincing when he heard laughter through the door. Izuku waited a few more seconds before knocking on the door thrice, louder this time. What's the password? A man with a low voice demanded. Izuku panicked. Nah, I'm just playing. They laughed, cracking the door open. Izuku blinked when he saw Sloth, now dressed in sweatpants and a faded t-shirt. Hero? Sloth questioned as the man shoved the door open the rest of the way. Well DMN, I guess it is your first night here, isn't it? Come on inside. Izuku nodded, slipping past the door and looking around. It wasn't really a repair shop inside, but rather a spacious garage. To the left of him, there were a few cars lined on and one sitting on a lift. To the right, there was a huge garage door that Izuku was positive he'd never seen on the outside before. There was a desk shoved into a far corner near the cars that looked as messy as Izuku's brain, and right in front of him were a lot of people sitting and standing at a long picnic table, with food lining the middle. Don't take your shoes off in here. Sloth warned. There's a couple of spots on the ground that I don't think are oil. Before Izuku could even think about that, he heard someone shout his name. Hero! Over here! He looked over to see Agner waving him over, and Izuku smiled, pulling down his mask to rest on his neck before walking over to join him. DMN, kid. Debriya looked him up and down. You win? He scoffed. Not really. Sloth came at the last minute. Agner whistled as Zelda sat down next to them and wordlessly handed Izuku a package of wet wipes. Yeah, Sloth's cool. And hey, at least the villain got taken down, am I right? Izuku nodded as he pulled his mask down for the second time that night, folding it under his neck so he wouldn't smear blood all over himself. You have a good point. I always do. Agner said, satisfied with himself until Zelda threw a bottle of water at his head. Izuku snickered as he sat down in between Agner and Debriya, getting to work with the wet wipes and cleaning himself up better than he had been able to in the alleyway. Oh, hey, can I use one of those real quick? Someone asked, behind him. Izuku turned around, seeing a girl with pink dreadlocks styled into a low bob and golden eyes staring at him, holding a hand over her eyebrow, blood dripping between her fingers. She smiled sheepishly and Izuku nearly laughed. Of course. He said, grabbing them and holding the package out for her. She grabbed one and wiped off her hands before blotting the cut she had gotten. I haven't met you before. The name's Amora. What's yours? Izuku coughed awkwardly, trying not to make a face. Just, call me Hero for now. Please. She laughed brightly. Don't worry about it. I made everyone call me Pinku until I settled on a name. Pinku? Yeah. After my hair. She grinned. I was a bit lazy when I first started out, but don't feel pressured to give yourself a huge name just yet. People don't care about that kinda stuff around here. Oh. Izuku blinked. Well, thanks. Yeah. Amora. What did you do? Get your butt handed to you again? Some girl cackled from the other side of the garage. She rolled her eyes. You're one to talk, Scar. I'm still beating you 67, maybe I should ask you how your patrol went, Amora quickly stalked towards the other girl, pinning her with a vicious grin. I heard from Paul that you got a nasty hit to your head tonight. Do you need some ice, maybe? Oi, F off. Scar scoffed, poking her in the chest. At least I didn't get cut by some wannabe bladesmith. Izuku stared at them, not quite comprehending what he was seeing. Are they? Oh, they're fine. Agner waved him off as he piled more food on his plate. They're best friends. Huh? I'm pretty sure they're dating. Debriya whispered in his ear as she grabbed a spring roll. Izuku nodded absent-mindedly and forced himself to focus on building up his plate while he was here. There was a certifiable buffet line down the middle of the picnic and more of the food was disappearing as fast as Izuku could blink. He grabbed what he wanted, overly impressed to take a bite of the curry and realize it had quite a kick to it before finally piling everything up. Agner grabbed one of his spring rolls from his plate and shoved it in his mouth before he could protest. Izuku stared at him, frown in place, and refused to blink. Oh, yeah. Debriya startled Izuku into blinking and he scowled as he turned away, shoveling rice and curry into his mouth. He looked over to see Debriya grinning as she straightened her back slightly and spoke loudly to the whole group. I saw Aizawa today. The entire group groaned in unison. No way. Izuku perked up, quickly swallowing his food. You guys know Aizawa? The teacher at UA? The very one. Izuku confirmed. Agner scoffed bitterly. Yeah, of course we know him. How do you know him? Zelda asked. Izuku tapped his chopsticks against his plate, looking down and away from everyone else's eyes. Ah, I used to be in his class. The garage went quiet for a second and Izuku looked up, worried that he might have overshared on accident or did something to make them regret meeting with him and treating him like one of us. Agner whispered under his breath. Izuku blinked at him. Excuse me? You were expelled from his class? Class 1A? The hero course? Izuku turned to his right, leaning over to see the vigilante speaking to him from the other end of the table. He thinks they introduced themselves as Scarlet but he honestly wasn't too sure. Izuku nodded. Yeah. Not my finest moment. Oh? Did you give him a real reason to kick you? Debriya asked. Izuku shrugged. I guess I just had too much faith in him when I met him. I didn't think he'd be quirkist. Agner hummed. Yeah, he doesn't like people he can't place. What's your quirk, anyways? You do not need to answer that if you don't want to. Zelda said firmly, cutting a sharp glare towards Agner, who winced. No, it's all right. Izuku said, picking at his food. It's not like I have one to tell you about anyway. Oh my god. Agner's jaw dropped. You're quirkless? Holy shit, dude. Amora giggled from across the table, laughing louder and slapping Scar's back. I can't believe this. Izuku looked around, not entirely sure if they were making fun of them or not. Honestly, he couldn't place their reactions at all and it was terrifying him. Please, I'll sign a contract if I need to, but spare me if you ever go full villain. Izuku snapped his head over to look at Sloth, the guy who, by all means, should not be worrying about someone like him. What? Why would I do that? Zelda rolled her eyes. Cause our lives SCKED. She said bluntly. We couldn't imagine the sorts of shitshows you were forced to deal with. Yeah, Agner laughed, wiping away a tear. And also, it's amazing to think about you kicking the villains but without a quirk to fall back on. That's the best part. Amora cackled. You guys don't care? Izuku looked at them disbelievingly. Debriya scoffed. I can poison people if I bite them. Hell, Scar right there only has the ability to talk to cats. That's it. You being quirkless means nothing to us. Except we get more entertainment than we did before. Agner cut in. Debriya nodded. So true. Entertainment? Do you understand just how hilarious it is to see a 14-year-old take out villains? Debriya grinned. Cause, let me tell you, it's the best part of my week. You should have seen him when he was out there. Sloth grinned. Flipped over an idiot and punched M right in the teeth. That's so awesome. Hey, maybe that's what you should name yourself. Agner laughed. Izuku rolled his eyes. What? The Violent Tooth Fairy? No, don't be silly. The Green Dragon. Oh come on. I think he'd do good with a name like Byako. Debriya said. Tiger? Agner scrunched his nose. But, why? He doesn't really scream dragon to me. Tiger makes sense. Debriya pointed out before grabbing a rise ball and tossing it in her mouth. Agner hummed, looking him up and down. She has a good point. Izuku coughed into his hand, trying to figure out how he felt about this. Ah, thank you. I think. Anytime, kid. Oh, did I tell you about the new guy at my work? He's an odd one. Agner chuckled. Wait, work? Izuku asked. Oh, right. I just work at a convenience store. Easy money, easy hours. Agner explained. Izuku nodded. Oh, okay. Yeah. My boss is pretty nice, hires anyone he thinks could use the money, but that also means some of my coworkers can be a little, mentally unstable? Scar cut in. I was gonna say in need of a therapist, but that works too. Agner smirked. That doesn't really sound fun. Izuku said as he picked up a few pieces of meat and shoved them into his mouth. Yeah, well, work isn't all that exciting, kid. For example, I work with a bunch of idiots. Scar grumbled, poking at their food. Being a CPA for the commission is not for the faint of heart, let me tell ya. The commission? Izuku asked. Yeah. I work from home, but a few times a year I have to travel down to Osaka to meet up with them. Scar explained. Every time I go, I remember why I love working from home so much. Oh, that's really cool. Izuku said, turning his attention towards the rest of the table that was not so subtly listening to their conversation. So what do you guys do then? Are you all in heroics in some way? Izuku asked, leaning forwards. Not really. I only fix cars. And trucks. Sloth shoved some food in his mouth before talking again. Vehicles, really? I fix up vehicles. Really? But dash. Hee. We can't all be geniuses around here, hero. Amora shrugged, a small grin playing on her lips. Hell, I run a coffee shop and bake food all day. Wait, you do what? Izuku tried not to gap as he looked over at Sloth and Amora. Amora giggled. I bought a coffee shop in Nagoya a few years ago. Turns out, rich people love their coffee and I've always wanted to run my own business. Really? Yep. She grinned. And, not to brag, but I make some pretty good dorayaki. Oh my god, she also makes this killer matcha crepe cake. You gotta swing by and try it sometime. Agner said, nodding his head up and down. The point she's trying to make here, Zelda spoke up, poking at her rice, is that everyone here does what they want to do, no matter if that's in the field of heroics or not. The only thing that really connects us is the fact that we were all expelled by Aizawa at one point. That's actually really cool. Izuku muttered to himself, blinking rapidly as he processed the information. Knowing that the vigilantes here were more than just unlawful heroes spun a whole new perspective for him. They all had lives outside of vigilantism and did something other than run around and beat up the bad guys. They contributed to society in a way Izuku had never given the time of day. Sloth fixed up cars, Amora made sure people had food and coffee. Even if they didn't see it, Izuku knew they were helping people every single day, whether they wanted to admit it or not. They might be more than vigilantes, but in Izuku's eyes, they were all acting like heroes. But, well, he did have to wonder. Do you guys ever hate Aizawa for what he did to you? Izuku asked, looking down at his plate to avoid seeing their reactions. He had no idea if the man was still a touchy subject for them. Izuku himself wasn't even sure how he felt about him right then. I mean don't get me wrong, I'm never gonna like the guy, but I don't actually hate him, you know? Agner said with a shrug. Zelda nodded along, pointing at him. What he said? I definitely don't hate him. I mostly hate that he still hasn't gotten over himself and is still on that weird power trip of his. Debriya hummed. Yeah, he needs a reality check. Every time he expels someone, they end up out here. Out here? Izuku asked, looking up. Agner nodded. Yeah. You know all of us were expelled from heroics. Aizawa didn't believe in a single one of us. But still, Zelda added. I really thought after last time he would have at least dialed back the expulsions. Maybe we should talk to Nizu again to make sure. Wait. What happened last time? Izuku leaned forward, staring at them intently. Agner sighed. Well, there was another guy from our class, what should be this year's class 2A, he pointed to Zelda and Debriya and Izuku nodded. And, well, he thought he was too strong to be considered anything less than a hero. Zelda scoffed. Yeah. He deserved the expulsion, but the problem was that no one tried to help him after it happened. Since he had lined up his entire life for heroics, he had no other backup option and with an expulsion from UA tainting his record, he couldn't apply for any of the schools around here. Debriya spoke up then. Yeah. Last I heard, the only school that would take him was all the way in Fukuoka, no heroics course available. And it was a no-name school at that. Agner gestured towards her. And because of that, he was angry and mad and decided he deserved revenge. Debriya sighed, turning towards Izuku, looking oddly somber. We found him before he could go through with his plans for Aizawa, but since he wouldn't listen to reason, we dropped him off at the police station, hoping it would knock some sense into him. Zelda clicked her tongue, poking at her food. He's still in the mental hospital because of what he confessed to wanting to do to Aizawa, and the last I checked, he wasn't making any progress in therapy. Agner huffed. The point is, some people don't deserve to be expelled by UA without a fallback plan provided to them. That guy, although arrogant and annoying, would have done really well in support. He loved making his own gear. Excelled at it actually. Aizawa though, he just expels kids and tells them good luck as they try to figure out life with that black mark messing their entire schooling record up. Debriya nodded. I even had to stand in front of a board at UA to petition the mark off of mine so I could get into the school I wanted. That's the only reason I was even invited to study medicine and take the dual credit classes I needed for university. Oh, yeah. Did you get that internship? Amora piped up. Debriya nodded. Yep. Jaku Hospital for 6 weeks next semester. Nice. But, Izuku floundered for a moment. How can he not know? Agner sighed, looking oddly nostalgic. Ignorance truly is bliss, I suppose. Debriya nodded, looking as nostalgic as Agner. Yeah. If only I had been blessed with zero self-awareness. Agner hummed. It sounds like a dream, doesn't it? An exciting one. Zelda rolled her eyes at the two. Shut up, you idiots. You would hate not being self-aware enough to outsmart your coworkers. She makes a good point. She really does. Izuku hummed to himself as they continued to bicker, mulling everything he had just learned over as he sipped on his water. He supposed his new friends were quite wise when they wanted to be. There's an interesting concept that Izuku likes to think about, whenever he can't sleep and he's forced to stay inside because he can't go out 3 nights in a row. He also tends to think about this concept whenever he doesn't feel like doing an essay of his right then. Hubris. Just the concept itself has always been fascinating to Izuku, especially as time wore on. He had been surrounded by it constantly, growing up with Bakugo and other like-minded peers and teachers. It's important to distinguish the different meanings of hubris and self-confidence. Izuku thinks it's one of the most important distinctions to make. Self-confidence helps people as they become more, while hubris holds people in their own past, unable to escape from its confines without help. And, when exploring the idea of hubris, whether it be your own or someone else's, there's a saying you should keep in mind before you analyze further or look too closely. Empires always have the hubris to think they are indestructible, when in fact they are always unsustainable. This is why hubris is such an interesting concept. Especially to Izuku. Because he can lay in bed and think about all the things he knows, all the things he is capable of, and relax in the knowledge that he knows how to humble himself and steer clear from letting his small amount of pride consume him until he is nothing more than a shell of the personality he was before. It's fascinating to watch what happens to people. Perhaps that makes him an immoral wannabe philosopher or scientist, but he loves seeing the marks of hubris in others. It's interesting to him. The fact that it was such a large issue, especially in their society, but no one did anything about it. They let those who had hubris call themselves confident and powerful, whether they were heroes or villains. Hubris dictated much in this society. Especially now. It led others down different paths, some succumbing to the demented and broken, others diving straight into the depths of hell when all they saw was the heavens. Where there is a will, hubris will make a way. Izuku couldn't help but wonder if it had always been this way. If the world they lived in had never experienced anything other than rulers. Whose downfall was their hubris? He wondered how many times Mother Nature had sighed as she watched humanity run around, playing high and mighty until they were knocked down from their pedestal, suddenly lost and confused in a world that refused to care for someone beneath them. He wondered if hubris was like history. Of course, hubris had a hand in creating the history that Izuku was taught. He knew victors were the ones who distributed the tales about their trials and woes. He knew the ones who conquered were the ones telling them the stories. But, he wondered if someone had the capability of learning from their hubris. Hubris wasn't the same thing as pride, though they shared many qualities. Hubris was a devastating force, something no one wanted to experience, and only the insane looked forward to feeling the maniacal high that hubris provided them. Hubris, Izuku thought, was comparable to the sea. It was powerful, all-defining in a way not many other things could be. Hubris was vast and infamous for pulling anyone under, without discrimination or care. Hubris, in one sentence, could be described as a delusional sense of success and arrogant beyond belief. At least, that's how Izuku would bother describing it. Zuku, come out here. Izuku sighed, blinking himself back to the real world and glanced at the paper he was supposed to be writing. He really needed to stop getting into debates with himself when he was supposed to be working on homework. It was not healthy for his study schedule. Well, it's not really healthy for any schedule of his. Zuku, coming. Izuku yelled back, scrambling away from his desk and tripping over his chair before rightening himself and pulling open the door. He made his way out towards the dining table to see his mother sorting through the mail, her coat and purse hanging off the back of the chair next to her. He hadn't even heard her come home. Hey! Izuku said, acting as casual as he could as he walked over to her, giving her a side hug before turning his attention to the bills he had in her hands. "How was work?" Inko hummed, tossing another bill onto the table. SOSO. Lots of meetings, lots of small-minded people opening their big mouths. She cleared her throat. "Anyways, long day. I think a letter just arrived for you." "A letter?" Izuku questioned, taking it gingerly from his mother's hands. "I'm pretty sure. You'll have to tell me about it when you figure out what it's for." She smiled. Izuku nodded at her, a silent promise. "I will." He tore into it as he started walking back into his room, closing his door as he took out the letter and started to read. Izuku grinned to himself as he did so, giddy with excitement by the time he had finished. A few nights ago, Izuku had looked into jobs that could build up his strength, mostly because he needed more muscle than he currently had and did much better about actually working for it when he was doing something rather than going to a gym. One thing led to another and Izuku had found himself looking at job listings for demolition crews in the area. Apparently it was a huge job market, especially so since he was near Tokyo, which meant he was surrounded by the heroes that tended to leave behind the most damage after their fights. He had never really expected them to get back with him after he sent in his resume and application on a whim. Izuku scanned the letter for a start date, letting his breath catch when he finally found it. Start date, 09/10/2155. Holy shit. That's soon. That's in a few days. That's soon. Izuku panicked, throwing his all into researching the entire trade for the next few days before he was due to meet his new boss and learn the ropes. He didn't want to fall behind too quickly, even though this would be his first day on the job. He explained to his parents what was going on and they seemed supportive enough, with Hisashi cracking jokes about how Izuku might finally manage to flip him over on his back one of these days and Inko forcing him to promise to drop the job if it interferes with his grades or makes him trip up and or fall asleep during his nights out. With their agreements made and Izuku researching as much as he possibly could, he felt as ready as he could possibly be when the day came. Izuku took the train to get closer to the inner city, where the demolition team was currently at. Apparently his new boss would be there and wanted to throw Izuku right into the mix without meeting him in an office, explaining boring paperwork details and going through pointless meetings. It didn't matter much to him what the process would be, so long as he would work on something. He was excited to do something like this. Contribute to Japan in this way. Infrastructure wasn't something Izuku had originally worried about, but now, after so many days of non-stop research, Izuku couldn't help but be a little excited about all of this. The demolition business was booming, especially around this area, solely due to the fact that they had some super destructive hero fights around here. Now, they were all the hero's fault. Most often the villains would goad them into a corner and the hero would need to refuse to hold back, fighting with everything they had. Of course, that meant more than a few buildings would come down and more of Japan's infrastructure would need to be rebuilt. The whole concept was baffling as much as it was laughable. Heroes? Destroying the city in order to save it? It made a crazy amount of sense. Even when the villains weren't goading heroes into metaphorical corners, hero fights always went live and got more coverage if they were super destructive. People loved watching the long, drawn-out fights, even though the heroes were obviously playing a marketing scheme with the villains until they needed to detail them. It's the reason why merch sales go up every time All Might has a long fight. It's the reason why Endeavor gets more public support on the internet each time his takedowns are recorded. He supposed that's why there were so many workers as he walked up to the site, looking around curiously. There were a couple of men tossing huge chunks of rubble into a pile, with a girl driving around a bobcat and picking the rubble up before moving it somewhere Izuku couldn't see. The entire place was a minefield of rubble, dust, and wires, although a clear back had been bulldozed in, leading Izuku to the trailer the letter had mentioned. He nodded to himself, ready and excited for this before knocking on the door a few times. The door flung open and a very large and tall man stood in front of him. His broad shoulders, chiseled face, and red hair nearly reminded him of Endeavor for a second before he mentally shook that thought away. Midoriya, right? Izuku nodded. Good. Call me Mizuo. If you did something wrong, or you did something that requires me to do some paperwork, call me Bekov. Izuku nodded again and Mizuo moved around the trailer, shoving a few clothes to the side, grumbling to himself as he did so before turning around to fully face him. Nice to meet ya, kid. Mizuo looked him over before nodding once as he tucked a helmet under an arm and grabbed a clipboard. Let's get out to the site, alright? Izuku nodded and stood still as his new boss maneuvered around the trailer, grunting a bit as he pushed the door open further, letting it close behind him and walked off, Izuku following him silently. He looked around at the area he hadn't been able to, impressed to already see people working on this side of the block as well, either shoveling dirt around, operating some big equipment or using their quirks to clear the way. Now, I don't care who you are, what quirk you've got to offer and any of that jazz. All you need to do is promise me you can get dirty and finish a job. Got that? Izuku nodded. Good. I'll stick you with one of the nicer trainers we got. Don't make the mistake of underestimating her though. She does have full permission to send idiots she disapproves of into the stratosphere. Izuku nodded, trying not to geek out about being able to see a quirk like that in action. Maybe she'll use it during demolition and Izuku can freak out about it once he gets home. How weird would it be to record her so he could analyze it? Alright kid. Mizuho stopped, turning around and handing him a paint-chipped yellow hazard helmet. Do the job and get it done right. Don't fall, get injured, or do anything that requires me to do insurance paperwork. And most of all, don't be an idiot. Mizuho pointed over towards a nice-looking girl with a brown bob who was wiping sweat off of her forehead. She's your trainer. You're with her until I say otherwise. Go. Izuku nodded, walking over to her as quickly as he could. He did not want his new boss to think he was lazing around on the first second of the first day. That would not be good for his mental stability. Hi. Izuku cleared his throat, looking around a bit awkwardly when the girl didn't seem to hear him. Hi. She whipped around, looking annoyed before she untensed her shoulders and let out a breath. Oh. Are you my trainee? Izuku nodded and she hummed. Have we met before? I don't. Izuku paused, staring at her intently. Actually, I think, do you go to UA by any chance? Her eyes lit up and she gasped. Oh. I think, you were the plane guy, right? The one who helped save me from that big, crazy robot. Izuku blinked. Ah. Right. The zero-pointer, a robot taller than the 5-story buildings scattered around the mock city they had taken their entrance exam in. He doesn't clearly remember what happened, mostly because he had seen the girl trapped under some rubble from the rooftop he had been perched on and jumped onto the robot, stabbing it with the stop sign he had been using to take other robots out with. He knew he had hit some wires, electrocuted himself and fell off. Izuku remembered a slap to his cheek, pain, and waking up to recovery girl scolding some brown-haired girl sitting beside him, an ice pack held tightly to her ankle. Maybe. Wait. Didn't you save me? She blushed, her cheeks turning even redder and cleared her throat. Ah. That's a bit embarrassing. I ended up using my quirk on you to make sure you wouldn't hit the ground. Besides, you're the one who took out the robot. Izuku smiled. Then let's think of that as a team effort. She grinned and stuck her hand out. Deal. I'm Uraraka by the way. Uraraka Ochako. Midoriya Izuku. Izuku responded, shaking her hand. Uraraka let go and turned, walking away from him. Well, we've got a lot of work to do. I'm not too sure why you got a job with this group, but I know they're always looking for extra hands to help them sort through all this stuff. Izuku hummed, contemplating his answer. I wanted to get stronger faster than I had been. Besides, this seemed like a good place to spend my time. Helping the people of the city. That's right, you were expelled and all that. But, well, Aizawa-sensei did say you were transferred out, whatever that even meant. Uraraka scoffed, turning around and walking backwards to talk with Izuku. I still can't believe he said that. Ida and I looked all over that school before we realized why we couldn't find you. Izuku blinked. He hadn't thought Aizawa would say anything to confuse the students. Simply tell them he was expelled and wouldn't be returning. That seemed simple enough, blunt, and straight to the point. All things Aizawa seemingly loved. Yeah, no. Izuku shook his head, trying not to sound so annoyed. I was expelled, plain and simple. I'm doing school online right now until I can figure out what specialty program would take me this far into their timetables. And? Uraraka pushed. And, what? Oh come on, Midori. You were one of the most heroic guys in that class. And I'm not just saying that, 'cause you saved me or anything, but you seemed to care for everyone there. Her face softened then, and Izuku broke eye contact. Everyone in Class A seems to really miss you. You made quite the impact with just a few hours, you know. Okay? Izuku said, trying to understand what Uraraka was getting at. She huffed. Okay, so, what are you doing? Heroics, taking jobs like these? Maybe volunteering at one of those emergency call places? What are they called, dispatchers or something? No. No. Izuku waved his hands, trying to get rid of all of her crazy ideas about his life. Especially since she sounded 2 guesses away from vigilante, and Izuku was unwilling to deal with that close of a call today. Just school and work like this. Although, now that you said it, volunteering doesn't sound like a bad idea. Uraraka giggled, turning around in time to step over a big chunk of rubble and walk under some hanging wires. I volunteer at a soup kitchen whenever I have the time. Usually on the weekends. It helps. She shrugged when Izuku made a questioning noise. It makes me feel like I'm already a hero, able to help people. Izuku nodded. He completely understood the need to get out there and start helping others then and there. No one really wanted to wait a whole 3 years before they got their official hero licenses, and Izuku was lucky enough to have found such an intricate system within the Grey Lines that he wasn't one of the many who were forced to wait that long before they could start doing some good. But I'm also working here so I can get stronger for the sports festival coming up. Uraraka grinned. I want to take home that medal. Izuku smiled at her. I have no doubt you'll be able to do it. She nodded, and it was silent for a few seconds before she cleared her throat. Right, well, thanks. But, never mind that. Let's put you to work. There's a few things you need to know, mostly about how to move rubble like this safely, and then you'll be good to go for the day. Safely, like, don't drop it on my feet? Izuku joked. Uraraka giggled. Yeah, but also, whenever heroes knock down entire blocks like this, the concrete won't always have the same integrity, which means when we move it, we need to be careful. Besides, most of our area will either have pipes stuck in them or wires. Both of which are not our friends. Izuku hummed. Then, show me what to do. Gladly. Uraraka grinned. Izuku sighed to himself as he sat down on the bench, letting his head fall back slightly as he held his food loosely in his hands. The sky was still relatively light, although the sun was just beginning to set after their long day working. Uraraka groaned next to him, stretching out and flexing her fingers as she set her food to the side. I am so sore. Uraraka bemoaned. Izuku nodded. He wasn't positive he'd be able to walk home at this point. Aha. And I'm hungry. Uraraka groaned. Izuku huffed a laugh. Well, we can fix that, can't we? He forced himself to sit up straight, looking down at his ramen that was sure to be warmed up and ready to eat at this point, cracking his chopsticks before opening the lid and stirring it all together. He looked over to see Uraraka blindly grab for her own food, pulling apart her steamed bun before blowing on it. They had decided to hit the convenience store before heading home, knowing that they'd want some real food before they passed out in bed and forgot about dinner. Izuku had been the one to suggest it, especially since his father had refused to let him out of the house without some money, so he made sure to cover the costs for Uraraka since he was the one who offered. Luckily, she let it happen without too much of a fight, and they were able to enjoy their respective meals with one another on a park bench close by. Izuku watched as an older couple walked past them, holding hands and laughing with one another. A few kids were still out and about, though they were playing a very lazy version of hide-and-seek behind 2 different trees. They sat in silence, simply enjoying the moment. Izuku had never been more grateful. Hey, let's take a picture. Uraraka suddenly spoke up, startling Izuku as he ate the last of his noodles. What? She pulled out her phone with a big grin, setting aside her trash. Oh, come on. We need to take a picture together. Izuku pulled a face. Why? Because I need something to use as your profile photo. And I just bet Mina 1,000 yen that I could surprise her in homeroom tomorrow. Uraraka casually said as she pulled open the camera function. Izuku sighed, but scooted closer to her and let himself smile softly into the camera lens. Uraraka grinned, wide and toothily, as she slung an arm around his shoulders and took a few pictures. She separated from him quickly enough to gush over the photos and showed him the screen in time to see his face, cropped and a silly bunny ears filter on him, before she saved it as his profile photo under his number. He sighed, pretending to be sad about it for a few seconds until his phone buzzed and he looked down, realizing she had sent him the pictures as well. Oh, Karma was going to be sweet when he got around to drawing random doodles on her face and in her hair. Thanks for this, Midori. Uraraka said, tucking her phone away. It was really nice seeing you. He smiled. Yeah. This was really fun. Great. Well, I'll see you at work. She stood brushing her pants off a bit as she did so. And make sure to cheer me on at the sports festival in case we aren't scheduled together. He grinned. I know you'll knock em dead. She grinned back and they stared at each other for a few seconds before laughing, Izuku throwing his head back and Uraraka hunching in on herself. He wiped at his eyes, calming down, and watched as Uraraka did the same. But, yes. I'll cheer you on. Izuku confirmed as he stood. Good night and, a dash. Text me when you get back, alright? Uraraka casually said as she grabbed her trash. If you don't, I'll assume you've been kidnapped and send the entire A class after you. Izuku blinked once before grinning. As long as you make sure to text me as well. She nodded, turning around with a wave and throwing out her things before walking away, towards the lit-up train station he could see a couple blocks away from them. Izuku watched her for a few seconds before gathering his own things, tossing his trash and walking the opposite direction, stuffing his hands in his pockets as he did so. Izuku smiled to himself as he thought about everything he had learned and how excited he was about meeting up with some of the nice people he had been able to meet in that class. Hell, he knew for a fact that Uraraka knew about his quirk status and she had been nothing but friendly towards him, which made him all the more giddy. Honestly, at this point, Izuku couldn't help but wonder what the rest of Class 1A had been up to since he left. Wake up! Wake up! The apocalypse has begun. Izuku shot up, falling to the floor, laying on the ground with his fists raised and feet aimed for kicking. He opened his eyes, groaning when he saw his dad standing above him and grinning like an idiot. "Good morning to you too, Dad." Izuku grumbled. Hisashi nodded. "Good morning, my darling son. You seem to have forgotten about something we like to call a bed." "What are you talking about?" "Buddy. Look around." Izuku huffed, but did as his dad asked. He sat up and looked around, pursing his lips when he realized he had fallen asleep on the couch once again. "Ah, you understand the problem now?" Hisashi grinned. Izuku nodded slowly. "I should make use of that bed one of these days." Hisashi nodded along with him. "Yes. I think your back would appreciate that." "Probably." Izuku relented, sighing as he dropped his head back down to the floor. "Welp, since you're up, that means you can help me out today." Hisashi grinned. "So come on, let's go. We've got a full day ahead of us, buddy." Izuku mourned his losses for a few seconds before pushing himself off the floor and sighing when he caught sight of his reflection in the front window, seeing his hair sticking out in a million different ways. Oh dear Lord, this was going to be a long day. "Let's go." Izuku sighed. "I'm coming." "Good." Izuku ran around the house, grabbing a clean pair of clothes and trying to wrangle his hair into place. He gave up and grabbed some breakfast before heading into his dad's office, pausing in the doorway to watch as Hisashi moved comfortably around the office, tossing files on one end of the table, millimeters away from knocking over a test tube stand. "Ah, good. You're here." Hisashi smiled, beckoning Izuku inside. "I wanted to ask you if you've ever considered doing something like this." Izuku chuckled. "Yeah, right? I'm serious, bud." Hisashi looked at him, holding up his own notebook. "Have you ever thought about going into support?" Izuku shook his head. "I've really only thought about analysis as a job, not really a career, you know?" "Yeah, I get that. Is there any other part of support that interests you?" Hisashi asked, leaning forwards, nearly falling out of his desk chair. Izuku shrugged. "To be honest, I haven't given much of the support world a chance, past building my own weapons and analyzing quirks." Hisashi grinned. "Would you be interested in trying out Beaky physics with me sometime?" "What even is that?" Izuku wrinkled his nose. Hisashi laughed. "It's my job, silly. Biological quirk physics. That's what I study all day." "Oh, you want me to show you?" Hisashi asked, his eyes gleaming. Izuku gulped. All right. Let's get going then." Hisashi grinned, spinning around in his desk chair and drumming his fingers along the underside of the desk. With a small click, a drawer opened and Izuku leapt back when he saw the test tubes filled with different chemicals in there. "What?" Izuku said, trying to demand an answer. "It's fine. It's fine." Hisashi waved him off. "This is 60% legal, bud, which means it's basically legal, which means it's completely legal." Izuku rolled his eyes. "That's not. Are they even safe in there?" "They're in a drawer, bud." Hisashi huffed. "What's safer than a drawer?" "A safe." Izuku deadpanned. "Wrong." Hisashi shook his head. "These things need breathing room. So, drawer it is. Besides, we haven't blown up or anything, so obviously it's worked so far." "We could blow up?" Hisashi shrugged. "No one really knows. These haven't interacted much, but studies have proven all five should, under no circumstances, interact with one another." Izuku gaped. "Are you serious?" "No. I'm your dad." Hisashi grinned. "Oh my gods. Calm down, kiddo." Hisashi smiled, writing something down quickly as he haphazardly put the test tubes filled with something back into his drawer. "We're fine." Right. Izuku placated. "Don't talk to me like I'm crazy, kid." Hisashi warned him. "I would never." Izuku gasped, holding a hand to his heart as his father turned to glare at him before going back to his work. Izuku checked the time, realizing how long they had spent in the office before nodding to himself, slowly concocting a plan. "I'm gonna go for a walk. Take a lap. Do whatever." Izuku explained, back out of the room as slowly as possible. You enjoy yourself, okay, Dad?" Hisashi grunted in his direction and Izuku took that for the dismissal that he needed, bolting down the hallway and out the door in record time. He ran around the beach for a few minutes before he turned, making his way into the city's park, walking around and letting his breathing go back to normal before he kept at his run. "Oh, hey!" A boy his age called out, grinning and waving at him. Hi?" Izuku spoke, unsure of how to respond. When the boy didn't say much else, Izuku turned, intending to find a bush to hide behind. Or maybe a tree. "Wait, hey! You're Midoriya, right?" The boy called out, jogging a few paces to walk up to him. Izuku looked him up and down once again, noting the black lightning stick in his blonde hair before turning his attention back to the guy's golden eyes. I'm Kaminari Denki. Uraraka-chan told me and Mina so much about you," Kaminari finally explained. Izuku nodded along dumbly. "Anyways, I thought I'd at least introduce myself. It only seemed fair." "Huh?" Izuku breathed out before he shook himself back into the present. "Well, I'm Midoriya Izuku, as you probably know. It's nice to formally meet you, Kaminari." "Nice to meet you too." Kaminari grinned at him, stuffing his hands into his pockets as he looked around, acting slightly uncomfortable. He probably didn't expect to run into anyone he knew. Which reminded him. "You know it's the middle of the school day, right?" Izuku asked. Kaminari shrunk in on himself before shrugging. "Not for me." "Oh." Izuku blinked, unsure of what to say. "Did you want to talk about it? I mean, you'll understand, I guess." Kaminari looked down and clenched his fists. "I messed up and apparently Aizawa doesn't like that, so I'm not at UA anymore." He sniffed and seemed to force himself to pull himself together as he shot a pained grin towards Izuku. "But hey, Nizu promised me I didn't have to worry about a mark on my record, so I'm sure I'll be able to find a school soon." "You got expelled because you messed up?" Izuku questioned, looking at the other boy incredulously. Yeah." Kaminari nodded. "Aizawa doesn't tolerate people who plan on cruising through UA's hero course with their quirk and not their brain, so I got expelled." "Did he not try to teach you?" Izuku asked. Kaminari tilted his head. "I mean, kinda. I couldn't really understand what he was talking about, but I knew he wanted me to look into electrical currents. And, well, I forgot to do that, so he didn't re-explain it and, instead, expelled you?" Kaminari was silent for a few seconds before he tapped his chin with a slight frown. "You know, to be honest, I don't think I've ever seen Aizawa explain anything more than once." "Wow." Izuku blinked, looking over at Kaminari, who seemed to be holding himself strong for the sake of it. Izuku looked forward, staring down their path. "That's stupid." "Huh?" Kaminari whipped his head around, obviously being brought out of the mood he was in. Izuku inwardly smirked. "Yeah. Aizawa seems stupid, especially if he's going to do something like that to the students he was hired to teach." "Well, yeah, you do have a good point." Kaminari conceded before laughing a bit wetly. "I'm not even sure if I'll be able to become a hero anymore." Izuku eyed him, wondering if he should do this. "Do you still want to be a hero?" "Huh?" He looked up, finally meeting Izuku's eyes. "I mean, yeah, I'd love to, but do you want to come over?" Izuku pointed over his shoulder, a small smirk making its way onto his face. "I think it'd be better if we talk there." What's going on, man?" Kaminari chuckled, looking around nervously. Izuku kept smirking. "I was gonna show you what I did when I got expelled." "What you did?" "Oh, for school?" Izuku shook his head and leaned towards the boy, dropping his voice to a whisper. "For heroics." "Yeah right," the girl gasped, pulling her friend by the arm. "Run." They ducked away and Shoyuta pretended not to see them, exasperated with the students this morning already as he drank the last of his coffee. He walked through the halls, head held high as he smoothly dropped his cup into the trash and made his way to his classroom with 30 seconds to spare. He strutted his way towards the classroom, every bone in his body pleased when the bell rang, and he took 2 steps before flinging open the doors, revealing his picture-perfect class. He ignored them, though he was secretly impressed they had learned his standards so quickly. "I have no special announcements this morning for homeroom, though you should remember to train for the sports festival since that is coming up soon." Shoyuta stifled a yawn, glancing over at his sleeping bag that was stashed underneath his desk. "Your ethics essay is due in 2 weeks from now. Don't slack." He walked over to his desk, pulling out his chair and grabbing his sleeping bag. He unzipped it and put himself inside, glancing up to see Ida still staring at him intently before he realized why they were all looking at him. "That's all. Stay quiet." With that, Shoyuta laid against the wall and let himself drift off, grumbling to himself when the bell rang and the time came to teach the second years. He ran through the motions, nothing grasping at his attention as classes went on. He looked at his phone, a bit disappointed to see the first-year teachers all had a meeting with Nezu about the beginning of the year and turn in their lesson plans for official review. As much as Shoyuta hated the process, it was usually harmless and quick, which meant Shoyuta was never terribly inconvenienced when he was forced to sit through the unnecessarily long meeting and listen to all of his coworkers mingle. He pushed the door to the teacher's lounge, watching as everyone slowly settled down and quieted when they noticed him. They glanced at him before going back to their whispered conversations, eyes constantly flicking back to him periodically. He sighed as he made his way to sit down, finding a spot next to Yamada and hunkered down into the chair. He was well aware of what the other faculty members thought of him and his expulsion tendencies, and he knew that he couldn't never get them to completely understand why he did it. As much as it confused them, Shoyuta was genuinely thinking of the students when he expelled them. He refused to give them false hope about their potential future. He refused for them to be caught out in the field, underprepared and unable to get out in time. He's sure some of those kids still resent him and hated him and probably cursed his name with their every breath for taking away their precious dreams so easily. But they were alive. And that's all Shoyuta cared about. Welcome. Nezu grinned, throwing his paws in the air as Midnight and Snipe both pulled a confetti cannon behind him. To the 2157 school year meeting. Shoyuta rolled his eyes as he watched Yagi flinch away from the three. All of you will have classes with this year's newest batch, although some of you will still have your regular classes with the second and third years throughout the day. Nezu announced, a projection turning on behind him. Don't be afraid to ask me or print out your schedule to make sure you're in the right class at the right times. I know a couple of you have been dealing exclusively with the second years for the past 2 years, so this will be a change for you, but rest assured, you will be seeing them in their graduation lineup and attending the ceremony with them at the end of the school year. Nezu grinned as a few of them groaned and flipped the slides, letting people take pictures of the graduation date and rehearsal times. Those rats need to graduate already. Ectoplasm groaned as he took his picture and sat back down. Then he snapped his attention over to their boss. No offense, Nezu. None taken. Their boss ensured. Ah. They aren't dreams to have in class anymore. Snipe smirked as he zoomed in on something in his phone and leaned over to show Maijima, letting the man laugh at it before pulling away. More like, my nightmares come to life and are currently haunting me. Ectoplasm said, completely deadpan. You don't think they're angels? Snipe teased him, obviously poking fun at him for some reason Shoyuta wasn't privy to. Those third years are gonna be the death of me. Ectoplasm sighed, putting his hand out with his palm up as Snipe tried to hit his head on the desk. They're almost worse than Snipe over here. Hey! Don't I know it? Cementos agreed. They're certainly getting more rowdy now that it's their third year. I'm struggling to stand on one leg in there. Just expel them. Shoyuta spoke up, responding blandly. He glanced around the room to see everyone look at him oddly before he settled his attention back on the three in front of him. Cementos laughed uncomfortably. Right. Good jokes, Aizawa. He blinked. I wasn't joking. God, you're in but this year. Vlad mumbled next to him as he adjusted in his seat. Shoyuta ignored him, eyes glued to Nezu, and watched as his boss looked at them for a few seconds before moving on. He huffed. So now his own boss wasn't seeing the logic in his expulsions. Great. The meeting went on and Shoyuta didn't even try to listen to his boss as the guy went on a tangent about the difference in water fountains this year and why the ones they were replaced with were worth the extra cost. He turned in his lesson plans and sat back into his seat, doing his best to ignore everyone and everything as he wished for the comfort of his sleeping bag while he waited for Nezu to dismiss them all from the room. What do you think? Sure. Shoyuta raised an eyebrow and avoided looking over at the direction of his other coworkers, hoping they'd continue their conversation so he could figure out what they were trying to hide from everyone else. I'll bet one more kid gets tossed out. Vault muttered softly, obviously trying to keep the betting pool a secret from him. 500 yen. I'd bet on 4 more. Shoyuta warned them offhandedly as he kicked his feet up and relaxed into his seat. They all looked at him, slightly shocked that he had said that before. Yamada coughed awkwardly, smiling at the rest of them before standing from his seat. Excuse us. Yamada said roughly, grabbing Shoyuta by the arm and dragging him out of his seat. He was pulled into the hallway, huffing and brushing his jumpsuit off when Yamada turned around to shut the door to give them a false sense of privacy. Are you serious, Shoyuta? Yamada asked, dramatically calling him out as he turned back around to face him. Shoyuta frowned. This emotional outburst is because of you. Yamada cut in, staring him down. Look, Sho, those kids haven't done anything to you. All they want is to learn and become the heroes you're trying to make them. Give them a goddamn chance. I have. Your reputation doesn't come without stories, Sho. Yamada glared at him. Expelling a kid for messing up with his quirk control? Expelling the quirkless kid? You're not giving anyone a chance to prove themselves, and you know what, when the industry goes to shit, I'll know exactly who I'm blaming. Shoyuta raised his eyebrows, feeling his heart pound as he stepped closer to Yamada. Are you insinuating that you'll be blaming me? Congratulations, Sho. You got it in one. Shoyuta took a deep breath. Why are you acting like this? Like what? Like, Shoyuta huffed. Like you're a hormonal kid again, unable of communicating anything properly. Yamada hummed. Now that is an ironic thing for you to say, wouldn't you think? I mean, aren't you the one expelling kids at the first whiff of imperfection around here? Shoyuta paused, staring at his friend as he struggled to comprehend what was happening right then. What? We've all shut our FING mouths over the years, but now it's clear that you're just ruining lives by pulling this sheet. You know why I do this. Yeah. But those kids don't have a clue why they're being expelled. At least they're still alive. Yamada laughed humorlessly, shaking his head. You take away a kid's passion, their only hope at making it into an already harsh industry, and you think you're keeping them alive? Yamada scoffed. Make no mistake, you might save their lives, but they will never live again. They find something else. Shoyuta argued. Yamada shook his head. Did you? What? Did you? He poked him in the chest, glaring at him again. Did you find something else to work towards in Gen Ed? I mean, you had been behind us by a semester, so you had ample time to find something else to do. What was it? That doesn't. Oh sure it does. Yamada goaded him. But, hey, if you never came up with something else within 6 months or so, then obviously your experience is unique and everyone else is capable of moving on. He tapped on his chin then, leaning out of Shuta's space. Actually, that does make sense. Shoyuta grit his teeth and swallowed the lump in his throat, feeling his nose flare. What the hell is that supposed to mean? I think you know what it means. Shoyuta nodded. You think so? Yamada nodded back. Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Shoyuta broke, swinging his fist into Yamada's face. As soon as his knuckles connected with flesh, Shoyuta felt himself being flipped around and cursed. He groaned, eyes squeezed shut as the breath was knocked out of him when his back hit the ground. Hey! Yamada! He felt his friend being pulled off him, and Shoyuta opened his eyes wearily, watching as Yamada pinched his nose and took a handkerchief from Yagi as blood poured out. He pushed himself up to his elbows, only pausing when Nedzu placed his paw on his shoulder. See me in the morning, Aizawa. His boss whispered into his ear before leaving the hallway altogether. He glanced back, watching as the rest of the teachers went back into the lounge or followed Yamada to the nurse's office. Shoyuta huffed to himself, laying back down on the ground and stared up at the ceiling. It seemed as though he had a lot to think about. Izuku opened the door, inviting Kaminari inside as comforting as he possibly could. Dad! I'm home! Izuku shouted, smiling awkwardly at Kaminari. I brought a friend with me. They both winced when they heard a huge crash come from the office, his father obviously rattling around behind the closed door and scrambling around for a few comical moments until the door was flung open and a soot-faced Hisashi burst out the door, a wide smile plastered on his face as he raced their way. Izuku's friend. Hisashi said breathlessly, eyes wide as he looked the poor boy up and down. Of course. I'm Hisashi, Izuku's father. It's wonderful to meet you, kiddo. You too, sir. Kaminari nervously spoke up, shaking his head at himself, though Hisashi was having none of that. Come in. Come in. I'll make us some tea if you'd like to take a seat. Hisashi smiled, warm and inviting as he ushered the two of them towards the couch. It was quiet between them for a moment before Izuku sat down on the couch, letting Kaminari take the armchair and settled down for a few moments, chewing on his lip as he wondered what to say. Sorry about him. Izuku suddenly spoke up, unsure of where the words were coming from but cleared his throat anyways. He's, not used to people coming over. Kaminari waved his hand around. Yeah right. With him? He seems like a social butterfly. Oh, I meant that I haven't had many friends come over here, I suppose. Izuku chuckled awkwardly. Kaminari smiled. Yeah, I think I get it. Izuku nodded, smiling tightly. Yeah. It was silent for a few moments, both boys looking around his living room before Kaminari cleared his throat and looked back at Izuku. So, what's your quirk? Kaminari asked, completely clueless about the minefield he stepped in with that question. He was well aware most people used the question as an icebreaker, but Izuku knew he'd always be dealing with people at their worst after he answered such a question. From what he could gather, Kaminari thought of him highly, or high enough to talk to him and agree to come to his house for a few hours. There were a Few tactics he used to both answer this question and evade it, though he was tired of using such tactics and evasions after so long. He still remembered them well. Deku, shut up. Katsuki growled, flexing his hands as he wiped off the excess sweat on his sweatpants. Izuku pretended to be afraid of the boy, inhaling sharply. Right. Sorry, Kaken. TCH, whatever. There was the tactic he used often with Bakugo, making him think Quirkless meant useless and therefore, Izuku would never amount to anything and then continually reaffirming that idea whenever he felt Bakugo thought he was simply putting up an act. PLE please. Izuku sniffed, the tears flowing freely. I'm Quirkless and all alone and end. Jesus kid, fine. The villain scoffed, unhanding him and backing away. Go run to whatever hole you came crawling out of and don't look back. Izuku nodded rapidly, thanking the man over and over as he turned tail and ran. Of course, the easiest tactic for Izuku to use was to act like being Quirkless automatically made him the victim, especially since he was young and smaller than adults, which made him easy prey for certain burglars and villains who snooped through the alleyways around dusk. Izuku shook his head, dispelling the memories and tactics from his mind, moving back to the present easily enough as he finally answered Kaminari. I'm actually Quirkless. Oh, right. Kaminari nodded, eyes shining with a light like he recognized him finally. I remember that. Sorry it took so long to place you. Izuku waved him off. No worries. So, what's your quirk? Izuku asked back, a teasing hint to his tone since he knew Kaminari didn't care about his status. Kaminari seemed to brace himself as he spoke. Electrification. I can control electricity and manipulate it to a certain extent, though it's mostly just directing electricity out of me and towards a target. Wow! Izuku lit up. That sounds super cool. Could we see your quirk in action sometime? He watched as Kaminari's eyes flickered around the room, spending too long watching the exits than normal. Izuku frowned as his new friend stayed silent and hummed to himself. It's okay, Kaminari. We don't need an answer from you. It was just a suggestion. Promise. Kaminari nodded rapidly, eyes closing as he took in deep breaths to calm himself. Izuku pretended not to notice, watching as his father did the same. He hoped he wasn't the cause of whatever was making Kaminari freak out right then. God, he needed to be more careful with the way he spoke sometimes. Come on, Denki. His brother squealed, smiling brightly as he ran around the backyard, slipping through the mud and laughing delightfully as he was picked up by their father and spun around as the rain poured down. He let himself smile as he watched his family enjoy themselves in the rain, longing to get out there and enjoy himself with them. Just as his self-restraint snapped and he took a step forward, he felt a hand on his shoulder gripping him tightly. You know better, Denki. His mother warned him lowly before walking past him with his youngest brother in her arms. He watched them from the porch, dancing in the rain and laughing as their parents chased them around in the mud and rain. Denki sat down, playing with the threads of their towels, trying to distract himself from the ache in his heart. It didn't take the kids long to get cold and sick of dancing in the rain, ready to be occupied with the next thing to do. His youngest brother ran towards him, grinning as he leapt up and into his arms. Denki didn't know what to do as he held his brother, trying not to freak out as he giggled and smiled in his arms. He felt his quirk flicker and Denki stamped on it, but not quickly enough since his brother yelped and jumped out of his arms. I think you zapped me. He whined, rubbing his leg. Denki's voice was stuck in his throat as he looked at his brother in horror, terrified of hurting him. Oh, Denki. Get away from him. His mother called out sternly, moving to inspect his brother and making sure he was okay. I'm sorry, Denki hiccuped, a few tears sizzling on his skin as he cried and reached out for his parents. They stepped away from him, his father protecting his younger brothers from the monster that lived in his touch. You're not supposed to be sorry, Denki. His mother looked down her nose at him, frowning. You're supposed to stay out of the way. But I didn't mean. You still did it, Denki. His father scoffed. You know better than to touch people. This quirk is your responsibility to control. Rig right. Denki nodded, agreeing with the man. His mother scoffed, shepherding everyone inside and giving him a disgusted look as she closed the door behind her, locking it quickly. He sniffed, tears still streaming down his cheeks by the time his father opened the back door to let him in the house. Before he opened the door all the way, he tossed out some gloves and Denki stared at them for a few seconds before pulling them on, gritting his teeth as he felt the electricity travel through him. He shuddered and the door opened completely, his father standing there and patiently waiting for him to gather himself. Denki put one foot in front of the other, shivering from the cold and rainy weather he had dealt with for so long. Unintentional sparks flew off his arms as he shivered again and he watched as his father's eyes blew wide open. Denki called out, reaching out for his father as the door slammed in his face. He cried, screaming and begging to be let in until his voice went hoarse and his hands ached from pounding on the door. He collapsed on the ground, sparks flying around him and providing him temporary warmth on the wet wood beneath him, and curled into a ball as he wept. The storm raged around him, lightning striking the ground near him and startling him into sitting up against the house. He stared out into the darkness, watching the pouring rain as it thundered down around him and the storm lit up the night. He inched out towards the rain, letting it soak his gloved hand for a few moments, smiling as it did so. First was his hand and then his entire arm, and before he knew it, he was dancing in the rain by himself, enjoying the moment he wished he would have been able to experience with his family a few hours ago. He smiled and hummed to himself, laughing when he tripped up in the dirt and grinning like a madman as the sky lit up and lightning danced above him. "Hey! Get out of the rain, Denki!" his father yelled, running out into the backyard with him as he did so. Denki whipped around, eyes going wide as the sky lit up again and the lightning show began again. The lightning struck his father and Denki screamed, ripping his gloves off and concentrating on the current, letting it flow through him and out of him. His own lightning hit the strike, deterring it away from his family, and he took a shaky breath, trying to calm himself down. Denki, he snapped his head over to see his younger brothers and mother staring at him with horror. "What did you do?" He looked back, dropping to his knees as he took in his father's glassy eyes and burnt chest, fresh tears sluggishly making their down his cheeks and clinging to his lashes. "Get away from him!" his mother screamed, pushing him away as the three crowded over their father. He panicked, not understanding what was happening. He wiped at his tears, walking forward as he tried to understand what had happened. He thought he had saved everyone. "What? Get away!" she screamed, turning on him and pushing him away harsher. "Now!" "But Mom!" It felt like the world stopped when she slapped him into silence, his head falling back and hitting it on a rock. The world went fuzzy and her words were muffled as she spoke down to him. He couldn't hear anything she said to him and struggled to stand up, feeling himself get knocked back down as he tried. He pushed up and felt a flare of pain, panicking when his quirk activated because of it, lightning sparking around him and heat surrounding him. "No," he cried as it lit up inside of him, like a solar flare flashing across his body. "No!" The electricity flowed out of him, crackling around in the sky as he fell backwards, knocking his head against a rock and collapsing to the ground, knocking himself out. Denki breathed out slowly, holding onto his cup of tea as he forcefully shook his thought away. It was ridiculous to think of his birth family at a time like this, while he was a guest in a friend's house and being fawned over like the coolest thing to walk the earth. Though he couldn't tell if it was an act or not, Midoriya and his family seemed like really caring people, and he's sure they wouldn't hold it against him for having such a flashy quirk and an even worse quirk drawback, but he can never be too careful about these type of things. He didn't used to have a drawback for using his quirk, but ever since he hit his head that night, he couldn't use his full power without going into way mode. The drawback was something that deterred a lot of people from being terrified of him and running away as soon as they heard about what he was capable of with the touch of a finger. The kids at school usually thought it was cool that he could charge cell phones and keep cars running with just a touch, but every time they got too close, he freaked out and something ended up happening. He didn't hold it against Aizawa for expelling him once he finally saw the way mode Denki gets thrown into when he outputs too much of his power and temporarily fries his brains for a few hours. It stung, and his dream of being a hero and being able to make it up to all the people he's hurt before was hard to face, but he's sure he'd figure it out and be fine. He had to be. "That sounds exciting, Midoriya." He finally forced himself to answer back, annoyed at himself for taking so long. It'd be fun to test it. Midoriya paused for a moment before nodding, agreeing with him easily. They spoke with each other amicably for a few more minutes until his father came around the corner again, and the two Midoriyas nodded at each other before looking at him intently. Denki tried not to show any fear as Mr. Midoriya turned towards him. "So, you wanted to be a hero?" He smiled easily enough. Yeah. I guess I'll find a new dream soon enough, though." "Are you sure about that?" "Heroics is a tough dream to replace." He pressed. Denki shrugged. "I suppose, but I don't have much of a choice anymore, do I?" Mr. Midoriya glanced at his son, seemingly having an unspoken conversation for a few moments before he sighed and stared into Denki's soul. "Are you sure about that?" "Huh?" he eloquently asked, feeling more than confused. "Are you sure you don't have any options for heroics left? Where there's a will, there's a way." He blinked, glancing at Midoriya. "Did you find a way?" His new friend blinked back, shrugging. Do you want a new way to be a hero?" "Yes." He spoke breathlessly, amazed at the possibilities they were offering him. "Yes. I would love that." They glanced at each other again, and Denki leaned forward, wanting so desperately to understand what was happening right then. Mr. Midoriya sighed, turning to face him fully. What does the term vigilante mean to you? He smiled, laughing a bit awkwardly as he looked at the both of them. What? What are you asking about? Midoriya spoke softly, tilting his head. Denki shook his own. Are you too insane? Acting as a vigilante wouldn't help me become a hero. If I did that, I'd probably be running from heroes. Kaminari. No, Denki shook his head, standing up and grabbing his things. No, you guys can do whatever you want. I don't care, but please, leave me out of this. Whatever it is. Midoriya looked sad as he walked him to their door, letting him leave without a fight, which Denki was immensely thankful for as unfamiliar emotions flew around him, sparking up old fears and worries. Wait, Kaminari, Midoriya sighed. Consider our door always open, okay? Midoriya promised as Denki walked out. He nodded, not promising anything as he walked towards his foster home. He watched as Midoriya and his father stared out for a while, watching him leave the block before he looked back at his father, obviously having a question stuck in his throat. Mr. Midoriya smiled, closing the door since it seemed his son had been rendered incapable. Don't worry, bud. The man assured him. His decision is out of our hands. I'm sure he'll be ready the next time we see him. Yeah. Midoriya nodded, trying to convince himself of his father's words. Yeah. Denki blew out a long breath and pushed away from the wall he was hiding behind, stuffing his hands in his pockets as he walked back into the city. He scoffed to himself, trying to get rid of the thought of becoming a vigilante and fighting with his new friend by his side. He hated how much he longed to be able to do something as reckless as that. But, no matter how much he tried to uproot it, the seed had been planted and it was quickly growing within Denki's mind. The doorbell rang and someone knocked on their door again, nearly pounding on it with how loud they were being. Izuku stumbled off the couch, wiping at his eyes as he walked clumsily towards the door, staring out the peephole for a few moments until he pieced together who was standing out there and quickly opened it, suddenly feeling awake. Kaminari. He said breathlessly, looking his new friend up and down. He looked like he had been run over a few times, and that was Izuku putting it nicely. He reached out for him, but Kaminari flinched back and Izuku's brain went black, completely unsure of what he was supposed to do right then. Come inside. Hisashi spoke up from behind Izuku, opening the door wide and stepping out of the way, waiting patiently for Kaminari to walk through himself. He didn't close the door right away and, instead, waited for Kaminari to slip out of his shoes and stand in the entryway for a moment. Izuku moved away silently, unsure of how to help his friend as he watched his father instruct the boy to go sit on the couch. He didn't want to crowd him, opting to sit on the armchair as his father sat in front of the boy on the coffee table, doing nothing but examining the boy in silence for a few moments before he clicked his tongue. Izuku, make some tea for us, please. And grab me my thermometer from my office. Izuku nodded. Yeah. You got it, Dad. He responded as he raced around, starting to tea before going to the office and grabbing what he needed, going back over to the couch to see his father in the same position, though Kaminari looked like he was untensing, slowly but surely. He went into the kitchen, grabbing the warm tea and putting it all on a tray, moving to the living room and set the stuff down next to father before he opted to perch himself on the armchair again, chewing at his bottom lip. Kaminari. Denki, the boy breathed out, his nails digging into his palms. Denki. Call me Denki, please. His father nodded. Denki. We made some tea. Would you like some? Izuku looked at his father oddly, but the way Denki paused and considered it, physically opening up more to them when he nodded made it make sense. They couldn't jump the gun and start firing questions at Denki about what happened, no matter how much they wanted to. They'd have to take this slow. Denki grabbed the offered tea and took a few sips, slowly relaxing further into the couch as he held the teacup with both hands and sighed, closing his eyes. They finally cracked. He whispered. Izuku leaned forward, a bit worried. Denki sighed. They finally decided they didn't like me anymore. He said, a humorless laugh following his words. I ran away before Mr. Chang could do anything else. Izuku watched as his father pulled out his phone behind his back, expertly opening up his notes app and typing out a few things. You don't need to talk about this right now if you don't want to. Hisashi spoke carefully. Denki shook his head. No. I need to tell someone. My foster parents might have sent out a social worker for me by now anyway, so I'm not even sure why I came over. Hey, Hisashi spoke up, his resolve strong as he looked at the boy in front of him. You're always welcome here. Right. Denki repeated, not looking convinced. Denki, I can promise you, you are welcome to stay here as long as you'd like. Hisashi spoke up, ducking down to look the boy in the eye to show exactly how serious he was being about all of this. A tear slipped out of Denki's eye, fizzling out against his cheek, and slowly nodded. All right. Okay. Hisashi smiled. Then let's get you to bed, yeah? Denki nodded, looking a bit shy when he realized how dirty he was and about the fact that he didn't know where he'd be sleeping. Izuku hopped off the armchair, looking at him carefully. You're more than welcome to use my clothes and take a shower. You know, if you'd like. Denki looked at him, a strange look in his eye as he nodded along. Sure. That sounds nice, man. Thanks. No problem. Izuku promised, leading the boy to his room and handing him some fresh clothes before directing him over to the bathroom. He laid back on the couch, tapping his fingers along his chest as he waited for the boy to be done, thanking his dad when the man brought him out a pillow and promised he wouldn't be smacking pots together to wake him up and get him off the couch. Denki scratched at the back of his head, looking incredibly awkward to see Izuku halfway asleep on the couch and his father sitting comfortably on the coffee table, talking his ear off about some biopsy quirk thing that he was playing around with this month. Izuku cleared his throat. Oh, right. You're more than welcome to sleep in my bed. No, Denki shut down immediately. I mean, please, don't sleep on the couch because of me. Hisashi snickered, waving his hand. Don't worry, son. Izuku here spends most nights on the couch instead of his own bed anyway. It's no inconvenience, I swear. Izuku piped up, snuggling back into the couch. Denki still shook his head, looking incredibly uncomfortable at the idea of sleeping in his bedroom. Can I? Denki spoke up, clenching and unclenching his fists as he spoke. Is it alright if I slept out here? With you? Izuku blinked, finally realizing what the problem was. Of course. You're welcome to sleep anywhere you want. Izuku promised, grabbing the quilt his father had tossed over the back of the couch and tossing it onto the other one. Do you want a pillow? If you don't mind. Not at all. Hisashi said, standing up and walking out to the hall closet, grabbing an extra pillow and handing it to Denki. Sleep well, boys, and I'll see both of you in the morning, alright? Night, Papa. Izuku called out. Good night, Mr. Midoriya. Denki said, averting his eyes as he put his pillow down and got comfortable on the couch. They settled down, letting the sounds of the house lure them to sleep, until Izuku heard a soft voice pipe up. Midoriya? Denki whispered. Yeah? I'm sorry. Izuku shook his head. You shouldn't be apologizing. But It's not your fault, Denki, I promise. Izuku spoke up, cutting him off. Besides, I'm excited to have a friend over. It feels a bit like a sleepover. Denki chuckled and Izuku counted that as a major win. Yeah, it kinda is like that. They went back to sitting in silence and Izuku stared at the ceiling fan above him, mapping out the lines in the fan and clicking his tongue. I'm sorry. Izuku said quietly, unsure of what else he could say. He watched as Denki smiled, but there was no joy in his expression. Sometimes, people SCK. Izuku nodded. He knew, was well aware of the horrors the world had to offer, except he had never dealt with anything of this nature. He had always had someone with loving and open arms to come home to after a rough day of feeling like the world was against him. There was always comfort soothing his wounds as soon as he stepped into his home, something he had been brought up to expect. There was never a thought of what he would do without his parents' love because there never needed to be, and Izuku had never realized how incredibly lucky he had gotten. The love a parent had for their child wasn't anything Izuku ever wondered about, since he experienced it every single day of his life, no matter how terrible that day was or how strained his relationship with his father was. He didn't realize how rare that was. They fell asleep shortly afterwards, waking up the next morning and dealing with a hyper Hisashi who was determined to make Denki forget about every bad thing that had ever happened to him by making a huge feast for every meal and keeping them away from the computers, telling them not to worry themselves about school for the day, and place them in front of the TV. Eventually, Izuku called it quits, saying Denki and he needed to relax in his room and hide in there with him for the rest of the night, letting Denki work on the homework he wanted to while he played a game in between the rounds of questions he completed. Is that? Izuku squinted, a bit fascinated with what he was witnessing, looking closer at his friend's math homework. Are you using physics for your algebra class? Denki shrugged. It's not my fault, physics makes more sense. Izuku blinked. I can't even. How? How does that make more sense? Math SCKS. Denki huffed. But, math when it applies to real life is usually just common sense with a bunch of made-up equations. Izuku stared at him for a few seconds. You're saying physics is easier cause you can guess the answer? Well, yeah. I guess. Denki shrugged again, moving towards the game player and setting his notebook to the side, down with his last round of questions he had in his workbook. Izuku couldn't stop staring at him. His alarm went off and Izuku absent-mindedly slapped it to shut it up as he stared at his friend for a moment longer before he looked at the time, realizing what time it was. He got up, moving into his closet and digging into his box, pulling out his outfit and gear, a bit giddy to secretly show off his stuff to Denki. As expected, when he turned around, Denki had paused his game and kept his full attention on him as he moved around. Izuku smiled. "See something you like?" he teased. Denki frowned, shaking his head. "No. Just, no." Izuku laughed. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to tease you like that." Denki shot him an easy smile, shrugging and trying to look casual, even as he kept staring at Izuku's costume. "It's fine, man. I swear." Izuku smiled back. "If you're sure." "Positive." It was quiet as Izuku pulled his clothes on, pulling a hoodie and large sweatpants over the gear so he could ride the train into the city he wanted to patrol around. After a few moments, he broke and looked back at Denki, who looked so curious about it all. "Are you sure you don't want to come with me?" Izuku asked as he moved his mask around his neck, getting it comfortable and ready to pull up. Denki looked him over, obviously curious, and hesitated. "What are you going to be doing?" Izuku shrugged, trying to play it cool to not scare Denki off. "Just a few things. I'll be walking around a new town and helping someone if they need it, but for the most part I'll be staying away from the fights and stuff." Denki's eyes had a little spark as he sat up straighter and looked at Izuku with an intensity he hadn't seen before. "No fighting?" Izuku shook his head. "Fighting is a last resort. Especially tonight." Denki considered it, nodding his head slowly. "All right, I'll join you." Izuku smiled, bright and wide, probably looking a bit manic as he did so. "You so won't regret this." "So, where are we going?" Denki asked, looking at the small map on the side of the train. Izuku smiled. "We're going to Shizuoka instead of Toyota tonight, but we should be in the clear since we'll be out of the city and not many heroes bother with patrolling the town anyway." "Any particular reason?" Izuku shrugged. "I wasn't on the schedule for tonight." Denki blinked. "There's a schedule?" Izuku nodded and smiled when Denki looked mildly impressed. "So, there's more of you guys?" Denki asked. He smiled. "Way more. It surprised me when I first found out, but they've got quite the community built around Toyota. It's pretty cool, actually." "Sounds like it." The train stopped and Izuku stood up, the both of them walking off and stepping onto the weathered platform. They spent their time walking through the small town, getting a feel for how it was all mapped out, smiling as they smelled the ocean breeze rolling in and heard the waves crashing over the sounds of engines running and a local mill running. Laughter and loud yells led them to a noisy dive bar, with lots of college-aged kids ducking in and stumbling out. One man tipped over his shoelaces and Izuku surged forward, catching him and preventing him from eating the pavement. "Whoa, there." Izuku swept under his arm, grabbing hold of it to hold the man steady. "Are you good?" "Fukin in Devar." The man slurred his words as he glared at the space in front of him. Izuku watched as Denki nodded. "Totally understand, dude. He looks like a hothead." "MMHM," the guy nodded, trying to step forward before stumbling. Izuku made sure he didn't fall and straightened him out, confused on what he should do with the man now. Izuku blinked before glancing around nervously. Do you want us to take you home? Just to make sure you're safe and stuff." The guy shrugged, tilting his head, and Izuku watched his white hair sway with his movements, his half-lidded eyes widening to show off his gray eyes for a moment before he hummed and sunk back into his arms. "Yeah. That sounds nice." Izuku glanced over, seeing Denki hold the other side of the guy, and nodded to him. They began walking together and Izuku couldn't help but wonder where they were going. "Hey, do you know where we're heading?" Denki whispered to him, glancing around. Izuku shrugged. "Nope." The guy in between them grunted. "Dorms. I live on campus." "That is uber helpful, dude. Thanks." Denki smiled at the man, turning back to Izuku and whispering. "What campus is around here?" Izuku blinked. "I have no clue." The guy grunted, throwing his head back to talk to them. "Mine, idiots. My campus is around here." "Duh." Izuku coughed, trying not to laugh. "Right. Silly me. We should have known." Denki spoke up, grinning a bit. "Sorry. ISS okay." The guy brushed off, placating them as his head dropped back down again. "I forgive you." "Well, thank you," Denki smiled. "That's very nice of you." The man nodded. "I am nice. I am also Natso." "Natso?" Izuku questioned. "Ding. Ding. Ding." He cheered a bit, grinning at them. "Got it in one." Denki blinked. "Oh. Then, my name is Sparks." Neat name, Lil Bro. Natsu hummed, obviously happy with their responses. Izuku cleared his throat. My name is Hiro. Natsu nodded, looking at him intently. You certainly look the part. Good on you? Izuku smiled. Thanks. Natsu nodded, then grumbled, unlike Endeavor. Izuku hummed non-committally, not wanting to encourage a potential I hate all heroes speech from the drunk man. Natsu nodded, speaking up again unprompted this time. He's such a selfish bstrd. Having his own FING birthday and acting like the day is special because he was FING born. Izuku blinked, looking over to see Denki also looking completely clueless about why this guy was ranting about today being Endeavor's birthday. Such a shitty father, you would think he'd be able to reach numero uno by now. He ranted, breathing heavily afterwards. That SCKS, dud. I'ma throw up. Natsu announced, ripping himself from their grips and tossing his head into some nearby bushes, throwing up into them. Izuku looked around, feeling so lost as he went back up to Natsu and rubbed his hand around in circles as the man threw up. He hopes this wasn't how most people got when they were drunk, or else he had no desire to try drinking anytime soon. Denki handed the boy a napkin and Natsu quietly thanked him as he wiped at his mouth, making a face when he swallowed and stood back up. So gross. Natsu muttered. Denki snickered, nodding along solemnly with Izuku as they finished their way to Natsu's dorm and led him to the front doors of the apartment complex he was staying in, waving him goodbye as he disappeared inside and up the stairs. Holy crap. Denki finally whispered when they turned around and started walking around the city again. He was hot. Izuku cuffed him over the head. Don't say that. Then, he glanced behind him and huffed. He was gorgeous. Oh, I swear to God, that man is so fine. Denki buried his face in his hands. Who looks good after they throw up? No one, that's who, and yet he still managed it. I'll never get over this. I completely understand. I'm simping for a man I'll probably never speak to again. Izuku nodded. It happens to the best of us. Denki groaned loudly. Izuku could only allow himself to nod again, doing his best to avoid outright laughing at his friend's predicament. His phone went off and Izuku glanced down at it, his smile dropping. Zelda, Eraser is in Shizuoka tonight. Be careful. SHHHH it. Izuku whispered under his breath, typing back to thank them for the heads up. Denki tilted his head. Sheet, what? What's going on? Apparently Eraserhead is in the city tonight. Izuku whispered, moving towards an alleyway, watching as Denki quickly followed him. Who's that? Denki asked quietly, looking around in fear. Izuku paused, glancing back at him. Aizawa. Denki's mouth dropped open and his eyes bulged. What? Sure. Izuku looked around wildly, freezing when he saw something hop across a rooftop. Oh shit. Midoriya? Stay still. Izuku spoke shakily, eyes locked on the moving shadow that was headed straight towards them. Denki whimpered, whispering as he panicked. I am so not ready to see Aizawa right now. Oh my god, move. Izuku whispered, freaking out as he plastered himself to the side of the wall and Denki dove behind a dumpster while Eraserhead jumped across them from up above, landing on the next roof. They held their breaths, only daring to breathe out when they heard Eraserhead move around and jump to a different roof, obviously not noticing them. Izuku put a hand to his heart and leant back against the wall as Denki fanned his face, trying to get some air as he hunched over. I'm too young to have heart attacks like this. Denki wheezed quietly, pretending to collapse on the ground. Izuku couldn't help but agree with him wholeheartedly. He was not ready to see Eraserhead either. Not anytime soon. Nedzu sat back in his chair, slowly sipping his tea as he looked over his former students' files. Kaminari Denki. Officially missing as of 17 hours ago. He was, of course, looking to review the facts first before he told his staff what was happening. Not for the sake of sheltering Aizawa or some other stupid reason, but because he needed a moment to calm down before he looked at his staff after the school day let out. Humans constantly thought that he was incapable of emotions, that since he was different from them biologically, he must be missing something, as if he was a lesser form. The prejudice tended to work in his favor, so Nedzu didn't complain too loud, but he was well aware of what his staff thought of him. Brutal. Strict. Literal. Someone fit to take the role of a dictator rather than a democracy. Nedzu let rumors dance throughout his school, building up his reputation until he became as cryptid as he wanted to be, nearly being thought of as worthy of more respect than they showed each other. So he kept quiet, lying in wait. Times like now were when he entertained the idea of storming into the teacher's lounge and screaming louder than present Mike was capable of, demanding to be listened to by his impulsive staff and oh so naive teachers. Well, more like teacher. Nedzu had always had struggles with Aizawa using the loopholes he had intentionally written into the staff handbook, wanting them to have their own sense of freedom without completely letting them off the leash that came with a contract. And yet, Aizawa constantly acted like the dog who thought he was walking his owner. It was, to put it lightly, infuriating. But he refrained from doing anything irrational at the moment. No matter what he felt, Aizawa was still under a contract that would take several months to break, even longer if Nedzu wanted the man to be blindsided by his unemployment. There was a specific way he wanted to deal with Aizawa. Although the man had one of the highest rates of success in the heroics industry from UA, his teachings and punishments were odd. Nedzu truly believes the man still has potential he hasn't been able to reach, believes in the kind of positive impact Aizawa could make, but he needed to be reformed first. Which was where Nedzu was still plotting. Reforming a teacher and hero as stubborn as Aizawa was not going to be an easy transition for anyone. Just last year, Nedzu had held 34 meetings, all about how to expect failure from students and teach them how to build the students back up from their temporary losses. The beginning stages of the reformation plan worked well enough, Nedzu thinks, especially since last year Aizawa had expelled his entire class and, although it was to make a point, no one came back when they were invited because no one wanted to learn under a teacher who expels them to make a point. This year, only 2 students have been expelled so far. Small victories. He looked back towards his computer, wondering if he should bother with his paperwork for the day before he began working out an intricate plan to either rope Aizawa back in and make him better than ever or fire him. He didn't mind doing paperwork the same way his staff grumbled about the meaningless task, but Nedzu found it to be nearly as calming as good tea was. Nedzu perked up at that, wondering if he should make himself some tea when he heard his phone buzzing. He opened up his bottom drawer, grabbing his phone and opening it, answering before he looked at the caller ID. "This is Nedzu speaking," he said quickly, the phone to his ear as he relaxed into his chair and turned his attention towards his computer, opening up the police database for the inevitable case he'd be given after this conversation. The man on the other end of the phone cleared his throat. "Nedzu." He perked up, smiling a bit. "Hisashi-kun." The man huffed, presumably at the honorific, and Nedzu smiled wider, looking intently at his desk. It turned out this conversation wouldn't end with homework on Nedzu's part. It had been far too long since he had heard from one of his favorite pupils. "How's things been?" Hisashi casually asked, and Nedzu could almost imagine the careful trap he was in the middle of laying. He didn't say anything though, too excited to see what point Hisashi would like to make. "Things have been well," Nedzu responded, unable to stop feeling his heart lift, something close to fondness saturating his words. "The school year has been hectic, but nothing worse than the previous year." Hisashi chuckled politely. "I bet. How have you and Inko been?" Nedzu asked politely, because if small talk was what Hisashi wanted to start with, he wasn't going to deny him, and tensed as he awaited his student's carefully crafted answer. "We've been well," Hisashi said, his obvious love for Inko coming through the phone. "And I got transferred back to Japan by the company, so now I'm back home with her." Nedzu smiled, happy to hear that. He was wondering when his request to that company would go through. "Good to hear," Nedzu said earnestly, making every word. "Say," Hisashi started, and Nedzu leaned forward, ready for anything the man would say. "Do you happen to know a Kaminari Denki?" Nedzu blinked. That was not what he thought they would be discussing. "I do," Nedzu confirmed, giving away as little as he could. Apparently Hisashi could see through his poor efforts because he chuckled into the receiver, leaving Nedzu to listen to the smug man. "How do you know about him?" Nedzu asked, his curiosity unable to be kept at bay. "He's one of ours now," Hisashi finally said, full of confidence. Nedzu blinked twice. "He's officially missing. PSHH. We'll fix that later," Hisashi brushed off, probably moving his hands around as if he was trying to wave away Nedzu's thoughts. "Besides, he's not missing anymore." "So he was missing," Nedzu said, tilting his head. He couldn't help but wonder how the man acquired the child in the first place. Hisashi laughed. Tomato, tomato. You said tomato the same way twice," Nedzu couldn't help but point out. He could see Hisashi grinning at him before shrugging his shoulders, like it didn't matter. "Anyway, he's safe," Hisashi moved on, abandoning their earlier topic. "But I learned something interesting while he was here." Nedzu flicked his eyes over to his security cameras, seeing Aizawa walk down the hall, and pretended not to know what Hisashi was asking about. "And what would that be?" "Quick question, when you play dumb, does it ever actually work?" Hisashi spoke, amusement filtering his harsh words. Nedzu sniffed and raised his snout, feeling a bit slighted. "As a matter of fact, yes. I genuinely hope you don't employ any of these people." Hisashi grumbled into the phone, sounding exasperated with him. Nezu kept quiet, knowing for a fact that he employed most of the people who seemed to forget who he was whenever he asked dumb questions. Hisashi sighed. You know, that's almost impressive. Almost? Nezu asked, sickly sweet with his words. Hisashi chuckled awkwardly. You know what I meant. Anyway, Denki seemed to be having trouble in school, Hisashi started, tone light and casual. Any idea what the teacher did to him when Denki messed up? Hisashi. Nezu, I thought we talked about this last year. Hisashi spoke up sternly, not shouting but his voice raising slightly. The hair on the back of his neck stood up and Nezu felt his hackles rise. We did. Nezu confirmed. Hisashi sighed. You promise you'll call if you want an extra set of eyes for any of your plans, alright? Nezu clicked his tongue. I promise. Promise what? I will not engage with these silly games of yours again, Hisashi, Nezu warned, vividly remembering the first time he had tried to get Hisashi to sign a contract. We're much too old for that. All you gotta do is promise me properly, Hisashi teased. You remember how to do that, don't you? Nezu rolled his eyes at his old student. I've never forgotten a thing. Wonderful. Hisashi cheered. Then promise. Nezu sighed. I promise to call if I need an extra set of eyes to go over my plans. There was a silence and he fondly imagined Hisashi nodding his head in acknowledgement, forgetting that Nezu couldn't respond to that over a phone call. Bakugu, Hisashi spoke up before he hesitated with his next words, clearing his throat again, and Nezu imagined him shaking his head at himself. He's doing much better in UA, courtesy of Hound Dog. Nezu answered the unspoken question. From what I've seen, he's been excelling in the class with minimal outbursts. Hisashi breathed out shakily. Thank you, Nezu. His heart lifted again, that fondness coming back in full force. I made a promise. I'm well aware, sir. Hisashi laughed. Nezu let silence envelope them for a few seconds before he finally asked the question he'd been meaning to since the first day of school. How's your young pup? Better, Hisashi answered easily. The boy didn't have much trouble figuring out his new school, so at least the process was painless. Nezu nodded. I'm glad. Heh. Me too. Nezu stared at the wall in front of him, wondering what he should say to his pupil. There was a part of him that thought he had let the man down in some way by not being able to let his young one prove himself for longer. After all, family was family, and he's positive letting young Izuku walk out his office with resignation letters from UA disappointed the teen, ruining any potential relationship he could have had with him. Nezu sighed, tapping his paw impatiently. Hisashi. We're okay, Nezu, Hisashi promised, a fond tone leaking through. Happier than he would have been, I'm sure. Nezu nodded, looking out of his windows, looking across UA's beautiful yard, and hummed to himself as he wondered to himself if Hisashi was lying for his sake or if they were truly doing better than before. Right. Good. He finally responded, sounding more thoughtful than he meant to. Yes, well, I've gotta get going. Parental duties call once again and such, but don't be a stranger, alright? Hisashi pushed. You know Inko would love to hear from you. Nezu wiggled his ears, glancing around his empty office for a moment. Yes, I'll make sure to do that. Heh. Talk to you later, Nezu. Hisashi spoke fondly, not waiting for his own goodbye before he hung up the phone and Nezu was left in his office, alone. He kept staring out his huge windows, hands clasped together as he put down his phone and smiled lightly, his whiskers twitching and his tail swishing a few times. Perhaps he should meet back up with the humans he considered family. He knows he would enjoy seeing them again. And maybe, just maybe, he'd be able to meet their offspring. Officially, this time. Okay. Who were our first 5 prime ministers? Hisashi DMN near yelled out. Who the hell knows that? Denki yelled out, looking stressed. Izuku hit the buzzer, chewing on his lip as he thought about it. 5-second grace PRD, Hisashi called out, holding the stopwatch obsessively. 5, 4, 3, 2. Okay. I got it. Izuku frantically called out. It's Ito 1 and 2, Kuroda, Yamagata, and, Washington. Denki blinked at him. Washington? Who the hell is Washington? Hisashi asked, looking at Izuku weirdly. You know, Izuku shifted. That one white guy. Denki blinked. Wasn't his name wait, are talking about the American? Greg Washington or something like that? George, Hisashi mindlessly corrected before he shook his head. Not the important part. Bud, Washington was never one of our prime ministers. Oh. So, the points goes over to Denki's side. I hate this game. Izuku grumbled. Too bad, kiddo. Hisashi grinned, flipping through his cards to find another review question to ask them. Haha. Denki grinned. Izuku pouted harder. Boys, Inko called out. Food is ready. Hisashi sprang up, abandoning their game in favor of racing to his wife's side, and Izuku rolled his eyes at the display, laughing when Denki pouted at not being able to answer another review question. I would have won, Denki pouted, mumbling loud enough for Izuku to hear him. Izuku, the mature person that he was, rolled his eyes and stuck his tongue out at the other boy, racing away when Denki shot him a wounded look. Hey! Boys, Inko yelled out. Come on. Without responding to Denki's protest, Izuku made his way further into the dining room, looking around to see the meal his mother had worked hard to provide for them. Izuku gave a gentle smile, looking towards his mother, who was laughing at something Hisashi whispered into her ear as he passed by her, proceeding to pretend he had nothing and placed the steamed buns in the center of the table. Still never won a fight against me. Inko sang out, a smirk on her lips as she set out the silverware. Hisashi grinned at her, his eyes filled with a nauseating amount of adoration as he looked at her. I never could. She rolled her eyes as he held out the chair for her and she sat down, still pretending to be exasperated with him. Maybe you just were never capable of doing so. It feels like a trap if I answer either way. Hisashi pointed out, not even bothering to fall for her tricks as he piled more food onto his plate. Inko huffed out a laugh. I'm sure there's a right answer out there. Somewhere. I'm sure. Hisashi grinned, pouring her drink like he always did. Izuku was about to throw up. Were his parents always this bad? Or was today special for some reason? He had no idea, and with the way things were happening, he didn't want to know. It disturbed him if he thought about it for longer than 2 seconds, and even that felt like he needed to take his brain out and scrub it with a toothbrush. He shuddered, an appropriate response to his parents' banter. Let's eat. Hisashi called out, and the oddness of seeing his parents as loving as they were being was broken. Both Denki and he jumped in their seats, ready for the meal, and they said their thanks before quickly digging in, eating up as much as they could possibly stuff themselves with. This is perfect, honey, Hisashi groaned, eating more and more, obviously not being hindered by any human limitations when it came to his wife's food. Izuku made a face at the man. Denki, the little deviant, laughed at his dramatics and stuffed more food in his mouth as their parents turned to look at them. Yes? They both asked, tones deceptively light. Izuku shook his head and stuffed more rice in his mouth, shrugging, as if to say whoops, now I can't respond, sorry, and his father laughed at him, finding amusement in his ridiculousness. Denki huffed, but didn't say a word as he shoved more food in his mouth. So dramatic, Izuku whispered to him, grinning when Denki narrowed his eyes. You're one to talk. You want to do this, cowboy? Denki leaned in. Let's dance, twinkle toes. You boys going out tonight? Inko asked, raising her eyebrows at them like she already knew the answer. Both boys snapped to attention at her words, ignoring their bickering in favor of talking to their mother. Izuku shrugged, feeling a bit sheepish as he looked at her, knowing she'd like for him to stay in one of these nights to catch up on the homework that's been piling up for the past few days. We've got to introduce him to the group. Wait, what group? Denki asked, immediately intrigued. Izuku grinned. You'll just have to wait and see. At that, both boys ate faster than they had been before, and Inko, the saint that she was, pushed them out of the kitchen, insisting she'd finish up the house chores tonight so they could get their things around and ready for their trip. They hung out, Izuku grinning at the questions Denki was throwing his way, not giving the boy any information while they waited for the late trains to start running. He didn't really want to get there too early, especially since he had promised Denki earlier they wouldn't be doing any vigilante duties for the night. It's 10, Denki announced. And at that, the boys tumbled out of their room, smiling as if nothing happened when their parents looked at them, amused smirks on both their lips. You guys going? Hisashi asked with an easy tone to his words. Izuku nodded. Yup. Denki confirmed. Alright, well, be careful boys and make sure to protect each other. Inko called out as she put her book down and came over, hugging them both before walking around them, going into her bedroom for something. Izuku turned to Denki. Well, you ready? Let's get going. Denki answered, more than enthusiastic to join him. Izuku grinned. Let's do it. They headed out, their bags heavy with their vigilante gear, and hopped on the late-night train. It was a quick ride into Toyota, though that could have been because of how late it was. The train screeched to a stop and both boys walked off, Izuku shaking his head as he went towards the bathrooms. He had been in his head all night about whether or not it was the right time to bring Denki into this, but, well, the boy was a brother now. And Izuku just knew he'd love the entire group when they finally met. Izuku held the bathroom door open, Denki ducking inside with him, and they pulled on their vigilante costumes for the night, both boys pulling up their masks before slinging their bags over their shoulders and walking out, towards the building he now knew well. Denki looked around, his eyes wide, and Izuku took them the long way around, allowing the boy to look around the city they were in. Looking around, Izuku enjoyed admiring a few things he hadn't really looked at in the few times he had been here. The town square being one of them. Though it could be bright and lively, right now it was dark, everyone asleep as the clock struck midnight, the comforting lights hung around the outside of the shops still brightening up their path. The square, as Izuku had discovered the first time he had come here, was more of a circle, with shops lining the outside ring and a magnificent fountain in the middle. "Whoa," Denki muttered as he spun in a slow circle, taking everything in. Izuku nodded. "It's cool, right?" More than that, Denki spoke with wonder, the feeling saturating his words, making Izuku see the world a bit brighter than before. "I mean, look around us, bro." Izuku smiled, his inquisitive mind running around, thinking about how well built the architecture was in this city while Denki let his own mind wander, wonder coloring his world the way it always did when he was presented with something new, only finding the glory of it all. "It's impressive how clean they managed to keep everything," Izuku commented, the question of how the city managed to maintain itself in a way Musufatu hadn't been able to achieve quite yet coming to the forefront of his mind. Izuku shuddered, getting déjà vu from the thought. Denki hummed. "I bet we could look into it. See if there's something we can do back home." Izuku smiled, nodding along with the other boys' thoughts. "That would be an interesting side project," he murmured, more to himself than anything. "Well," Denki grinned, turning back to Izuku. "What else can you show me?" Izuku mirrored his grin. "Come on." They weaved through the darker alleyways, getting further east of downtown, towards the more densely populated areas of the city. Denki frowned as they went past the last high-standing building, a law firm. "What happened over here?" Izuku glanced around, his heart squeezing a bit as he noticed where they were. "We're in the southeast county limits right now," he explained carefully. "We're no longer within the city limits." Denki blinked, looking around. He could see the questions plaguing the boy's mind, wondering why there was such a difference in the way the prefecture took care of these people and their infrastructure. Izuku simply kept walking, unable to answer any of the questions the boy had. Try as he might, there was simply no justification for the staggering difference between the neighboring sections. Denki, as distracted as he was, silently followed Izuku and didn't notice the boy had stopped until he ran into his back, grinning sheepishly for a moment before snapping his attention over to the building Izuku had been staring up at. It looked to be a 5-story building, something that seemed to be tall on this side of town. It was a nice brick, with strong-looking windows on each floor. Above the front door, the building read VCR Repair Shop, though Denki had no idea what that even meant. "What is this?" Denki asked when Izuku just stood there, not providing any answers. Izuku grinned and crossed the street, getting closer towards the side he had used to climb up the ladder. "Hey!" Denki protested, jogging after him. "Come on," Izuku giggled, beckoning him, stopping in front of the door to the garage entrance. Denki huffed, stopping in front of him. "I was so not ready for exercise right then, Izuku." Izuku grinned at him, waiting for a few seconds before knocking loudly on the door thrice. Denki's eyes widened, arms thrown up in a protest. "What's the password?" He heard Sloth growl from behind the door. "Shadows," Izuku answered back, wondering to himself if there truly was a password or not. "That's a good one, kiddo," Sloth laughed as he pulled the door open, dressed in the same sweatpants and a faded t-shirt he had been when Izuku had first visited the garage. Sloth looked over questioningly at Denki, tilting his head. "Your first night here?" Denki awkwardly grinned. "Am I that obvious?" Sloth, instead of answering him, just barked out a laugh and pushed the door open further. "Come on inside, boys." Izuku nodded, slipped past the door and took in an easy breath. Denki spent his time looking around the place as he cautiously went through the door frame, eyes watching everything. It wasn't really a repair shop inside, he realized, but rather a spacious garage. To the left of him, there was a car lift, an old rusted car sitting on it. To the right of him, there was a huge garage door that, after giving it a few seconds of thought, Denki was positive he'd never seen on the outside before. But, then again, he hadn't really looked at the building when they had gotten here. Of course, there was a desk shoved into a far corner near the car lift that looked as chaotic as the man who owned it, and there, right in front of him, were a lot of people sitting and standing at a long picnic table, with food lining the middle. "Don't take your shoes off in here," Izuku warned him cryptically, whispering in his ear. "There's a couple of spots on the ground that I don't think are oil." Before Denki could even think about that, he heard someone shout for Izuku, obviously noticing their newest arrivals. "Hero! Over here!" He looked over to see Agner waving him over and Izuku smiled, pulling down his mask to rest on his neck before walking over to join him. "How's it going, guys?" Izuku answered then, Denki hovering around him, clearly unsure what he should be doing or who he should introduce himself to. Midoriya ignored him, eyes locked on Denki. "Who might you be?" Denki whipped his head over to her. Me. Me?" Denki nodded. "That's me. I'm me." Izuku gave a short laugh, though he covered his mouth as quickly as possible, earning an elbow jab from his brother. "I take it he's still working on a name," Zelda answered as she sat down at the table across from Agner, setting her plate of food down in front of her. "So, it's nice to meet you. Call me Zelda." Denki nodded. "Okay. I'm Midoriya, by the way," the girl grinned as she introduced herself. "And call me Agner." The boy shouted out, excited to see another boy join the group. "So, not to be rude or anything, but how does everyone here know each other?" Denki couldn't hold himself back from asking any longer, baffled at the sheer amount of people in the garage. His ears burned when he realized the entire garage had gotten quiet, hearing his question and falling short on an answer for him. It remained quiet for a few seconds too long until Izuku gave a short laugh. "Turns out, we were all expelled by Aizawa at one point or another." Denki looked at all of them and frowned. Of course he expelled all of the cool people. He grumbled before anyone could ask him what was wrong. Agner belly laughed, tears filling his eyes as he waved Denki over and people welcomed him into the group much more easily than the stilted introductions he had done earlier. The boys walked around together after they left the garage, spirits high and dancing. Denki decided they needed to explore the town square more and so they did, walking around with giggles fueling them further than they needed to go, sleep deprivation slightly kicking in for the both of them as they cackled at every single thing. "Please," Denki laughed, tears in his eyes as he casually kicked a small rock around. "You can't say anything, at least, not according to Agner." "Oh, really?" Izuku grinned, pretending to be taken aback by the boy's words. "Not you too." Denki laughed, stumbling a bit as he did so and Izuku did his best to immortalize the moment until he heard hushed voices in the alley close to them, panicking as he slapped his hand over Denki's mouth and pushing him closer to the wall of the building next to them to try and listen to their conversation. "Don't be so stupid," some guy scoffed. "Follow all for one's orders or end up with your head on a stick. Your choice." The other guy huffed. "You act like taking over the commission will be the thing that wins his favor. It certainly couldn't hurt us. Not at this point." "So?" The man sighed, looking around the area. "Whatever. It's not like the heroes deserve any compassion after what they've put us through. Might as well see what kind of damage we can do from the inside." The other man laughed, something cruel lurking in the sound. "Try to keep up with me. Wanna make a bet out of this?" Their voices faded out, laughing and betting with each other about their tasks to come. Izuku slowly breathed out and stepped back, away from Denki, mind racing too fast for him to formulate a complete thought. "Should we tell someone?" Denki whispered, obviously nervous about what they had overheard. Izuku shrugged, carefully planning on how he wanted to explain this to his mother and father. The only problem was later. He settled on, well aware of the things he wanted to do before he told anyone what they had overheard. Denki looked hesitant, but nodded along anyway and Izuku promised himself to tell Denki about his plans when he started properly working on them. "I promise," Izuku whispered, looking intently at the boy next to him. When Denki nodded again, much more easily than last time, Izuku smiled. Feeling as though Denki was comfortable with their decisions for the night, Izuku stepped back, towards their home and Denki followed after him. It was a quiet walk back, the train ride even more so, and, though Izuku wished he had it in him to speak with Denki about anything and everything, his mind was too busy thinking about what they had just heard to pay attention to something as taxing as a conversation. They snuck through the front door, doing their best to creep around and silently walk around, slipping off their boots and hanging up their bags in the genkan. Denki went to take a shower first and Izuku followed quickly after, seeing the boy fast asleep when he came back to their room. Smiling a bit, Izuku grabbed the comforter and pulled it up further on Denki's chest, whispering a small, "good night," before grabbing his laptop and heading out to the living room. Groaning as he fell into the couch, Izuku cursed himself for being so hopped up on adrenaline that he couldn't sleep, even though he felt 5 seconds away from passing out. Ugh. What a terrible state to be in. Izuku flipped open his laptop, annoyance flickering through him when he realized that he had to be present enough to finish up his homework for the day, or, if he was wanting to be an overachiever, the new coming days. There should be a way to do homework without being awake. Izuku grumbled to himself, squinting as he turned down his brightness and logged in, waiting as it took forever to open up. He tapped on a few random buttons, wincing when the laptop finally opened up and turned his brightness all the way up, completely unwarranted. Grumbling, Izuku turned it back down and stared at his background, a random picture of the aurora borealis dancing at him, before he finally opened up a tab and made his way into his schoolwork files. There were a few perks to doing online school, Izuku thought to himself. For one, he didn't need to worry himself over his safety every time he went to school. Though they had scheduled calls as a class, Izuku didn't know any of his peers and his peers knew nothing about him. On top of that, the resources the school had to offer had long hours, so even if Izuku was getting homework done at an obscene time, he could still have access to help should he need it. Overall, the entire process impressed him. And, well, of course he missed going to school physically. Izuku was, above all else, a social person. It was, quite literally, his downfall in previous schools. Always talking to people who wanted nothing to do with him. Later on, figuring out how to be quiet though he still strained his ears to listen into other conversations, wanting to feel as though he was a part of something. It was something that held him back from truly following the rules that had been ingrained into his mind since the start of middle school. It was something he was incapable of dealing with. Total isolation. Though having only one or two friends was something Izuku could thrive with, being totally isolated from people his age had never worked out well for him in the past. He, as much as he wished otherwise, needed someone to be near. So yes, while online school was the best option for him, it didn't beat physically going to school and being able to learn surrounded by peers and people the same age as him. Honestly, Denki moving in with them and deciding to share a room with Izuku had been a sort of a lifesaver. With the constant interaction, someone to always talk to and joke with, Izuku was doing much better than he realized he had been. Really, it always seemed to sneak up on him. The way his days got longer and his mind wandered further. Only people he trusted were capable of bringing him back from that. And now, luckily, Denki had been named one of those special people. He's sure if he had the time, he'd feel the same way about the shadows. The group proved themselves to be amazing, to both him and Denki, so Izuku will forever be grateful for that, but, well, experience tells him he needs closer people. Someone to actually lean on. For the longest time, that was his mother. That was who he went to for everything and anything, worrying with her, crying with her, laughing with her. Now, as he grows, he's excited to let Denki help him the same way his family has, because, in all but blood, Denki was now his brother. And they were going to lean on each other now. Izuku frowned, clicking on the link to his textbook over and over again, getting frustrated as he kept tapping with no results from his efforts. Close to tossing his computer across the room and dealing with everything another day, his tab finally opened up. And then another. And Izuku could only curse at himself as his computer finally loaded the hundreds of times he had clicked the link into a new tab. With a long sigh, Izuku watched as all the tabs loaded, popping up one after the other, making his night that much longer to deal with. Quicker than he expected, the tabs stopped popping up, resting at the millionth one that had opened, rather than the billion he had suspected it would be. And there, right in front of his face, was an ad staring at him mockingly. He stared back at the headline of the ad campaigning for an intern position in Osaka for the HPSC, and Izuku had to blink a few times to make sure he was seeing it right, unable to believe his luck. Well, hopefully it was luck. He clicked on the ad, being taken to their official website and over to the page where their application process started, with a little info pocket on the side. Without meaning to, Izuku spent a good chunk of time exploring their website, looking through what it meant to work for them and how an internship would look at his age. He looked through what they did to the help that they got and what kind of office work he'd be doing. He looked through dozens of comments made by current employees that were hired in through the interesting program and read through their countless praises about the work environment. He had his doubts about the place though, even after reading all of the praise directed towards them. Actually, all of the praise made him more suspicious than he was before, so much so that he didn't even realize what he was doing until he got halfway through the application and stared at the screen in front of him with shock, not understanding what he was doing. He kept going regardless, because a small part of him that he didn't want to acknowledge just yet knew that he'd be going through with this, whether he was going to find anything or not. He chewed on his lip, staring intently at his screen for a good 5 minutes before he finally submitted the application, trying not to rethink his entire life as he shut the laptop and forced himself to go lay down and get comfortable for the night. He wondered if he made the right choice by submitting that thing to the sharks at the HPSC. He hoped that choice wouldn't come back to bite him in the butt later on.
Okay, sadly the chapter is over, and if you enjoyed the video just leave a like, and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.